Shanks did a thing, a very impressive thing, because a whole 25 years after being introduced, Shanks has performed a single attack. And it may be one of, if not the greatest attack we've seen in all of One Piece. And you know, I feel really bad for Eustace Kid fans, because they've spent their existence desperately trying to justify his, and this is how they're rewarded. But seriously, what exactly did Kid expect to happen? What did anyone expect to happen? Kid decided to invade the only island in the world dedicated exclusively to breeding warriors, and on this island there so happened to be an Emperor of the Sea, all of his commanders, and his grand fleet. Also, this chapter felt like it was cut short, just like Kid's hopes, dreams, and now physical body. Before we commence Eustace Kid's official funeral service though, there are some very important introductions made in regards to the grand fleet of Shanks. These guys, the guys, they are very relevant. They might seem like a bit of ornamental chapter set dressing, especially since they're also wacky and cartoony, like there's a guy who's literally losing his teeth, but they are actually the key reason as to why things here play out so brutally. So first up, we have Padded Toe Gerotini of the Puddle Pirates. He's a frog, or he's a man obsessed with frogs. It doesn't really matter because all we need to know is frog. Gravetooth Fugger appears, leader of the Social Club Pirates, which in essence seems to be the floating retirement home of the New World, where I assume all of the frail geriatrics gather together to play lawn bowls. But the most interesting of the trio is Paniki Pudududu, captain of the Bourgeois Pirates, and she is almost certainly connected to Cavendish, who was prince of the Bourgeois Kingdom, and Pudududu perfectly matches their 18th century French nobleman aesthetic. But these guys are a classic example of Oda being able to flip emotions like a trap card. They are jokes, they are introduced as jokes, they're weak, they're wacky, they're classic One Piece. Not at all what you'd expect of someone like Shanks, who commands a core crew of very sleek and very cool looking individuals. Even the monkey musician looks cool, but that's why this is so perfect. This fleet is said to be notoriously weak, not just these three pirates. The entire organization is a joke, with this entire situation presenting Shanks as the antithesis of his emperor counterpart Kaido. Kaido was a dude guy who only accepted the strong into his crew. He's a guy who would never care if his crew were beaten or killed, as it would only reinforce that they didn't deserve to be there in the first place. Whereas Shanks has the opposite approach. His extended forces seem to be made up of potentially exclusively weak individuals who he protects at all costs. And that small piece of knowledge completes our emperor dynamic. Because in our original group, Big Mom and Whitebeard were also antithetical emperors. Big Mom had this focus on blood relations with a strong fear of the parent, whereas Whitebeard had a focus on found family and love of the parent. So it's kind of funny, in the pre-time skip era, you only had the following 4 options as a pirate. 1, you become the son of Whitebeard. 2, you become the son-in-law of Big Mom. 3, you can pledge your strength to Kaido and hope that's enough. Or 4, if you're weak and you know you're weak, then you can flock to Shanks. And this may be planting the seed of a potential Shanks death in the future, because it's easy to see him getting into a situation like this with a more powerful opponent, looking into the future and sacrificing himself for the lives of those he cares about. You know, the classic hero-y stuff. Because as an individual, after this, I'm not sure if Shanks can be beaten in straight combat. I think the only way to make him vulnerable is to play dirty, and target his massive collection of frogs, old men, and whimsical socialites. But this is why Shanks had no mercy against Kid, because 25 years later, all of this still comes back to chapter 1. You can pour drinks on me, you can throw food at me, you can even spit on me. I'll just laugh that stuff off. But good reason or not, nobody hurts a friend of mine. I think that if Kid didn't target the fleet, this might have been resolved a bit more amicably. And by amicably, I mean Shanks not wiping the Kid pirates off the face of the earth. I think this will go down in history as the easiest 3 billion berries ever made. It took Shanks less than 10 seconds to earn the equivalent of around 22 million US dollars. And it's tax-free. So the books are looking pretty good for Shanks Incorporated. Now in Kid's defense, Shanks was the only character who actually took him seriously. Everyone else just kind of shrugged him off, even the fleet. And that may also be why Shanks activated No Mercy mode, because he could see the potential that Kid had. He's not like Big Mom and Kaido, who were so arrogant that they would decide to play with Kid like a toy. Those two see no risk in making objectively poor decisions. Shanks even asks if Kid is still wounded after Wano. So as much as he could, Shanks wanted a fair fight here. However, since his opponent was Kid, he was never going to get that. But seeing Shanks use Future Sight was one hell of an experience. For an ability that shows the future, we as an audience almost never get to see that future beyond a small cryptic panel here and there. Even with Katakuri, we never saw his visions with this kind of depth and I guess this kind of tangibility. From an artistic perspective, this is Oda showing us that Shanks has far superior Future Sight, because it even allows us, the readers, to peer into it. But if I'm not mistaken, Oda has also set up that Shanks can see even further into the future. Kid made a point of saying that he would destroy the fleet in 10 seconds, and I don't think that was an arbitrary piece of dialogue. It shows us that Shanks can see at least 10 seconds into the future, which is a massive extension on the handful of seconds that Luffy and Katakuri can see. Also, the face he makes whilst using future sight is legitimately terrifying. This is the first time I've seen Shanks and been genuinely afraid of what he can do. In this chapter, he's more of a monster than Big Mom or Kaido could ever dream of being, and that was juxtaposed directly against the more chill close-up of Ben Beckman, who's even smiling after seeing Shanks' war face. He's completely relaxed, because Ben Beckman has that much confidence in his captain. I don't even think the Straw Hats have that much confidence in Luffy. This crew is something else, or more accurately, I guess I should say this captain is something else. And then we get our first Shanks attack in the series. Shanks has been in combat before, but always in a defensive nature. He was forced to clash with Whitebeard, and he blocked Admiral Akainu. But now we finally get to see what happens when Shanks actually plans on fighting. And Dead said, well, it's not pretty. I mean, it's beautiful in its own horrifically powerful way. The attack he uses is called Divine Departure, and that actually comes straight out of the Roger playbook. This is the move that Roger used against Kozuki Oden, sending the strong samurai flying far, far away. It seems to be a bit of a BM attack, a sort of, well, you're not ready to fight me, so please depart. It's almost like swatting a fly, the whole whoosh. And in a way, it reminds me a lot of what happened to Luffy in Act 1 of Wano. Luffy leapt into a fight deep in enemy territory. No plan, no sanity, just confidence. Lots and lots of unearned confidence. And he was obliterated in one move. But something equally as epic was Dory and Broggy delivering the finishing blow. Because their words were basically the giant equivalent of, well, F around and find out. They used Hakoku Sovereignty, which is a legendary attack in the series. We saw them use it on the Island Eater back during Little Garden, but Big Mom and Kaido also used their own incarnation of this during the raid. Their version was called Hakai Sovereignty, and it remains the strongest single attack ever performed in One Piece. All of which is to say, when this attack gets used, there is no hope. This is the pinnacle of "you're screwed," which resulted in the destruction of the Victoria Punk, which is actually quite sad, because the story behind this ship is that it was named after Kid and Killer's deceased childhood friend, Victoria S. Dorionaika, the S standing for Shuruton, and the English translation being Victoria Broth Splatterina. Funny name, very funny name, but sad story, very sad story. And I think this is the biggest indicator that the Kid pirates, they're done. The destruction of this ship was symbolic of the destruction of their hopes and wills and dreams and all the things that is that One Piece is about. They don't have them anymore. And it reminds me a lot of when the Moby Dick was destroyed during Marineford. That was the moment, right then and there. That is when we knew that the Whitebeard pirates were over. So I think that Kid is out of the Pirate King race. He has no ship, no poneglyphs, and no hope. Although I doubt he's dead, since I don't think the Red Hair Pirates are just gonna let him drown, but he's well and truly out of contention for Pirate King. And he deserves it. Kid is a moron. However, I do feel really bad for Killer. This whole time he was all like, bruh, are you sure that this is what you really want to do? Are you sure? And each and every time Killer tries to stop him, Kid's just like, yes, Killer, I am 100% certain that putting my dick in this blender is the right thing to do. Now stop complaining and plug in the power. It's almost a Gon Killua style relationship from Hunter x Hunter, an abusive idiot who constantly gets beaten, paired with an empathetic best friend who does everything in their power to protect said idiot. But the funniest thing is that Kid was legitimately shocked when Shanks showed up, and it's like, why? You just declared war on his entire naval fleet. And then when Shanks shows up to deal with it, Kid's all like, Red Hair, what are you doing here? This was unexpected. And you know, usually I have a bit more empathy for the defeated, but Kid, mate, this kid never learns. Because this isn't the first time this has happened. It's not even the second. This is the third time that Kid has been wiped out by either an emperor or the forces of an emperor. He should know better by now. But Kid doesn't see the problem when sticking his dick in the blender. In fact, Kid thinks that, all I need to do is get a different brand of blender and everything will work out. As epic as the chapter was, I've lost all respect for Kid. And the fact that he made it this far, how? I'm attributing that entirely to Killer. This defeat was so brutal and so swift that it's almost like the start of an isekai anime. The main character is killed in the real world, and now Eustace Kid is off to start my new life as a garbage can in another world. For so long, we thought that Kid was going to be the Whitebeard to Luffy's Roger, but as it turns out, Kid was the Gecko Moria of this generation, aimlessly leading his crew into repeated death and destruction for no discernible reason. And this makes me fear quite a bit for Law as well. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a chapter soon with a similar ending to his conflict against Blackbeard. Some sort of ominous narrator quote saying that the Heart Pirates have been annihilated, and another 3 billion berry man has fallen. Although come to think of it, Kid was doomed no matter what. In fact, running into Shanks was his best case scenario because he could have chosen just not to engage. But the other options were he runs into Blackbeard, or he goes to Egghead Island and gets caught in the middle of Kizaru in like 100 marine ships. So after leaving Wano, his fate was sealed. Wait, no, it wasn't. All he needed to do was not be an idiot, and he probably would have been fine. Speaking of Mr. Blackbeard though, Shanks mentioned something very interesting, as he expected Teach to show up at Wano, assumedly to take advantage of Kaido's defeat and secure some sort of poneglyph or maybe even an ancient weapon, but he didn't. And I guess that's why Shanks was there, to thwart a potential attack on the island from Blackbeard. But because Blackbeard didn't show up, Shanks went, well, what do I do now? I guess I'll promote Film Red. That's what I'll do. But he was originally there for the attack. And it's yet another Shanks-Blackbeard connection thread. Blackbeard is always on Shanks's mind. It's one of those you need to get yourself a partner who thinks about you as much as Shanks thinks about Blackbeard. But with all of this kid shenaniganry, it's easy to overlook by far the most interesting part of the chapter, which is that a Blackbeard pirate vessel has been spotted by us, the readers, no one else, but spotted just outside of Egghead Island, managing to arrive before the Marines, which is quite fascinating timing. And this may be York's contingency plan. The world government, as they often do, have altered the deal and betrayed her. However, if there's anyone in this world willing to take in the psychotic personification of greed, it's Blackbeard. And once offered a slice of delicious cherry pie, I'm sure that York will have no complaints. But this is huge. The presence of the Blackbeard pirates may very well be the element that leads into the shocking event of Egghead Island in the next day, and we are going to be diving into that discussion in the next video. The most legendary Marine has finally arrived, and he has unleashed one of the most powerful attacks ever seen in the series. Garp the hero is actually serious, and I was not expecting this, because usually we don't get to see these kind of global events actually playing out. They usually just happen over there, somewhere off screen. But not only that, we have new characters with new devil fruits, old characters also with new devil fruits, and even old characters with old devil fruits. And for a chapter that consists of almost exclusively action, there was a ton of information dropped as well, specifically in regards to a certain sword. But let's begin with why any of this is actually happening in the first place. Because that's all due to our boy Kobe, who right now has his own personal impel down and Marineford arcs playing out simultaneously. It's actually quite fun to see him following Luffy's footsteps, but on the other side of the field. And also, we get his official bounty. Kobe is a very luxurious 5-star boy, primarily due to his hero title, although apparently captains would usually go for a measly 1-star. And even that's interesting because we now know that each star corresponds roughly to 100 million berries, meaning that Marine captains in this economy would be considered almost as valuable as the supernova when they arrived on Sabadi. It reminds me a lot of when Doflamingo put the 5-star bounty on Usopp during Dressrosa, and I think for very good reason. Because not only were the rewards worth exactly the same amount, but even in our current system, Usopp is worth 500 million berries, which is the exact same value as Kobe. And I know it's just this one, but I am really into this Marine bounty idea. I like that Marines can now interact with pirates on the same plane. Along with Kobe, there are a ton of prisoners from a wide variety of races. Amongst this group, we see a long arm, a snake neck, and what I think is a mink. They're not just prisoners, of course. They're actually slaves intended to be sold, which is a bit of a dick move even for pirates. Doflamingo was really the only pirate who took advantage of slavery, and that can be explained with his world noble heritage. But by and large, it seems to be one of those things that is a bridge too far for even the worst of all of the pirates we know of, like say Yokkaidos. So Blackbeard being willing to cross that line puts him on a whole new level of sinister. But all of these slaves seem to know Kobe, and I think there's a good reason for that, because this chapter implies that the famous Rocky Port may actually be a location on Hachinosu. And Kobe became a hero by protecting civilians during that incident, so I wonder if these prisoners may be some of them. But also, I do question why anyone would care about the citizens of Hachinosu, considering that it was under the control of Ochoku. And by care, I mean from the perspective of the world government publishing news about heroes and stuff. Why would they care that Kobe protected civilians in a pirate-controlled territory? I don't know, I mean, the Rocky Port incident continues to be almost like frustratingly drip-fed to us. But Perona makes a surprise appearance in this chapter, requesting that Kobe free Gecko Moria, which Kobe proceeds to not do. Now, I will say that Gecko Moria, he impressed me during this chapter. He wasn't even in it, but he impressed me regardless, because I did not expect him to decline Blackbeard's offer. So it's cool to know that he stuck to whatever guns it is that he has left. So I shall reward him with a very rare and unusual nod of respect. The part of the chapter with the most intrigue was definitely the Blackbeard flashback. And may I just say that Blackbeard, he is a phenomenal interior designer. As much as I wanted to be absorbed in what he was saying and all of the things that were going on, I was just far too busy admiring Blackbeard's pirate den. So many bold design choices like palm trees, the plants, massive torches, lavish curtains, steel chains, dangling lanterns, and an understated yet essential coffee table. These elements have no right to work together as well as they do. And I love that Blackbeard insists on having plants in his rooms because that is the same thing I do. I think that every room is just completely lifeless and stagnant without a plant. However, what I found incredibly what I didn't expect was Blackbeard's bizarre plan to try and use Kobe to officially join the world government. I'm just gonna say it, this is kinda lame, because it's like actively taking a step down from being an emperor. Instead of being the undisputed lord of my own empire, sure, I'm willing to settle for being a mere king. And I get that this is probably just one more step in Blackbeard's ultimate plan, but it's just so counter to his current position. Although I suppose it may be a very sneaky way of making him the pirate king via a technicality. So let's put it this way. He's a pirate and then he gets officially recognized as a king. Therefore, Blackbeard becomes the pirate king. But he can't possibly expect the world government to give this even a single thought though. Not after how he already betrayed them as a warlord. I mean, they know what's gonna happen. They know that he's just gonna betray him again. Mr. Kuzan is here and he gives us the best explanation of Sword to date. However, I can't help but feel like Kuzan is doing a bit of a self-report here, because everything he says about Sword very much applies to his current situation. It's also interesting because his demeanor is so, I guess, appropriately cold. So I can't get a read on what his intentions are here. On the one hand, he might be trying to take Blackbeard's attention off Kobe. However, by doing so, he is devaluing Kobe and making him more disposable. As for Sword itself, this is actually huge, but it consists of Marines who have resigned their commissions and thus exist in this awkward gray area of still needing to take orders but also being free to pursue their own personal justice. So I guess it's not a secret society because Kuzan implies that it's fairly common knowledge amongst the Marines and the world government, but also it kind of is a secret society because Blackbeard's never heard of it. So I'm very much interested in how Sword actually functions, because I can see Sakazuki implementing something like this because, you know, sometimes absolute justice calls for absolute drastic action, and Sword members could be very useful scapegoats utilized for the greater good. But also it would have been implemented prior to Sakazuki's reign as Fleet Admiral, because Drake was assumedly a Sword member pre-time skip. So this is at least a Sengoku era endeavor. Seeing the Blackbeard pirates on Hachinosu was a lot of fun because we almost never get to see them without the commanding presence of Teach. So for one of the first times, we get to see how the crew interacts without their captain, which I loved because that is one of my favorite parts of the Straw Hats as well. I really like seeing their dynamics in Luffy's absence. So it was really fun to watch everyone arguing over who would cause the most damage to the island, an argument which is completely negated by Garp just strolling in and dropping the fist equivalent of a nuke, but we'll get to that in a bit. Because Sanwan Wolf appears for what I believe is the first time post-time skip, and he is dressed very much like an Elbathian giant. And while we've known about his devil fruit for quite a while, this is the first time that it's been named. It's the big fruit, and it makes you big. However, if you already start out big, then it makes you big. I have to say, Vasco Shot is quite a fascinating devil fruit, which looks like it allows him to conjure and manipulate alcohol. Also, I believe he's just started watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure because he has a new star tattoo on his face, which we haven't caught up until now, because his other appearances post-time skip all involve his thick phallic nose covering that specific area of his head. He also appears to be so drunk that it gives the illusion that he's using armament haki on his nose. Avalo Pizarro was amazing. I love his devil fruit, even if it is just a different brand of what Pika was able to do. But what I really love about it is that he used the fruit to make Hachinosu itself talk. That skull did not have a mouth before now. So this is just Pizarro messing around and making the island talk like a South Park Canadian. And you know what? I legitimately would not be surprised if the only reason why this devil fruit exists is because Oda wanted to draw the giant talking skull island, because that's what he does. He thinks of something he wants to draw and then just jams it into the story. But with this, we should be able to narrow down who is at Egghead Island currently, because on Hachinosu we have Shiryu, Pizarro, Vasco Shot, and Sanwan Wolf. I was about to use two hands to do Sanwan Wolf, I think, because he's so big. But then on Winter Island we have Teach, Doc Q, Van Olga, and Jesus Burgess, which leaves us with Katarina Devon, Lafitte, and Kuzan unaccounted for. Although the problem with Devon is that she could be anyone, anywhere, at any time, like say one of the slaves in Kobe's group, etc. I think the more interesting new abilities definitely come from the Sword Invasion Force though. Prince Gru in particular has a really fun fruit that allows him to create clay golems, which reminds me a lot of Cracker's biscuit fruit in that he's able to puppeteer these very convincing creatures. Or actually, because they're golems, they may actually be living creatures, because they do appear to be capable of speaking and thinking for themselves to some limited degree. Oh, and also Gru gave me some Doflamingo vibes in that panel where he's got the little clay version of himself herself just like puppeteering. We also have some focus on Kuchaku, a character that we did see at the G14 base, but not one that was named. However, she has quite the heritage, being the granddaughter of the famed Suru. And like Suru, Kuchaku also has the name of a bird. Kuchaku means peacock. And her fruit is, well, the fruit is, it's something. Despite the heavy sexual overtones, it's actually incredibly useful, allowing Kuchaku to manipulate the location around her, which in the context of military tactics is like going into a war with creative mode on. That's something I really appreciated about this chapter in general. We almost never get to see any kind of tactical warfare, because this series is about pirates, and pirates are chaotic, and the Straw Hats in particular are very punch first and think later. But the strategy being used here is almost identical to what happened during Marineford, luring the pirates into an enclosed space and then smacking them from above. Hibari is also here, and at first I was really confused about what was going on with the flowers, but these are actually the special GP flowers that we recently saw in the Germa cover story. The ones that a very deranged looking Vegapunk won a peace prize for. I guess the logic is that you fire some sort of tiny seeds that rapidly grow in the gunpowder. I'm not actually sure. I don't actually care. It's pretty cool. It's cool either way. And I definitely did not expect these flowers to actually become relevant, so that in and of itself is also cool. Also, Hibari definitely got her tsundere on in this chapter, with the whole "don't get the wrong idea, Kobe, you baka. I didn't come here to save you or anything," which I think it's kind of meh. I've never really liked the tsundere archetype. I mean, it might be fun for a high school romantic comedy, but it feels a bit out of place here. However, what feels perfectly on point is Garp's Galaxy Fist, clearly using Conqueror's Haki, and not only that, but this may be the most devastating use of Conqueror's Haki we've seen to date, because Garp is nowhere near those buildings, yet he's able to project his Haki far enough to just obliterate everything, including very potentially his own protege. But like, we're used to seeing Conqueror's Haki something like this, where there's like a clash happening and there's like a teeny bit of space in the middle, but this is on a whole different level. It really puts into perspective just how lucky Sakazuki was to escape Marineford with his life, and also just how powerful Sengoku was to be capable of holding Garp down. As alluded to before, there's a very sweet moment where Garp calls Kobe his protege, a moment which is then followed by Garp firing a galaxy punch directly at his protege. But Kobe is the grandson that Garp always wanted Luffy or Ace to become, and Garp's words about Kobe being the future of the Marines hit me right in the shanks, because it's very similar to what he believes about Luffy being the future of pirates and the willingness to invest in that. It really makes me want a Luffy-Kobe team up. And maybe that's the Roger Garp alliance of this generation, Luffy and Kobe versus Blackbeard. Also, Garp, amazing entrance, but I'm pretty sure you plagiarized that maneuver. I have no doubt that the flying ship was inspired by seeing the Thousand Sunny take off at the end of Order 7, and Garp here has probably just done his own version. Whether he threw the ship or just punched the air like really hard, doesn't matter. Either way, I love it. It's also very similar to how Luffy entered Marineford, of course. And with that in mind, I'm starting to worry a bit for old Garp, because what he's doing right now I think can be described as very Whitebeard. Invading the territory of a global superpower to retrieve a single human at a ripe old age, and potentially setting himself up for one legendary last stand. I'm not going to worry too much for now though. I think I'm going to start worrying if Blackbeard himself shows up, because I think that Garp is he's too big of a character to be brought down by, I don't know, Vasco Shot. But I am definitely starting to worry about Garp, and I'm realizing that I'm not quite ready to lose him yet. These sorts of chapters leave me feeling ominous in general though, because so many times in One Piece we've been hit by a heroic showcase only to have the situation very swiftly flip. Like when the vassals had their moment against Kaido. They had some very glorious chapters, not many, but some. But heroes winning that easily, it isn't particularly dramatic. And things are really only going so well right now because none of the heavy-hitting Blackbeard pirates are actually doing anything. And you know, there's a reason why they were level 6 prisoners, and there's a reason why they're the Titanic captains, and next up, I think it's their turn to take the stage, with all of their new and wacky fruit powers. And we'll be doing a deep dive on every new devil fruit introduced in this chapter in the next video. Garp versus Kuzan, the man who refused to become an admiral versus the man who stepped down from being an admiral, but also a man whose downward journey has yet to be completed, as Garp has thrown him through the floor. Meanwhile, the long-awaited sequel to Cocaine Bear has finally arrived, and due to the power of, checks notes, drugs, Beppo has successfully saved his captain. Although Law himself has lost the fight, he's lost his ship, his crew, his poneglyphs, and even the A and the W from his name, thus leaving him known only as Trafalgar L. And whilst all of this is happening, color spread kanji is reading a book on cocking, thus confirming the allegations spread by ever so many doujinshi. This was a really big chapter. One Piece was on break last week, and it will unfortunately be on break again next week, but that's fine because I feel like we've had a galaxy's impact worth of content. The first panel where we see Garp is phenomenal. The way he's shaded combined with Oda's Haki effect makes him look like a statue brought to life, like some sort of mythological figure spawned into existence as a very serious boss battle. And the shot of Garp standing in front of his ship very much reminded me of Marineford when Whitebeard stood in front of the Moby Dick. Although these aren't parallels that I particularly want to draw, because I'm hoping that things end up a bit better for Garp. However, the general destiny of a mentor is to die. I love that Garp was disappointed with the results of Galaxy Impact because it is such a good contrast. The readers and even the in-world onlookers were all astounded by one of, if not the most powerful attack we've ever seen. Meanwhile, Garp was just like, mate, that was a bit rubbish. It's very classic One Piece old man speak, because Silvers Rayleigh said similar things in the past, like, oh, this old boy is not what he used to be. And I think I speak for most, if not all of us, when I say that we need a spin-off series featuring Garp in his prime, or an extended flashback in One Piece itself showing Garp in all of his glory, because damn Ichiro Oda, you are such a tease. Oda's just sitting here like, you think Galaxy Impact was great? Well, just wait until you see all of the things that I'm not gonna show you. In this section, we confirm that Tashigi is not a member of SWORD, although I think that was implied by her introduction box at the G14 base. And actually, I wonder what her connection to everyone here is. It's really strange. This chapter made me realize that we've not really seen Tashigi interact with anyone who is not a smoker or a G5 Marine or a Straw Hat. And in fact, it still feels really weird to see her without Smoker in particular. Prince Gru was really fun, especially when he stated his whole rivalry with Kobe. It was very classic shonen with the whole, I won't let him outdo me, blah 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 blah. And really, this entire group of Marines could be the protagonists of their own series. We have Kobe as the main character, and then you've got figures like Ru, Kujaku, and Hibari all filling those very stereotypical shonen roles. With our big twist here being the appearance of Mr. Kuzan. And really, I think this is the best case scenario for what could have happened on Hachinosu, because it creates fantastic marine-based drama. And it also once again narrows down who could be on the outskirts of Egghead Island. With Kuzan's location confirmed, all we have remaining are Katarina Devon and Lafitte. So one or both of them is almost certainly on that ship, unless Oda chooses to focus on some lesser Blackbeard pirate members. Like Peachbeard. Remember Peachbeard? You know, come to think of it, it feels like it's been ages since we've been on Egghead Island. I mean, with all the breaks, it's been what? It's been what, like a month since we last had some story happen there? Probably my favorite part of this week's story was the flashback though, because the Blackbeard pirates have such a fun crew dynamic. Despite being the ultimate antagonist of the series, this scene was just pure fun. It's very similar to watching the Straw Hats just eat and drink and interact, and I feel like Kuzan would probably get along with both groups equally. And I love how naturally Kuzan took to the Blackbeard pirates, because he's in a situation where he's surrounded by an Emperor of the Sea as well as all of his commanders, but this frosty boy could not care less, because Kuzan knows that he's the one with leverage in this situation. And in fact, Blackbeard has this look of sheer terror on his face when Kuzan even implies the possibility of battle fighting commencing. So despite no longer being an admiral, Kuzan still retains his very commanding presence. Oh, and also, is it just me, or was this scene surprisingly funny? Kuzan joking about the Sakazuki fight, and especially the bit where he breaks his own leg off to demonstrate his lost limb. And I might be wrong about this, but is this the first time in the manga that we've actually referenced Kuzan's missing leg? I'm not sure. It feels very nostalgic to me, because I know the first time we discovered this was actually through One Piece Film Z, when the Straw Hats found him in a bath and we saw the full-on ice leg. I honestly can't remember if we've seen it in the actual manga though. So I guess if you haven't seen Film Z, then this might even come off as a bit of a wow moment. This whole part would seem to paint Kuzan as much less of a rogue sword agent doing justice and such, and more like a man struggling with his own internal justice compass. I'm also intrigued by Blackbeard stating that he has his own definition of justice, but then again, he really could just be saying anything to woo Kuzan to his side on their first date here. We also flag a bit of a mentor-mentee or even father-son dynamic between Garp and Kuzan. In fact, very much the latter when Garp does the whole, boy, you'd best do the things it is that I say, to which Kuzan replies, no, Garp, father, I'm my own man and I will do things in my own manly way. In general, I think Oda does a great job of letting us into the character of Kuzan a bit, but simultaneously revealing nothing, because anything is still possible. He could be a justice plant playing the long game, or he could legitimately be a member of Blackbeard's crew. And the latter wouldn't disappoint me because it opens up the potential of seeing just how much the Straw Hats have grown since Long Ring Longland. It would be great to see them taking on Kuzan in their current form for that contrast alone. However, the most intriguing section is obviously when they start discussing the man marked by flames, which was actually marked with another funny gag. I loved it when Kuzan Kuzan was like, you mean me? I didn't realize that I had the poneglyph. Because it's almost like Kuzan is speaking directly to the fanbase because he was very high on the speculation list. But this guy, this flamey Maki man, sounds like he was ripped straight out of a real-world pirate legend, sailing on a black ship and causing whirlpools to anyone unlucky enough to come near him. And other than directly referencing Davy Jones, this is probably the most piratey this pirate manga has ever sounded. And just as a note, Luffy was caught in a whirlpool at the beginning of chapter 2, so I'm not trying to draw any conclusions here, but it would be pretty funny if Luffy accidentally stumbled upon this man in East Blue right at the beginning. And so it looks like the final road poneglyph may also be a mobile cube, much like how the Zou poneglyph was always on the move. And I guess that makes sense because they are the only two undiscovered ones. To get back to Kuzan and Blackbeard, the threat Kuzan made was very interesting. The idea that he's pacifying Blackbeard because his quake attacks could end up shattering his own crew. Because really, Kuzan could go on to do the same thing with Garp. Hibari's already frozen, and if he freezes a few more people, perhaps even a certain Kobe, then that may prevent Garp from doing further galaxy impacts or other massive AoE style attacks. But as for the current results, our admirals have had, well, less than great outings lately. Firstly with Green Bull's retreat on Wano, and now with Kuzan having his head smashed in on Hachinosu, meaning that the admiral stocks are currently falling even faster than Kuzan himself. Actually, I did want to talk about that. Garp sending Kuzan into the ground reminded me a lot of what Whitebeard did to Sakazuki, and I wonder if that's a common strategy to deal with really overpowered Logia users, to violently plant them in the ground and restrict their movement as much as possible. But even though it's Garp we're talking about, I highly doubt that Kuzan is done. The only way that this is the end is if Kuzan is secretly working to save Kobe and needs a convenient excuse to tell Captain Teach. Even then, that all feels just a bit too easy though, because we've gone to a lot of trouble to set up this whole Hachinosu incident, what with the whole taking over the Kobe. So is it really just going to be resolved like that? I don't know. I don't think so. I hope not. But this chapter does give us confirmation that Blackbeard is still currently on Winter Island, which is good because his movements in particular have honestly been quite difficult to track. He's made a big old mess of this timeline, but we have a mirror to the Kid Pirate situation on Elbaf, a very tragic, broken, and uncleaned mirror, because that shot of the Polar Tang destroyed and sinking was heartbreaking, much more so than the Victoria Punk in my opinion. Because the thing about the Polar Tank is that we have a connection to that ship. The Polar Tang has saved Luffy's life twice now, both in extremely dire and important situations. Once at the end of Marineford and once in Onigashima when Luffy got knocked off. So it's not quite going merry levels of sadness, but I definitely feel a loss here. And also this is the signifier that the Heart Pirates are out of the Pirate King race. They're not dead, just like how it's very unlikely that Kid and his crew are dead, but this is a full stop to their pirating ambitions. Blackbeard even says it in the chapter. He's all like, without a ship, you can't do the pirating. So I'm keen to see what both Thor and Kid end up doing from here, now that they've become painfully aware that neither of them are the main characters of this story. Sulong Beppo though, mate, what a beast. And seeing him take on Blackbeard was amazing. And it may even be the highest bounty differential fight we have ever seen. The 500 berry Beppo swinging away at the over 2 billion berry Blackbeard. And again, Blackbeard was genuinely scared by this, which is crazy because I never know how to read him. It really does feel like Blackbeard has multiple personalities and one of them is this Usopp style coward. I also find it pretty funny that whenever the Blackbeard pirates show up, they have a tendency to either lose outright or get outplayed. And I love it because it's such a stark contrast to the iron walls that are Shanks, Kaido, and Big Mom. For example, Blackbeard rocks up on Amazon Lily, his crew get one shot. Blackbeard rocks up on Miscellaneous Island where Kuzan is, and his crew get one shot. Blackbeard invades Impel Down, and Magellan one-shots everyone. And I mean the fact that Blackbeard and his crew have made it this far is a pure testament to fate. At first I was also a little bit confused as to how Mr. Blackbeard and his crew seemed to know what a Sulong transformation was, even going so far as to know about the moon part. But that all makes sense because Blackbeard himself did sail with Nekomamushi and Inuarashi aboard Whitebeard's ship, and given their complete and utter inability to shut up, they almost certainly told everyone at some point, if not outright showed the transformation. And it's the same thing with the perpetual youth surgery. Blackbeard seems to know exactly how Law's Devil Fruit functions, and at first I was like, how? But again, it all makes sense. Because you need to remember that Blackbeard knows a lot more about magical fruit than the average person. Really, he is a model pirate because he's done his homework before sitting his battle fruit exam. However, I do feel like Beppo should have maybe used the Sulong form during the raid, although it is pretty cool that Chopper has developed a miscellaneous drug to unlock it. I imagine it works via a very similar principle to his Rumble Balls, unleashing a partial or even full awakening. I mean, minks aren't devil fruit users. I mean, some are, Becomes is, but sort of mimicking the the awakening effect, because Sulong, I guess, is kind of a natural awakening. But I also feel like this is Oda basically inserting an easy way for Minx to get involved at full power without needing to structure a conflict around a full moon. And also, so much credit to Beppo for saving Law's life here. This is exactly what a first mate is for. Because when your devil fruit using captain has water-related problems, then you, as the non-devil fruit using first mate, have to step in and do all the swimming, much like how Zoro would for Luffy. Although, and yes, this is a pun, on the polar opposite of that spectrum, we have the unfortunate case of Eustace Captain Kidd, whose first mate is also a fruit user, and thus the only option that's really available to them is to both sink together. But also, Blackbeard now definitely has Law's poneglyph rubbings, so the race between the emperors is officially on. Luffy, Shanks, and Blackbeard have swiftly and decisively become our main players in this final saga, and it's now a competition to see which of these factions can find the man marked by flames and attain that final delicious mystery cube that reveals the location of Laugh Tale. All four emperors are officially in the race to become the Pirate King, and this is Buggy's finest hour. He is no longer a joke. For the first time in this series, Buggy is driven enough to stand up to both Crocodile and Mihawk and drag them into the greatest conflict that this world has ever seen. And I was genuinely moved by Buggy in this chapter, because he's always been a character I've appreciated, albeit mostly for meme status, because I have a big bias towards the more wacky aspects of One Piece. But I think this is the first time that I've had a genuine sense of respect for Buggy. I'm not exaggerating at all when I say that this chapter has completely changed him as a character. What began as a very persistent court jester, failing upwards for our entertainment, has turned into a heartfelt pursuit of dreams, which is so perfectly in line with the core themes of One Piece. In fact, we get to see every side of Buggy in this chapter. The snake oil salesman putting on a deceiving show, the wacky comedy clown with the ship is amazing, but also a legitimately heartfelt flashback and a sense of very uncharacteristic bravery, as well as the Luffy-level drive to become the Pirate King. But to open up, I absolutely love that the majority of the scene takes place with Buggy's head hanging on a hook like a household pot plant. It's such a morbid yet hilarious and efficient method of Buggy storage. But what's happening in this scene is so much darker than I originally thought. Because when you go back and look at these panels, there's some pretty disturbing devices in this room. Like the throne of spikes, the stocks, the rack in the background, and all sorts of other medieval torture devices that tell us that Buggy has had a more harrowing experience than I initially suspected. And I guess putting aside the logistics of exactly how these devices actually work, given Buggy's fruit powers, that aside, I think this adds a ton to his big moments, specifically in that hammering home that Buggy has been broken. His shell of lies has been shattered, his body quite literally taken away from him, and all Buggy has left are his dreams and desires. So what does he do when all else is taken away? Well, he surprisingly, despite the lack of feet, steps up, and despite the lack of hands, claps back at Mihawk and Crocodile, which was so unbelievably satisfying. And let's be real, Mr. Buggy has more leverage than I think even he's aware of, because Crocodile and Mihawk need him. They can't convince Buggy's crew to betray him and follow them instead. They are just far too loyal for that kind of thing. And when you think about it, it is kind of pathetic, really. All Crocodile can do is physically torture Buggy. He can't threaten Buggy's life because he needs that life. So if Buggy can endure the pain like he has been, then he's in complete control here. Which is why I loved it when he lectured Sir Crocodile and Dracula Mihawk about what it means to be a pirate, and the idea that the pursuit of wealth and power are secondary factors. Because as I've noted previously, Cross Guild actually have the perfect formula for Pirate King. Crocodile brings the wealth, Mihawk brings the power, and Buggy brings the fame. These three odd gentlemen in their odd alliance could be nigh on unstoppable. And the fact that Crocodile and Mihawk have no comeback to Buggy shows that his words hurt them far more than any torture they could possibly inflict on him. They basically said the equivalent of, "Oh yeah, well you're just a stupid clown." And I can't get over that. The idea that Buggy the Clown just took Mihawk to pirate school. And that isn't even his finest moment here. In fact, it's not even the second best. Because this flashback was something I don't think I ever expected to see of Buggy. To think that after all of these years, Oda would deliver a solid, heartfelt explanation for why Buggy refused to join Shanks on that day. It's a thing that's never really made sense, but also because the thing has to do with Buggy, it's not really been necessary for us to linger on. But this is tragic. One of the panels in this chapter that hit me hardest was the one where Roger was patting Shanks on the head with Buggy watching in the background. It's so sad that this is the identified moment where Buggy gave up on his dreams, but also not completely gave up. It's more like a Zoro situation where Buggy became willing to sacrifice his dream to make sure that Shanks achieved his. Also, a bit of wild speculation here, but what if this is the moment where Roger gave Shanks his straw hat, and that's why it had this effect on Buggy? Because with the hat, Shanks then became the clear inheritor of Roger's will. Although regardless of exactly when and how that happened, this does take us back to Orangetown, because this explains why Buggy was so irrationally hateful of Luffy and Shanks, because seeing that straw hat on the head of Luffy likely reinforced the idea that Shanks had given up on following in Roger's footsteps, because he gave away his captain's straw hat. And to who? Just to some guy who then went on to kick him in the balls. So what are you doing, Shanks? This is not on. Although I think the craziest part is that yes, there is a world where Buggy would have joined Shanks's crew. And really, if anything, this is all just a soap opera-esque miscommunication. Because Shanks didn't immediately state the desire to go to Laugh Tale and become the next Pirate King, Buggy ran away in a fit of betrayal, believing that there was no hope and eventually settling for his mediocre life as an East Blue pirate, gradually becoming more and more jaded until he turns into the Buggy that we meet at the beginning of the series. And then over the course of One Piece, Buggy has been dragged kicking and screaming back towards his dream. And I mean, there is so much in this chapter that makes me feel things that I never thought I'd feel for Buggy, and I am a big Buggy fan. And part of the subtle brilliance of this flashback is that both Crocodile and Mihawk were there when this took place, potentially mere meters away from Shanks and Buggy. So it hits them hard because it makes them think back to Roger's execution and the desire it spawned. With Crocodile in particular, because he did just flat out want to become the Pirate King. And all of this culminates in one panel where Buggy tearfully declares that he wants to become the Pirate King, which I think initially hits me really hard because it's very evocative of Robin's I Want to Live panel. And you know, they're in very similar situations actually. Robin was captured by overwhelming power and had absolutely nothing left except a dream and a desire. And now Buggy, in the most pathetic state possible, states his desire to do the most impossible thing in this world. It's powerful, I love it. And it makes me think that, you know, yeah, Buggy could do this. He could become the Pirate King. There's also something really profound in that Buggy understands what stirs the heart of each and every person who makes that decision to become a pirate. And with that, I think we finally discovered something that Buggy did inherit from Roger, because he goes on to make this incredibly stirring speech, reigniting the hopes and dreams of his crew. And you know what? It may very well be the third greatest speech in pirating history, because this sort of thing has only really happened a couple of times before. Once when Roger started the Great Age of Piracy, and once when Whitebeard claims that the One Piece exists. Plus, not only is Buggy thinking bigger than Crocodile and Mihawk, he's also thinking smarter, identifying that becoming the Pirate King isn't about fight battling your way to the top. When all is said and done, it is a race to find the treasure. Honestly, I think I am riding a bit too high on Buggy hype right now, but he gives me serious Luffy vibes. Whenever Luffy says that he is going to become the Pirate King, I believe him. But also here, when Buggy says all of the things he says in this chapter, I believe him as well. I think he can do it. I legitimately think he could. Laugh Tale could appropriately be found by a clown. Meanwhile, the reactions of Crocodile and Mihawk are absolute gold. Crocodile is fuming. He is beyond furious because he knows that there is no going back from this. In fact, he almost certainly understands the situation better than Buggy does. And from here, Crocodile has two options, neither of which are good. He can either go on to try and claim the One Piece, or he can leave Crossguild. The second of which would not be prudent because of how heavily financially invested he is. But the reaction that fascinates me more is Mihawk, because he's not so much angry as he is fearful. As the representative of power, Mihawk understands exactly what it is to come into conflict with figures like Shanks. And what Buggy has essentially done here is commit Mihawk to not only fighting Shanks, but two other emperors as well, which is exactly the thing that Mihawk did not want to do. He just wants to live peacefully and be left alone, but now he's going to be targeted by the Marines and 3 of the 4 emperors. And also from Mihawk's perspective, he's not exactly in the best company to be taking these fights, given that Crocodile and Buggy have both lost to the Straw Hats in the past. I guess more notably Crocodile than Buggy, but Mihawk is assessing the situation here as a one-man army. With that said, I couldn't help but get shivers when Mihawk mentioned the Straw Hats alongside the Red Hair Pirates and the Blackbeard Pirates, effectively equalizing them. And in my mind, I have a bit of a wacky headcanon where Mihawk is just thinking, wait, you want me to fight Roanoa Zoro? No. Sort of like what he did with Shanks at Marineford, the whole, nope, I didn't sign up for that. But this does actually bring Zoro's dream finally into focus. focus. With Crossguild making a genuine play for Pirate King, a time may come when Mihawk stands in the way of Luffy's dream, and the only way to ensure that his captain becomes Pirate King is for Zoro to finally face Mihawk and achieve his dream, like a 2-for-1 dream deal. Oh, and speaking of dreams, I have to linger on Buggy's new ship for a second because it may very well be my favorite ship in the entire series. I love the chibi Buggy figurehead, as well as the intricate circus theming of the entire vessel. It's so detailed, it looks grand and powerful and just like a big flex, a big old flex. Sort of like the Queen Mama Chanter, a ship that was so excessively large and detailed that it projected the wealth, fame, and power of Big Mom through design alone. It's glorious, just glorious. But for now, also, we have a big shock. The first page of this chapter completely floored me by announcing the death of Vice Admiral T-Bone, who actually, last I recall hearing, was only a Rear Admiral. I think it was the SBS of Volume 98 that stated his rank as Rear Admiral. So I don't know if he was promoted, or if this is a translation issue, or if this is a consistency issue, or if it's even an issue. I don't think anyone but me cares. But I did find this very sad because I have a lot of nostalgia for good old T-Bone. As far as Marines go, he is about as pure good as one can get, which actually leads me to this idea. There is no way that the civilian we saw was capable of bringing down T-Bone. So I think that one of two things happened. One is that T-Bone faked his death to help the starving family, and the other is that T-Bone actually allowed himself to be killed so that the family could claim his bounty. Because if you don't remember T-Bone, that's just the kind of guy he is. He was ready and willing, honestly a bit too willing, to sacrifice himself in order to preserve life, just any kind of life. T-Bone's motto was 100 good deeds a day, he detested violence, and he was also a vegan. So I could definitely see him doing this. And perhaps that's why the old man dude guy was so sad having claimed the bounty, because he knew that he had just robbed this world of a legitimately good person. However, it was the only thing he could do to save his family. Tragic. And now, let's talk about Sengoku. He has dialogue in this chapter that really is more for the readers than the actual character. The whole part where he says, yeah, what is this world coming to? Because Sengoku knows exactly what this world is all about. But it's an invitation for Suru to remind the readers of exactly what the world government is. The fact that half of its nations are composed of starving people in poverty because they pay 99% of their GDP in tax to the world nobles. Sengoku knows that. He is not that out of touch. But we need to really hammer home that we now live in something of a free market bounty economy. And in a way, the world government is starting to reap what they've sown. And to add another glorious Buggy moment, Suru even gives him credit for this system and just how effectively it threatens to destabilize the Marines, thus spreading the legacy of Buggy even further and even higher up the ranks. Really, it's genius on a whole nother level though, because people who claim the Marine bounties then become wanted criminals by the Marines, which means that these bounty hunters have little to no option except to then go on to join Buggy's crew. So he's not only getting rid of his enemies, he is also recruiting people. And these crew members have a great sense of loyalty because Buggy has provided them with opportunities to do stuff like, feed their starving families. And really, it's almost like joining an alternative revolutionary army, a more circus-themed army. And speaking of, Mr. Sabo is back. I don't think anyone actually believed that he would be dead, but he has extremely important world-shaking information from the Reverie, and we'll be diving into all of that in the next video. 5 years ago, we learned that the Revolutionary Army clashed against two admirals on Marijois in an event that would go on to change the world. This event involved kings, princesses, assassins, a robot bear, and one very ill-fated flame boy. It's crazy to think that we're in 2023 and we're still talking about the Reverie. You could actually step back in time to this point in 2018 and we're probably having very similar discussions, because this has been such an Otis Slowburn meta story happening in the background. But he's done teasing it. This is that story, and it's gonna be huge. I'm not gonna lie though, I'm legitimately surprised that this chapter picks up directly from where 1082 left off. I would have bet ever so many units of currency that we were just gonna snap back to Egghead Island. But not only do we stay with this event, but we have quite an in-depth conversation. Firstly, our leaders reiterate the goals of the attack on Marijois, including introducing a new and very interesting goal, but the first of which was to destroy the hoof of the Celestial Dragons. A symbolic gesture of declaring war, much like what the Straw Hats did on any Sobby when they burned down the world government flag. So Monkey D. Dragon, I guess only just now catching up to the prestige of his son. But we actually saw this before in chapter 1054. In fact, much of what we see in this chapter is a direct expansion on the various teasings of chapter 1054. Meanwhile, our second objective is to rescue our bear friend Kuma, which did succeed, although apparently by this time, Kuma was feeling a bit of the old Stockholm syndrome because he immediately went back to Marijois. There was a sub-goal here which was to free as many slaves as possible possible. And whilst a very noble and valiant goal, I don't quite know how well this one worked out. Because sure, you can free them, but what next? The slaves are still stranded on Mari Joie with a very strong marine presence due to the Reverie and no real way to escape. It's very much like what Fisher Tiger did, although if I remember correctly, the only reason why many of those slaves, including Boa Hancock, did escape was due to Shaki and Ray Lee, a story briefly told in chapter 521 titled Hoof of the Celestial Dragon, which I bring up because that's the thing that the Revolutionary Army destroyed, and it's fun to think that we first heard about it almost half the series ago. But it's the third goal that I find most fascinating, the one we didn't know about before now, and this finally makes the whole event make sense in my mind brain. Saving Kuma, whilst a cool thing to do, never really struck me as being worth taking this kind of risk for. Nor did simply declaring war on the world government. I mean, you're the Revolutionary Army, we all kind of assume that. I mean, it is nice and symbolic, but it's also not quite worth this endeavor on its own. So the most important aspect of this operation was to destroy the food supply on Mari Joie, which is a stroke of tactical genius. I think when wars are depicted in more simplistic media, like say, shonen manga, oftentimes authors tend to focus pretty exclusively on the fight battling. To be fair, arguably because that's the most exciting aspect. But the most integral aspects of war almost always boil down to resource management. So the idea here is to remove any method of generating food on Mari Joie, as well as to cut off the supply lines to Mari Joie, effectively putting the world nobles under siege. It's pretty thematically fitting to try and starve the world nobles, because as cruel as they are, the most commonly felt effect of their presence throughout the world is mass starvation. And it's interesting that we're coming back to this idea after Wano, where starvation was Luffy's key driving force. To someone so connected to food, it's an incredibly easy cause to get behind. And if there was ever a reason for him to get into a direct conflict with the world government, I think that starving the planet would be a pretty decent way to get Luffy on board. Then we learned some number stuff. Revolutions in 12 nations, successful in 8 nations, 1 nation wiped off the map. Sounds like a lot, but there are over 170 world government affiliated nations. So look, it's not nothing, it's a big step forward, but we've still got a long way to go. One of the more intriguing aspects of the chapter was seeing the silhouettes of the Holy Knights. Now the scans translated this as God's Knights, and I don't know why, because we do have their official name. The Holy Knights were first flagged in chapter 1054 as the force assigned to deal with the case of St. Charles' attempted murder. But this is really cool because we have the silhouettes of what appears to be 9 knights. And I know I bring this up a lot lately, but it's all I can think about when I see silhouettes. But it's the fact that Oda revealed that he often makes up the story of One Piece according to what cool silhouettes he wants to draw. And so I think this is another case where we're going to create an entire faction simply because Oda wanted to draw this cool panel, which I'm not complaining about. In fact, I think a force like this has been very necessary for a while now. Before this, CP0 were I guess the main military might of the world government, not the Marines, I mean directly at the disposal of the world government, and over time CP0 has proved, well, they've proved inadequate. So for the world government to remain a major threat going into the final events, they basically need their own set of Emperor commanders, especially because I don't think they can continue to rely on the Marines. Sakazuki is very volatile and rather upset Fleet Admiral at the moment. Meanwhile, there is quite a bit of civil discontent amongst the organization itself as well. Eventually, the Marines will probably either separate from the world government under Sakazuki's leadership, or have a civil war amongst themselves. Either way though, this is why we need the Holy Knights. Something to ensure that the world government has a way to stay in this game so that we're not just relying on Imu and his superweapon. It's also been noted that one of the knights does look suspiciously Shanks shaped, and while I don't deny that, I do think it is a bit too vague. A lot of people have pointed specifically to the sword, saying that it looks a lot like Griffin, which is true, but it also looks like Ace, which was Roger's sword, and even the swords that Ray Lee was using. Basically, it looks like a generic cutlass, although that in and of itself is interesting, because a cutlass is a very low-class kind of weapon, something utilized by filthy pirates or lowly expendable marines. Certainly not a weapon befitting some sort of holy knight, which I picture more like Cavendish's sword Durandal. So maybe, just maybe, there is something to this silhouette. And you know what? We can go there. Maybe this holy knight is a clone of Shanks, because that is a thing that happens in One Piece now. We actually cannot discount that as a possibility. Also in the chapter, we see an almost comical picture of Sabo standing over Cobra's corpse on a newspaper. I say comical because it gives me big soap opera vibes, like a series of wild and improbable events leading to this photo shown completely out of context. Although Sabo goes on to dish out some rather harsh reality here, stating that, yeah, he can live with Cobra's death if it has positive results for the revolution. Which to any Deep Space Nine fans out there, this reminds me of the famous "I can live with it" Captain Sisko speech. It gives me that same level of, Sabo, that's a very cold attitude for a very warm and literally made of fire boy. The interesting thing to note point about the newspaper photo though, is that as incredibly guilty as it makes Sabo look, that actually works to his advantage. Because publishing this photo has the exact opposite effect for those who saw Cobra as a compliant part of the world government. To them, Sabo is now their hero, hence the Flame Emperor title. And just as with most things in this world, this is all due to Big News Morgans. In chapter 956, we saw a world government agent attempting to bribe Morgans not to publish this very story, because the world government knew that it would turn Sabo into a hero in certain regions, but Morgans did it anyway. And at the end of this series, I really want to go through and see just how much of an impact Morgans himself had with his decisions alone, because I think it's a lot. And in fact, maybe I don't want to wait. Maybe I want to do it now. After we talk about the Reverie flashback though, because this is something that we've been waiting for over 200 chapters now. We see a lot of New World nobles in this flashback, which I like, because we actually hadn't seen all that many of them in the series to date. I love the world nobles because it gives Oda this unbridled creative license. Because the design brief is essentially create the most disgusting aesthetic character design humanly possible. And I think he came up with some fantastic solutions. Also, a big series mystery finally got an answer, with Karasu's devil fruit being revealed as the Soot fruit, which I believe is a Soot Logia. So instead of a weird hybrid Zoan fruit, as it turns out, Karasu is just one of the best Logia users we've seen in the series. The way he can construct and manipulate crows individually is so far beyond what we've seen from most, if not all, other Logia users. And also, he can make the crows talk, which how? Watching the commanders fight against the admirals was stunning. I think that Oda was absolutely on point for action, and I'm glad we're seeing this, because a lot of people have expressed some admiral-based disappointment over the past few years. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a comment like, 2 admirals couldn't beat a handful of commanders, what was going on? But I think those commenters always fail to realize exactly why that was. Because fighting in Marijois is the worst possible location, because the admirals can't freely use their powers. They're fighting with a fraction of what they're actually capable of to prevent the destruction of the city and the death of its nobles. Although I have to admit, it was pretty funny when Fujitora just said, F it, I'm summoning a meteor, because he has no sympathy for the world nobles. And if anything, he may have seen this as an opportunity to purge the world of some of them. But you really do get to see the full-blown arrogance of the world nobles when that guy threatened to have Green Bull executed. Green Bull, the only guy standing between you and not life. And actually, just on our Green Admiral friend, there is a world where he would have been alone for this event. If not for Fujitora's argument with Sakazuki on Dressrosa, he wouldn't be here. So the world government actually got very lucky that that argument happened, because I don't think that a restricted Green Bull would have been the greatest defense here. What's really surprising was an appearance from classic CP9, who I suppose are all unmasked CP0 agents now. I mean, we knew that Bluno and Califa were CP0 agents from Film Red, but I'm genuinely surprised that it looks like everyone else was followed as well, because what I want to know is why. CP9 had this whole cover story dedicated to them running away from the world government and even rebelling against it. They fought the Marines. And in fact, one of the final installments was Spandam and his father Spandine plotting revenge against CP9 very ominously. So I'm curious as to how they were brought back in and why. Because they failed pretty catastrophically in their mission on Enies Lobby. Doesn't really seem like the sort of thing you would award with a promotion. But the most exciting part of the chapter to me were the montage of events playing out over the last 2 pages, especially including Bonnie and Kuma, because their connective tissue works perfectly, as this is still technically part of the Egghead Island arc. So it's really nice to see that consistent thread running through it. Also Lucci, of course, who we see confront Vivi, which is pretty wild. I know we've seen the 2 of them in the same place before, but it's still a clash of One Piece eras. The Alabasta Saga coming face to face with the Water 7 Saga. And I always love interactions that bring the One Piece world together. I will say the chapter ending it's a bit bland for a typical One Piece chapter. It's not some sort of mind-blowing revelation or a cliffhanger or anything. But to be fair, I think that's because we as readers already know the fate of Cobra. So it's more about the journey of how we get to that point, which is set up brilliantly. This is a Shakespearean tragedy waiting to happen. You've got Sabo trying to free Kuma, which leads him to Pangaea Castle because he's following Charlos, and Charlos is being a dick by trying to enslave Shirahoshi. Meanwhile, Vivi is justifiably worried about Shirahoshi, so she heads to the castle as well, where at the same time her father is meeting with the 5 Elder Stars. And with so many different factions with different agendas, the potential for chaos and misinformation is at its peak. I don't use the word Shakespearean lightly. What Shakespeare excels at is exactly what Oda's doing right now, taking these different characters with different agendas and smushing them together to cause wonderful tragic chaos. It's honestly one of Oda's best set up character chessboards to date. And you know what? It damn well should be, because he's had 5 years to be thinking about this one event. And even then, there are still more figures to layer into this story, including the wild card of Bonnie and the ever terrifyingly present Emu. Narrative shots have been fired from the story gun of Echiro Oda, shots containing ancient monarchs, murdered monarchs, and even former monarchs imprisoning current monarchs. And all of this because Cobra mentioned 3 things: Queen Lily, a letter from Queen Lily, and a D, which is also a letter but like a different kind. How wild was it when Eam just casually strolled into the throne room out of nowhere? I mean, for a gender non-specified silhouette, Imu certainly has quite the 2-pack of nuggets to allow him to risk appearing here, and things certainly do not bode well for Cobra. Although I guess we already knew that with the whole him being dead thing. But this whole return to the Reverie flashback feels like a rapid unwinding of what unwinds? A ball of string, and it's about to reach a sudden and shocking conclusion. Something that did not happen with Bonnie and her unexpected team up with Sabo. I was shocked at just how easily that whole thread was handled. Maybe it's because I expect Bonnie to be a bit of a violent fueled wildcard, but this chapter showed us a completely different side to her. Bonnie was, I'm gonna say, uncharacteristically chill, and that was because she knew that her father's body was safe in the hands of Sabo and the Revolutionary Army. Coming into contact with Sabo was like Bonnie being given permission to finally exhale. Because for this very brief moment in her life, Bonnie had the comfort of knowing that, yeah, everything's gonna be okay. And then it's immediately on to the next thing, Egghead Island, where we get to worry and cry and be angry all over again. The Bonnie-Sabo connection is something to keep in mind though, and I hope it does come up in conversation with either Luffy or Robin. Say, for example, when they do eventually learn about that funky newspaper that shows Sabo is his name. For example, when they do eventually see that newspaper showing Sabo standing over the corpse of Cobra, Bonnie could reinforce that by going, yeah, look, I don't know, mate, that Sabo seemed like a pretty cool dude to me, because Bonnie knows that Sabo is Luffy's brother, right? I think that's been public knowledge ever since Dressrosa, and we did actually see Bonnie reading the newspaper after Doflamingo's defeat. If not though, then the brotherliness was also brought up in the newspaper, which declared Luffy to be the 5th Emperor, and Bonnie pays very close attention to the news. This section was pretty incredibly important though, mostly due to the conversation between the castle guards. In fact, if this conversation had not happened, then Sabo may very well have left the castle when Bonnie did, because the guards mention this funky, mysterious room, and Sabo can't help but take that as an invitation to investigate. That nameless and currently faceless guard is potentially weirdly responsible for everything that happens next, including the crowning of Flame Emperor Sabo. But with this, we have a new Oda mystery. In fact, we have a couple in this chapter, but the room being referred to could be the big refrigerator kind of space where the Straw Hat is being kept, or it could even be the Chamber of Flowers, which is where Imu seems to spend a lot of time. By the way, here is a thing that people tend to forget. Imu isn't the only mysterious figure in that room. There is also a silhouetted subordinate talking to Imu who we know even less about. So just who is this person? That's actually a very common question that gets asked quite a bit in chapter 1084, and let's now dive into Cobra. His interaction with the elders starts out quite typically. Essentially, Cobra says, "Perhaps I should tell you everything that you already know, just in case we're in some sort of fictional pirate comic and the readers need a bit of a TLDR." Which they do, because it's legitimately difficult to keep up with all of the Void Century information that's been scattered across 1,000 chapters. But this conversation leads very nicely into Nefertari Lily, another in a long line of tantalizing Oda silhouettes, because just as houses are built with bricks, One Piece as we know it is built with silhouettes. And Lily follows the Nefertari naming scheme that we first encountered with Vivi and her mother Titi. So assumedly they just go through the alphabet, and once that's done, they start again. But a female monarch of an Egyptian-based civilization can't help but give me some very Cleopatra feels. Oh, and actually something quite frankly disturbing that I learned recently is that the pyramids of Giza were built around 2500 BC, which means that Cleopatra actually lived closer to the founding of NFTs than she did to the building of Giza. But Lily was one of the 20 founding monarchs, the first of the founding members who have been named actually, but due to mysterious reasons, both did not join the world nobles, nor did she return to Alabasta. For all intents and purposes, Lily just vanished, only to reappear 800 years later, trending on Twitter with over 32,000 tweets following this chapter's release. The discussion is quite tense because I genuinely don't know if the elders are trying to lie to Cobra because they genuinely don't know what happened to Lily. I mean, these guys are not all knowing. They have big gaps in knowledge. Oh, and also don't worry, because we will be diving into the wild Lily theories very soon. One panel that stuck out to me was the emphasis on the 19 weapons being placed around the empty throne, or at least the upper tier of the empty throne. As the world government expanded, it now has close to 200 weapons in this room, but mostly scattered on the lower tier. But to go back to the lovely sounding Chamber of Flowers, Imu may very well have Lily's missing weapon there, which Imu uses to repeatedly stab pictures of people that he assumedly doesn't like very much. I'm not saying that Emu is Lily, yet, but perhaps her unpledged weapon was kept because Alabasta was one of the 20 founding nations. Cobra then goes on to conversationally whip out the D, which is the point at which, if it hadn't been decided already, I think both the 5 elders and Cobra knew exactly how this interaction was going to end, which, to be clear, is in a very corpsome manner. I have to say, it feels a lot like a Bond movie ploy, you know, when Bond is all like, well, you've bested me, Mr. Bad Guy. But before you brutally murder me, could you please reveal all of your secrets? Sadly, Cobra is not quite as suave as a secret agent, but hey, that is exactly what Sabo's for. We know that he's going to enter this room at some stage, and Cobra asking these questions may very well allow Sabo to eavesdrop on answers that were never intended for his uncultured swine ears. Also, another new mystery, the letter left behind by Lily. Oda loves doing this, and I love when Oda does this, but this is like a mini new Odin journal. A historical artifact passed down containing blunt answers to many questions that we, as readers, will probably not know until close to the end of the series. Although speaking of questions, I do question the decision making of Cobra here, because let's say he knows he's going to die. Sure, that's fine. But revealing that letter puts all of Alabasta in danger, because at that point, the world government can't just murder Cobra and keep all of that nonsense quiet. They would then need to find and destroy that letter. And in doing that, hey, it might just be easier to wipe the entire island away from history. Even knowing the name of the ancient kingdom was enough to warrant the destruction of Ohara, all because of one word, and this letter is confirmed to contain multiple words. Words plural being the word for plural. What? And I feel like a bit of a proud parent now because I got to witness Emu's first word, which was Lily. And this is going to be a pretty wild anime moment, because if Emu's identity isn't revealed in this flashback, then it falls on the anime to make some pretty major decisions regarding Emu's voice, whether it's male, female, high, low, accent, etc., all of which is pretty huge information to have. I have to say, as terrifying as Emu is, I did find him quite adorable in this chapter, specifically when he's sitting on the empty throne. He looks so cute. Because the chair looks so massive, and hey, maybe it is. Perhaps we've been very wrong about the scale of this magnificent throne. But either way, it makes Emu look like a teeny tiny emuling when he's sitting on it, like a toddler sitting in their parents' comfortable armchair. I'm hoping it's just massive because I love the scale of the throne, and I think it adds very much to the weight of what it represents. You know, the whole idea of this one chair is simply too big for any single entity to fill. I mean, single basic human entity, giants and such, we have those, and forget that. Chair big, people small, would take like 20 people to fill that chair, so it should just theoretically remain empty. But now, let's get on to some insanity. The biggest and most hypestest of conclusions drawn in this chapter is the possibility that Emu is Lily. And perhaps that's why there were only 19 weapons around the throne, because the 20th party is the one who sits on the throne, and you don't really need to pledge a weapon to yourself. But yet, problems. One of which is that I can't help but remember that one time that the 5 elders referred to the Nefertaris as traitors, which would be a weird thing to say if their supreme overlord was a Nefertari. I think, and bear in mind this is going by the still almost absolutely nothing we know, but based on that, I think it's more likely that Emu knew Lily, and that might even explain his fixation with Vivi. Oh, and also, let's get this prediction right out of the way. When Lily's design is fully revealed, it's gonna be Vivi. I'm pretty sure it's just gonna be an alternate costume Vivi. But I've even seen ideas that Lily didn't return to Alabasta because she ended up founding Amazon Lily because they have the same name. And to that, I'll give a solid perhaps. You can never discount any possibility in this series, no matter how wild. But I do think that we should prepare for some potentially insufferably wild Lily theories in the near future. In fact, I wonder if I could think of one right now. What's the stupidest thing I could think of? I've got one. Okay, great, cool. So get this, right? Nefertari Lily and Amatsuki Toki are the same person. Lily never returned to Alabasta because she traveled forward in time, like whoosh. And she was looking for Wano because the Alabasta poneglyph said that was the location of Pluton. She changed her name and potentially her racial heritage so as not to draw suspicion, because she knew that Emu would know if she was she. Because Emu and Lily were former lovers, and Lily is going to travel once more to appear in the modern day at the very climax of One Piece to confront Emu, and we're going to know that it's both Lily and Toki because she'll have that same thigh scar that Oda fixated on for some reason, possibly because he just wanted to draw some thigh. But that's the sort of thing I'm preparing myself for. With that said though, I love this development, especially because Vivi is a Straw Hat, and this is another one of those fatesome events, like Zoro's historical thread with Ryuma and Luffy's inherited joy boyishness. It's a really great way to bring Alabasta back into prime focus after having been arguably irrelevant for so long. But we are still not done. Fukaboshi, Ryuboshi, and Manboshi, names I never expect to say, are in the chapter and fighting against former Warlord of the Sea, Bartholomew Kuma, which is one of those events that I file under the, I never expected to see that match up. Fukaboshi says something fascinating that alludes to his knowledge of Kuma. Something about how far he's fallen and how sad it is. Sad, Kuma, sad. And I just find it interesting that Fukaboshi seems to know so much about Kuma given his relative isolation. I guess Jinbei was a warlord, so he could have told them a lot about Kuma. If Jinbei knows much about Kuma, has Jinbei and Kuma ever interacted? But an unexpected highlight of the chapter for me was Leo, of all of the characters. I'm not typically a big fan of the Tontata tribe, but I think that there could not have been a better character to lay down this St. Charles smackfest. Quite literally one of the smallest, tiniest living things in the world, standing up to the authority of a world noble. It just works, and good on Leo for that. Sai joins the punch party as well, bringing along a kick for some variety, and this is actually the same attack that he used to defeat Laoji on Dressrosa, the Dragon Drill Nail, and that attack is no joke. Sai's leg right there is infused with Haki, and this may very well be the hardest that St. Charles has ever been hit. To clear up some confusion here though, Most Guard allows Sai to assault Charlos, whilst imploring Fukaboshi to stop because he has a kingdom to think about. Now this gets tricky because a lot of people tend to mistake Sai for the leader of the Kano Kingdom, whereas what he is the leader of the Happo Navy, which is the main military force of the Kano Kingdom. The King of Kano is actually this dude right here. His name is Ramen, and we actually see him at the Reverie in Garp's comical flashback where all of the kings are holding bats, right next to this very Hitler-esque man on the left. But TLDR, Sai himself is not a monarch, so his actions can be passed off as, yeah, rogue soldier does stupid things. Not my fault, not me. But also the confusion doesn't end there, because I've seen a truly surprising amount of people speculating over whether or not St. Charlos is actually dead, despite the chapter title stating attempted murder, and despite the fact that he was already confirmed to be alive in chapter 1054. But what we do know now is the identities of the culprits. It's Sai and Leo. So I imagine that they could now become a major target for some sort of holy knights. But also, I think that this chapter might answer one of our big questions, which is why Kuma is heading back to Marijois. The last order given to Kuma before he was taken by Morley was to kill Saint Mosgard. So there's every chance that Kuma woke up and has now returned to Marijois to carry out that final order, meaning that whether it's a flashback or in the modern day, the Reverie arc is still far from over. Nefertari D. Vivi, Nefertari D. Cobra, and Sadbo, Sad Boy, are all new additions to our DSM family, along with 6 brand new silhouettes of very old characters, many of whom look like legendary Pokemon, and a shocking love affair between 2 very unlikely and 2 very age-inappropriate characters. I mean, that's what I thought anyway, but then I looked it up, and apparently Wapol is only 29 years old. I thought the dude was in his late 40s or something. But I just don't know how Oda keeps doing it. Each of these Reverie chapters keep topping the former. And this chapter starts out with a very profound statement from one King Cobra: no one is ever Pant. And look, he's not wrong, no one is ever Pant. Not even Kelly Funk, because even he becomes a jacket. But the ensuing discussion, it blew my tiny mind brain. Mostly because Imu says a lot and I have no idea what voice to use in my mind. With most characters, it's pretty easy to conjure that mental voice. Like say Vegapunk, you automatically know what a wacky old Japanese man sounds like. Or at least I do, because I am an experienced weeb. But Imu, I have no idea. How do I even read this dialogue? For now, I'm going to assume that it's a surprisingly cute voice, because Imu seems to refer to themselves in the third person as Mu, which is, well, that's kind of adorable. Just like how itty bitty Imu sitting on the throne looks like a baby in their dad's comfy armchair. But to contrast that, Imu appears to use very fanciful language. So in my head right now, I guess what I'm picturing is a baby performing Shakespeare. I really love the shot of Imu talking down to Cobra with the full perspective of the empty throne. It's such an effective illustration of power and how insignificant both Cobra and even the 5 Elder Stars are compared to Imu. There is no equivalent equivalence here. You're either Emu, the immortal god king of the world, or you're nothing. And I also think I need to praise the acoustics of the throne room, because from this angle, I imagine that Emu would need to quite literally be shouting to even be heard by Cobra and the five elders. But not only do they hear each other, but we receive a relentless bombardment of important information, such as Emu being the name of one of the 20 kings, which may give us the answer as to why there's only 19 blades scattered around the throne, because Emu sitting on the throne would complete the symbolism without needing to give up a weapon. And that makes sense because if Emu was one of the 20 kings, then he certainly was not considered their equal. Emu then does something a little bit cheeky by teasing us with the revelation of the will of D before promptly restating everything we know about it. For a brief second, I got ever so excited, and then I was swiftly smacked with the exposition equivalent of blue balls. But that's fine because a later revelation more than makes up for it. I find it interesting that Emu kind of gives Lily the benefit of the doubt, stating that, she did an accident, resulting in the release of the poneglyphs into the world, which was the absolute worst case scenario for us, the world government. And I think that Emu is being extremely generous there by not outright accusing Lily of sabotage. I mean, what even was that accident? Did she trip and fall into the cubes hard enough that they scattered throughout the world like Dragon Balls? But deep down, Emu already knew the truth. And I suspect that there was a bit of denial happening here because he didn't know for a fact whether or not Lily was a D. So there was a certain benefit of the doubt being given for one of the founding monarchs of the world government, which Cobra then proceeded to ruin by stating, Nefertari D. Lily. And holy crap. Less so for Lily and more so for Vivi, who is now essentially Nefertari D. Vivi. This is one of those turning points in One Piece where rereading the manga will never be the same again. The implication here, of course, is that Cobra is also a D, which is probably why as soon as he reveals his heritage, he is mercilessly, I don't even know what to call what happened here. He was mercilessly arrowed, mercilessly impaled, but impaled by what? I guess if you're Cobra, it doesn't really matter because it looks painful as hell. It reminds me a lot of the attack that Gecko Moria used on Oz Jr. during Marineford, that shadow that pierced his body, and they both give me the sense of a phantom stomachache. But here's where things start to get murky and a little bit confusing, because I don't think that this was an attack from Emu. The angle of attack shows the mysterious arrow coming from Cobra's left side, which according to how the elders are standing, I think implicates Saint Saturn. And I'll get more into that in a bit, but having brought up the elders, mate, these may be Oda's wildest silhouettes to date, somehow both vague and yet oddly specific, as well as both terrifying and hilarious. Although the funniest part to me is that Oda is now not content with introducing new characters with silhouettes. No, Oda's silhouette addiction is now as such that he has gone back and turned old characters into new silhouettes. I guess you could say it's a form of narrative recycling, but we can almost certainly state which silhouette belongs to which Elder Star, because Oda was kind enough to only portray them from a single angle, which I believe makes Saint Saturn the silhouette that looks a bit like a depressed Onigashima, possibly indicating some sort of devil fruit, which I think is further enhanced by the idea that he is the most likely suspect to have attacked Cobra. So that arrow could instead be a tail, like a very stereotypical cartoon devil tail. It makes me pretty damn excited to continue Egghead Island because now we know that Saint Saturn isn't just there to chill and eat snacks. Kizaru is theoretically there to protect him, but after seeing this, look, I don't think Saturn needs it. Mr. Blonde was our open mouth silhouette, which is by far the weirdest one, and reminds me a lot of the G5 Marines being covered in Smiley's weapon on Punk Hazard. So it's slightly confusing thing with this one, or at least I was slightly confused. At first I thought this was the same silhouette on the empty throne because I only saw 5 silhouettes in this shot, but I think Blonde Elder is on the floor in this shot because you can see a separate figure, and it would also be very rude of him because in this position he would practically be teabagging Emu on the throne. Samurai Gandhi is probably the most intriguing of all because he's the one who looks like he has the awakened cloudy neck rest effect happening, as well as the only one who still looks like he retains some aspect of humanity in his silhouetted form. I imagine that a lot, if not all of them, are mythical Zoans, but the thing is that these silhouettes are just vague enough that a lot of them could be other classes as well. Except for Big Bird, I would bet ever so many units of currency that this is a mythical Zoan, and this would be the Elder who looks like Santa. A very surprising transformation that legit makes him look like a Ho-Oh. If you showed me this specific silhouette out of context, I would 100% believe it was a Pokemon. And finally, Gorbachev to me looked a bit like an elephant or a mammoth type thing at first, but then I realized that this crescent trunk thing was actually just his outrageously large mustache, enlarged to even more outrageously large proportions. I think he's going to look out of this world wacky when we actually see the designs. In fact, they all are. What is happening here is madness. They're going to look ridiculous. They're the main villains of our series, and they're going to be absurd, and I'm all here for it. Although my favorite part of this section is Sabo's face surrounded by the silhouettes, because he just has this look that says, mate, I was not prepared for today. And speaking of, Sabo and Cobra, they do the anime thing. You know how characters always find time to talk even though they're milliseconds away from being attacked? That's what they do here, reminiscing about Luffy. And you can also see the exact moment where Sabo's photo was taken, which I assume was by Wapol's Dendemushi, because he's the one who contacted Morgans with the specific information surrounding Cobra's death. There was also a very cute moment where we had a flashback within a flashback, and Sabo gets dubbed as an honorary D, now being known as Sadbo. And why not? It perfectly fits the theme of found family within One Piece, because even though Sabo doesn't have the bloods of the Ds, he did become the brother of two Ds and has now also inherited the will of Nefertari D Cobra. So from here on out, to me, Sabo is Sadbo, very much the other side of the coin to Luffy's Joy Boy. But Cobra then diligently recites Lily's letter to Sabo, which is partially obscured by a mighty roar, although it's hard to tell which of the 6 shadow beasts the roar comes from. But full credit to Cobra, he went out as expected on his own terms. He could have tried to escape with Sabo, but instead he prioritized the future and sacrificed himself to allow Sabo to escape. His last moments were also spent standing, which I think is very powerful, using every last bit of his life's energy for this final act, as opposed to being in a wheelchair and needing to passively accept death. At the same time, Wapol was peeping through what I would describe as some sort of reverie glory hole. And just like that, Wapol has become one of the most important characters in all of the One Piece, because there's a grand total of now 2 living beings who have illegally gazed upon Imu. And I think that using Wapol in this way is genius. I've seen a lot of people very impressed that this random character has popped back into the story out of nowhere, but thinking about it, Wapol was really the only choice here, and he was perfectly set up for the role. Wapol has an existing connection to the Nefertari family, specifically a reverie-based connection as well. He and Cobra got into a big argument at the last reverie, and Wapol then slapped Vivi because he could. So Oda has now completely flipped that relationship by hosting another reverie where Wapol and the Nefertaris have become accidental allies, which is not just a really fun dynamic, but another one of those moments where you see these small story and relationship threads paying off. Also, the ending of this chapter was surprisingly hilarious. After such a serious set of pages with new powers and all sorts of deaths, I was not expecting this, because Vivi escapes with Wapol and there's like a soap opera style miscommunication that makes it sound like Wapol and Vivi are running away together, as if it's some sort of passionate love affair. All of which comes to us courtesy of the mind of Cinderella. And in case you've forgotten who she is, or never knew who she is literally the Miss Universe of the One Piece world, considered to be one of the most beautiful women alongside Boa Hancock and now Shirahoshi. And Wapol married Miss Universe after becoming a successful businessman, which he did by eating garbage and then shitting it out into a new revolutionary metallic compound. And I'm very interested to see where this goes, because this would leave Cinderella as the sole monarch of the evil Black Drum Kingdom. And I imagine that she could hold quite an active grudge against Vivi and her allegedly unfaithful husband. There was also this part where Vivi was just chilling with CP9. I mean, I say chilling, yet she'd been kidnapped, but the gravity of that situation didn't seem to stop friendly conversation. Noticeably absent from the Cypherpole room are Rob Lucci, Kaku, and Spandam. Lucci is particularly interesting because he was the one who first encountered and assumedly captured Vivi, and I was just waiting for Vivi to say something like, "Hang on, aren't you the guys that the Straw Hats beat up that one time?" Because she follows news, Vivi would know that. But more news for us. Sai and Leo proudly claiming to be part of the Grand Fleet after assaulting Charlos is amazing. I still don't think this is the great incident we've been waiting for, but the Grand Fleet are continuing to build that notoriety. And hearing about Fujitora was also pretty funny. As expected, he did the whole, "Whoops, did my meteor cause just enough chaos for the Revolutionary Army to free all those slaves?" Pah, silly me. Which apparently led to a bout of fisticuffs between Green Bull and Fujitora, which I imagine only further distracted Green Bull from actually doing something to try and apprehend either the Revolutionary Army or the escaped slaves. Whatever the case though, this reunion is happening. Monkey D. Luffy and Nefertari D. Vivi. At some point, she is definitely coming back to the crew because her responsibilities now far eclipse the singular nation of Alabasta. And I, for one, absolutely cannot wait. But I will because I don't have another choice. Eiichiro Oda is cooking one hell of a spicy story soup, revealing the names of the 5 Elder Stars, revealing 3 new Seraphim, and revealing one very, very old man who may or may not, but seriously may, be the father of the one and only red-haired Vigilant Shanks. That's nowhere near everything either. Oda also revealed Imu's name in this chapter and the weapon that destroyed the Lucia, and one thing that only the keenest of fictional pirate eyes will spot. But to kick things off, we have a bit of a reverie wrap-up, featuring appearances from many series' classic characters that go by far too quickly. There's a montage of Igaram, Chaka, and Pell desperately searching for Vivi, which hit me so hard via the compound power of nostalgia. They're minor characters, but we went through so much with them to save Alabasta. And of all of the loyal characters in One Piece, these three are at the very peak. And I genuinely feel for them having lost Vivi and Cobra, because Pell, Chaka, and Igaram are the kind of people who would much prefer to lose their own lives rather than those of their beloved king and princess, which is awkwardly ironic because two of those characters are completely immune to explosions and, as far as I'm aware, literally cannot be killed. It's the small details that I love though, that I love in a very hateful way. Because you see Igaram crying and just desperately going, have you seen the Vivi? And then all of the royals around him have this look of complete disinterest. In fact, it's worse than that. Some of them look actively annoyed that Igaram is making noise. And Oda goes on to mirror this situation a bit further in by having another brief montage of the CP0 agents doing the exact same thing, searching for the missing Vivi, and in this case Sabo, by showing pictures to the crowd. And again, most of the royalty has the same response to this, which can be summed up as, who cares? The one exception to this is Stelly, who we see gawking over Vivi's photo, with his wife, Sari Nantokanete, being very displeased to say the least. Actually, you know what? I don't think I will ever get the chance to drop this again, so fun fact. Sari Nantokanete is based on Marie Antoinette, and her name quite literally translates to something net. She's basically a gag character. Stelly needed some sort of regal wife, and Oda was like, I don't know, let's something Antoinette, and that'll do good enough. But despite this being a gag, this section is a perfect reflection of the situation, because it highlights how corrupt the world government is, even on levels below that of the world nobles, because only one royal is even bothering to look at the missing person, and it's for all of the wrong reasons. And special shout out to CP0 members Gizmonda and Spandam, who are doing all the work here. It's, well, I can't honestly say it's ever good to see Spandam, but he is indeed here. One small character thing that I do love about him though is that Spandam has his gun drawn. And that is such a Spandam thing to do because he can't assert control on his own. To make people pay attention to him, he needs to literally pull a gun and threaten them. Vivi and Walpole then have their thread wrapped up by stowing away on the Aegis Kingdom ship, which is the vessel of King T IV, better known as Clockbeard, primarily due to his clockbeard. And in this section, Vivi and Walpole appear to be communicating telepathically, because they're not using speech bubbles, they're using think bubbles, which is a thing that Oda likes to do from time to time in situations where we need to be very, very quiet. Walpole doesn't tell Vivi what he saw, and this might be a moment of minor development for him, because he actually saw her father murdered, amongst other things, and I don't blame Walpole for not wanting to be the one to deliver that news. Whereas I feel like Drum Island era Walpole would be delighted to be the first one to deliver it, if only to be the first one to take in Vivi's fresh reaction. That's just the kind of guy Walpole was when he actually did villain stuff. But this also might, and this is a bit of a stretch, but it might be an effort to protect Vivi, because if she finds out about what he saw, then that's an automatic death sentence for her. Meanwhile, Bonnie stowed away on the Tajin Kingdom ship, which is the nation ruled by Queen Mororodon, although maybe I should say was, because both the Aegis Kingdom, which again is the ship that both Vivi and Walpole boarded, as well as the Tajin Kingdom, both of which were said later in the chapter to have coincidentally rebelled. So the status of King Clockbeard and Queen Mororodon might be more precarious at the moment. And it's hard to tell, but to me it looks like Bonnie may have invoked her child form to make it easier to stow away, which I think is perfect because it gives us a raw look at her overall situation, which you can essentially boil down to a frightened girl concerned about her father. And also hungry, very hungry, always hungry. Sabo obviously boarded the Lucia ship, but mate, he got messed up so much more than I thought after the last chapter. He is visibly shaking with pain, and that wound, mate, that wound looks pretty brutal. This kind of damage to a Logia user of Sabo's caliber is pretty insane. And it shows us that Emu and the Five Elders are no joke. And speaking of, everyone, get your narrative toilet paper ready because we have a colossal info dump incoming. One of the biggest questions in the series since Jaya has just been answered in full, which are the names and roles of the Five Elders. It's one of those things where only in One Piece can the names and CVs of 5 old men excite me this much. But to complement their Greco-Roman theming, they've been given the names and roles of classical deities. And I don't want to say I called it because I didn't, but I did get all of their planet names sort of right, just in the wrong order and without all of the superfluous stuff around them. Starting with J. Garcia Saturn again, we already knew his name, but he is our god of science. And all of a sudden it makes perfect sense as to why he's being sent to Egghead, because that's his whole domain. And just as a bit of a thing, the next names may change with the official translation because honestly they're pretty wacky, but for now, Mr. Blonde is named Saint Shepherd Jupiter. This is one that may change because Jupiter is clearly just a reference to Jupiter, but I also don't have a grasp on the nuances of Japanese. In any case, he is the god of agriculture, hence a shepherd, which sounds kind of boring, but look, agriculture is everything. Do not ever underestimate the importance of farm. And actually, come to think of it, it's probably now his direct responsibility to deal with the food shortage on Marijois. Samurai Gandhi is samurai no more, and is in fact Saint Ethan Baron v Nusjuro, which of course contains a reference to Venus. Turns out he is the god of finance, which is fun because I had him down as the Mars-named god of war due to the sword. Seriously, the god of finance looks like some kind of tough, justice-fueled executioner. Meanwhile, the god of justice looks like a banker. Specifically though, his name is Saint Topman Valkyrie, which is referencing Mercury. And this is where my problem comes back, because Mercury is the god of financial gain and commerce. So he's named after the thing it is that he looks like, but he has the role of war. To be fair though, none of the elders have the roles of their respective god names. And our final elder is Saint Marcus Mars, which is obviously Mars, god of the environment, which is an interesting one because at first it makes him sound like he's just really proactive about recycling and reducing emissions. But I imagine the role to be more akin to that of an earth deity, like say Gaia. And then there's Imu, who in this chapter is like a child who has just learned how to talk. Now that he started, we can't shut him up. There was a lot of conversation and two massive things came from it. One of which being that the weapon used to destroy Lelucia was allegedly made by Vegapunk, which goes against Ivankov's theory later on in the chapter that an ancient weapon was used. But also maybe they're both correct. Perhaps Vegapunk has replicated an ancient weapon to some extent, and at the very least this explains why they didn't use this for the Ohara incident. But the big question is why? I've always stated that Vegapunk is a bit of a tricky existence, because as much of a good person as Stellar appears to be, I do agree with the Bonnie take, which is that he unleashes inventions upon the world and completely disregards the damage they inflict under world government control, all in the pursuit of science. Whether that's actual weapons like the Seraphim, the Pacifista, or your standard pew-pew weapons, or whether it's more innovations like the sea stone lining under the ships, thus allowing the Marines to travel across the Calm Belt and enforce the tyranny of the world government more easily. And surely this is something that we'll have to reckon with at some stage, especially since now, again allegedly, Vegapunk's invention has caused an Ohara-level incident. Secondly, Imu orders the elders to retrieve Vivi, not Nefertari Vivi. Imu said her name on a very familiar basis as if they're some sort of old Nakama friends. So Vivi is absolutely not off the hook. If anything, she's now been placed on a significantly larger hook and is becoming a Nico Robin-like figure. So she might even get her own bounty if the world government are desperate enough, which I would like because it would push her further into the many arms of the Straw Hats. And as if there wasn't enough in this chapter, Oda also dumps 3 more Seraphim on us. I actually had one of my artists draw these 3 ages ago in anticipation that they actually existed, and full credit to him because I don't think he was too far off. Quite curiously, S. Crocodile has Crocodile's face scar, and that's odd because Crocodile got that when he fought Whitebeard. So in theory, the child version shouldn't have it. And look, I don't know, is child abuse the right word? Because I'm thinking that they may have purposely scarred S. Crocodile all for the sake of brand recognition. Because really, Crocodile as a child, he's not really recognizable as Crocodile. Or did Whitebeard's strike hit Crocodile so deeply that it became embedded in his DNA from that moment on? But either way, he is definitely the Seraph that I'm most interested in right now, because obviously they can't give him the Sunasuna no Mi. Crocodile is also, quite frankly, the physically weakest of the 7 warlords, so I'm really keen to see what they've done to compensate for that. Crocodile's greatest strength has always been his intelligence, which isn't the greatest of features if we're looking to create mindless child slaves. These Seraphim all seem like they mimic their original personalities a lot more though. S. Flamingo has that terrifying Doflamingo smile. S. Bat, or S. Gecko maybe, has that joyous pre-Kaido sense of fun and adventure, very similar to Luffy's attitude actually. And then of course S. Crocodile just looks more bored than anything. And I suspect that S. Crocodile and S. Flamingo in particular may become a lot more difficult to control over time. Because if their personalities keep developing, then I don't think the world government can keep those egos in check. To the Revolutionary Army, where we wrap up all of the Lelucia Gap events, with Sabo not having the heart to tell people that he isn't a murderer. So I find this fascinating, right? Not Sabo, but the actual people of Lelucia. They assume that because Cobra was a world government king, that automatically makes him as bad as their monarchy was. Meanwhile, cut to Alabasta, and you have the citizens mourning Cobra's death like he was a genuine member of their family. And I like that because both groups of civilians are what we would broadly define as good guys. And one of those groups is celebrating the death of a man they didn't even know the first first thing about. And Sabo's just going along with it. And it makes me wonder if this is going to become a bit of a problem down the line. So I don't know if this is a bit much for One Piece, but what happens if this emboldened group meets another king? Let's say King Riku, for example, another benevolent, well-loved figure. Would they immediately follow in what they believe are Sabo's footsteps and go for the kill, assuming that Riku is just as corrupt and as horrible as many other kings are? There's a strong potential for tragedy and social commentary about things like, hey, maybe we should learn a little more before jumping on the cancelled from life bandwagon. This section also borders on confirming that Emu is one of the 20 founding kings, floating the name Saint Emu of House Nerona. And Ivankov even goes full YouTuber here by laying out his theory and connecting all of the dots. So I think we're at a point of, say, 99.9% certainty that Emu was one of the founding members of the world government and was made perpetually youthful by a previous user of the Ope Ope no Mi. Oh, and also, I thought we'd have to wait longer for this, but Oda has gone and revealed the leader of the Holy Knights. This name is Figaland Garling. And before we even touch on his amazing design, let it be clear. This man is almost certainly a relative of Shanks. Garling could be his father, his uncle, or any number of other relations. With the exceptions of son and brother, I guess, that would be odd. Garling is also the former king of God Valley, which I suppose makes Shanks part of the God Valley monarchy, or at least what used to be the monarchy. And thus, little Prince Shanks ended up in a chest that ended up aboard the ship of the future pirate king. I have to say though, Garling, he gives me big Garp vibes, because you always need to be wary of old men in One Piece. They don't tend to live this long without a very good reason. Garling's moon design is amazing, although it's one of those situations where you'd always want people to be looking at you from a specific diagonal angle. Kind of loses its fun charm if they see you straight on. And the big cliffhanger that we're left on is that Saint Mosgard has been sentenced to death. At this point, it's unclear to me whether he's still alive or not. All of the blood and the wounding may suggest that his sentence has already been carried out or is currently being carried out. But even if he is still alive, who could possibly come to save him at this point? We just spent this whole chapter watching people go home, and this event is happening in the modern timeline. So at this point, the reverie's been over for weeks, meaning that characters like Sai and Leo are probably long gone. But the very idea of Garling is terrifying. A man who has the power to judge even the self-professed gods of this planet. Eiichiro Oda has certainly given us a lot to think about over the next 4 weeks, whilst One Piece takes a break, and I'll be explaining all of that in the next video. This could be the end for Garp the hero. There's only so long one man can solo an army of pirates before his ice-fisting apprentice commits a top 10 anime betrayal, the tragedy of which giving rise to the hero of the next generation. One Piece is back and it has not slowed down. If anything, we've accelerated into very exciting yet very terrifying territory, but with some signature Oda flair. I loved the namesake of this chapter, the battleship bags, because I think they're such a fantastic concept that only goes to elevate the legend that is Garp, and now I suppose the legend that is Kuzan. Gotta say though, in all honesty, I wasn't all that impressed at first, because Garp is a dude who punches mountains for fun. What's a battleship? But then he stated the bag rules. No haki and no devil fruits. So that's actually pretty hardcore. And it makes me think about how Luffy would have gone doing something like this, because our rubber lad has been punching through marine ships ever since the early days, but all of that was made possible with the force generated by his stretching. I love that the battleship bags look all eroded, like what a cliff would look like after hundreds, maybe even thousands of years of waves crashing against it. And Kuzan's ship looks equally as damaged as Garp's. So I think that we may have been taking a cue from Kuzan's own lazy justice and sleeping on this former admiral in terms of power, because I never expected him to possess Garp level physicality. That, in addition to his devil fruit, might make Kuzan one of the strongest characters currently alive. Sakazuki as well. In fact, Sakazuki is even stronger. One thing before we move on, the battleship bags are introduced to us by Commodore Brand-New. Always a fun character to see, because he's the one responsible for assigning all of the new bounties. But also present here are Django and Fullbody, and I find that interesting because it says that they're at the G1 Marine base, which pre-time skip was Marineford, meaning that they are standing where the Paramount War took place. But we previously saw Hina, their superior officer, at New Marineford, which is the old G1 base, talking to Sengoku and Suru. So I'm wondering why these three are currently on different sides of the red line. I have to say though, the overall tone of this chapter doesn't leave me feeling particularly great for the future of Monkey D. Garp, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. bit. If something bad does happen to Garp, I could see Kobe blaming his own weakness, much like how Luffy did, but then going to the scrapyard, picking out his own battleship, and punching away to following Garp's footsteps. Maybe not just Kobe either, but Helmeppo, Prince Screw, and however many other next generation Marines feel that need to become stronger. Like how all of the Straw Hats realize the dire need to become more powerful during the time skip. The first shot we see on Hachinosu is of San Juan Wolf, assumedly being tossed and or punched by Garp, which is very impactful. It says a lot about Garp's strength without even needing to see it. He's also a devil fruit user, which is extra bad for San Juan Wolf, because who even has the power to pull him back out of the water? I assume that Avalo Pizarro would have to do it by controlling the island to pluck Wolf out of that there water, but this chapter is glorious because it is packed with Garp absolutely slaughtering the forces of an Emperor of the Sea. In particular, Garp is savage, just savage, when he blocked Vasco Shot's attack with lesser Blackbeard pirate members. It was so cold, it was so efficient, it was so resourceful. I love it. I also love the look of indifference on his face as a pirate literally burns in his hand. Garp is a marine monster, and that only becomes more striking when he makes that demonic Luffy-esque Will of D smile. You never want to be on the receiving end of that smile, because that is not a happy smile, that's a you're gonna get punched smile. However, amongst all of this, Shiryu manages to draw first blood, a very important act because it comes with a massive mental buff for the rest of the Blackbeard pirates. Remembering that most of these guys, in fact, I think all of these guys except Kuzan, have never encountered the legend that is Garp. So they would have this image in their mind brains of an insurmountable, unbeatable god. But now, thanks to Shiryu, and even though it took him out as well, the Blackbeard pirates know that Garp is not invincible. And they know that if you just keep throwing piles of pirates at him, then one of them is eventually gonna get him. Whereas if Garp didn't get hit like this, they would be on the verge of mentally giving up, resigning themselves to powerlessness and such. And the look of satisfaction on Shiryu's face is priceless. Again, this came at a high personal cost for Shiryu with all of the punching and everything, but this is a career high moment for him. I mean, he wounded the greatest hero that has ever lived. However, to me as a reader, this was a much greater moment for Garp, because what happened here wasn't Garp being outplayed by Shiryu. No, Garp deliberately skewered himself to act as a shield to protect Kobe. And the coolest part is that from the way these panels are drawn, I don't think Haki played a role in this. I mean, we still don't 100% know how the clear fruit works, but I'm hoping that it counters observation Haki, because if it doesn't, then it's practically useless in higher levels of combat. But from the manga, it looks like Garp managed to detect Shiryu naturally, just from the disturbance his presence was having on the environment. Garp saw this rapid burst of smoke, he knew that a bad thing was happening, so he got in the way of the bad thing and the good thing being Kobe. Kobe also has a moment of what I alluded to before, blaming himself for Garp being hit. And you know, it's actually hard to tell if Garp was lying or not when he says that Shiryu had been aiming for him the whole time, or if Garp's just saying what Kobe needs to hear to keep mentally stable. Either way, the unfortunate signs are here. This event feels like a real-time flashback playing out, and Kobe may very well be about to lose his mentor. And how much does a mentor mean to Kobe? Well, I don't know, but to Cross Guild, this mentor is worth roughly 3 billion berries. It's a lot. Garp's bounty is revealed in this chapter, and it's a bit abstract, being 3 crowns, with each crown being worth 1 billion berries, and funnily enough, that means that Garp is worth exactly as much as Luffy is. And weirdly enough, it also means that Garp is worth exactly as much as Eustace Kid as well. And not to get too economic here, but you do, I guess you don't, I guess I do. I wonder about the liquidity of Cross Guild. If someone did present Garp the hero, then would they have the cash on hand to pay? Because 3 billion berries is a lot. I mean, that's about 30% of the worth of the entire kingdom of Dressrosa, at least according to the Flamingo market. But no matter what, we are talking world noble money here. In addition to Garp, our Marine Admirals also have 3 crown bounties, which is incredibly close to what I thought in the Marine bounty prediction video. But the bounty range for an Admiral must be somewhere between 3 to 3.5 billion berries at least. But for now, mission successful. Off screen, almost all of the Marines and all of the slaves have been brought aboard the ship, including Hibari, who we last saw frozen by Kuzan. Toshigi is there on the ship caring for her, but later we see Hibari lamenting about how not great she was in this conflict. And I guess that's just what happens when you bring flowers to a pirate fight. And so there are just 4 Marines remaining: Garp, Kobe, Helmeppo, and Prince Gru. I really like Gru continuously seeking validation from Garp with his whole "Garp, am I also the future of the Marines?" trying to be on par with Kobe. Oh, you know what? You know what Prince Gru is. Gru is Kobe's Cavendish. The guy who is so full of himself and wants to be the center of attention, but deep down Kuzan, he knows he isn't the main character. So much needed Helmeppo appreciation now, because Kobe, I would expect, to be one of the last on the island to ensure everyone's safety, even if they were the ones who initially came to rescue him. That's just the kind of guy that Kobe is. But Helmeppo, mate, he has come so damn far, both in terms of power and in terms of character. Thinking back to both he and Kobe at Marineford, both of them were completely overwhelmed to the point where they tried to run away. And now they're the complete opposite. They're the ones who are heroically leaping into combat. Although Kobe is now the ace of this conflict and Garp is the Whitebeard. So hopefully Kobe will learn from Ace's mistake if Garp was to complete a full Whitebeard. Curiously, there is no sign of Perona or Gecko Moria. Granted, it would be a pretty bad idea for them to try and escape on the marine ship. I suppose they would prefer to commandeer another vessel and escape in the chaos. Or maybe they prove to be the X factor that allows everyone to escape. But until then, I will continue to wait patiently, very patiently, for Gecko Moria to become relevant again. For now though, we have a really cool Kuzan flashback, and Garp looks so young in this flashback. It's like God Valley era Garp. Although his meeting with Kuzan is probably about a decade after that, because Kuzan would have been less than 10 during God Valley. It's so almost frustratingly simple, but Oda does a small montage of the two of them bonding whilst punching ships throughout the years, and it really is nothing revolutionary. It's classic, it's tried and tested, it's an easy way to build a relationship between characters very quickly, but it worked. It worked on me. And it's really fun how the roles reverse throughout the years. Kuzan starts out annoying Garp, and then the relationship switches to Garp interrupting Kuzan doing all of his admiral stuff, which might even be part of how Kuzan's lazy justice formed. He tried to do work, he tried to do active justice, but Garp kept forcing him to take snack breaks. But all in all, it gives you a very circle of life feel, like Garp, the parent, raising the child, and then Kuzan, the adult, taking care of the parent. One massive thing revealed in this flashback that may go unnoticed is that Garp refers to Dragon as his son, which is the first time he has ever claimed a blood relation to Dragon. And if you're not chronically online, like I am, this was the main piece of evidence used for the theory that Garp was not in fact Dragon's son, and that there was some sort of mysterious Garp daughter that he married and produced a Luffy with. But that's all gone now because Occam's razor once again prevails. Cutting back to modern day, seeing Garp and Kuzan punching each other was just wow. They're portrayed as equal, and that's pretty wild, because up until now, Kuzan has always been shown as a heavy fruit user. So watching him actually getting involved in a fist fight is kind of surreal. The Kuzan flashbacks have definitely given a lot more meat to this conflict. Before, I thought that Garp had practically zero chance of dying because there wasn't really anyone here worthy of taking him out, especially since Blackbeard himself is absent. He's off elsewhere, both figuratively and literally breaking the law. And Avalo Pizarro even makes a bit of a meta commentary on that at the end of the chapter. Newspapers all talking about Blackbeard, Blackbeard this, Blackbeard that, blah blah blah. But the rest of his crew also want their names to be known. Still, if it was going to happen, it cannot be anyone except for Kuzan, right? Kuzan killing Garp would be gut-wrenching. It would also surely solidify him as a villain, unless there's some sort of Severus Snape shenaniganry going on here. And it would add another admiral to the Luffy revenge list for killing family members. Also, the Blackbeard pirates would now be responsible for the death of both a brother and a grandfather. Thinking about it from an avian perspective, it would also make a phenomenal headline for Big News Morgans. Hero killed by former apprentice, now villain. Very Jedi-Sith dynamic. And it could have endless public opinion ramifications as well, because Garp is an important symbol to each well-governed citizen. So if their hero dies, they are going to, well, they're going to cry, but after crying, they're going to ask questions. Questions such as, why weren't the rest of the Marines there backing him up? He's doing the hero thing. He's saving Kobe. Why weren't the other Marines also doing the hero thing? Oh, because the rest of the fleet was sent to Egghead Island. Okay, why were they there? Because Luffy was kidnapping Vegapunk? Huh. So therefore, the reason why Garp died is because of Luffy, thus painting him as the ultimate world villain. But even with all we're seeing right now, it is so hard to picture Kuzan as an antagonist. Not impossible though, and getting less and less impossible by the chapter. However, this one does end on a very hopeful note. Even in seemingly the worst possible situation, Garp remains calm and sees a path to victory. Fair enough, because I suppose he has almost certainly been in worse situations before, but he leaves us with the words, justice will prevail, which I guess is true. Either that or just ice will prevail. Also, I can't help but think of Doflamingo's Marineford speech. Well, Hanama, he basically says whoever wins dictates all of the justice. So again, even in the face of tragedy, Garp is taking a technical dub on this take, but also justice works in mysterious ways. Right now, I can't help but feel that this ends in tragedy, and that this could be a catalyst for a moment of growth for Koby and the rest of the Marines. Like literally, potentially the entirety of the Marines, since most of them looked up to Garp. On a more personal note though, throughout the chapter, Garp is really only speaking directly to two people, Kuzan and Koby, the fallen apprentice and the future of the Marines. And I've seen enough anime flashbacks to know what priming for tragedy feels like. And a lot of what Garp says in this chapter feels like preemptively cushioning Koby for the worst. But what do you think? Is Garp going to die here? Yes or no? And also, why? And thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring my fictional pirate addiction. Check out the game using the link in the description and just go and have some fun, exploring and exploding a century's worth of human mechanical achievements. And also, what do you do while watching these videos? I know that a whole ton of you do the dishes or watch them on the toilet, but there have to be other options, right? Koby the hero has arrived. Honesty is his policy, and honesty, as it turns out, is absolutely devastating, both physically and emotionally. This is the Koby I've been waiting for so long. And to produce a bit of an honesty impact of my own, it is overdue. Overdue, but well worth the wait. The Marines now officially have themselves a mini Garp with the potential to evolve into a prime Garp, and perhaps to something even greater, a prime Koby. Also, he has Conqueror's Haki, which is pretty... Because of all of the people who get to join this very exclusive club, I love that Koby's membership was approved before Sanji's. In all seriousness though, Koby deserves it, and every single beat of this chapter only reinforces that, because 1088 presents the full journey of Koby the hero. Starting with the color spread though, I don't often comment on these, but it's particularly appropriate because this spread features both Koby and Garp in their pre-time skip era, and it's sort of like an East Blue version of the New Age color spread that Oda did, which is one of my all-time favorites. This was done for the Netflix live action, which I'm not going to opine on in this video. There are other videos for that, but Garp being such a large focus is interesting, and it might indicate that he has a much larger role in the live action series than he did in the manga. In fact, in the manga, Garp didn't even exist outside of the Diary of Koby Meppo cover story. And speaking of, what is it, almost literally 1000 chapters after that story, this flashback takes us right back into that cover story. It was like a double flashback. You get the story, and then you also get struck in the sabos by pure nostalgia. And this played out in very typical Oda style. He's very good at constructing flashbacks that use comedy to seed his dramatic payoffs. And this scene is pretty hilarious, posing the moral problem about what to do in the situation of a two-person ship. And Garp is coldly stating that yes, you should leave the old man to die over the baby and the Marine. Isolated in this flashback, it's very calculated, as if Garp's mind operates purely on a series of equations designed to maximize future potential. And to be fair to Garp, even though it is a bit of a subversion of morals, he's not wrong. I feel like most people, if put in that position of the old man, would prefer to have the other two saved over themselves. But this lesson is more personal to Garp, because at this point in his life, he is the old man. This isn't an obscure hypothetical involving citizens. This is Garp actively preparing his young Marines for the reality that one day they could be in a life or death situation where they need to leave him behind without a second thought in order to preserve the future. That is Garp's philosophy. Garp doesn't yet have an assigned justice like many of the other high-ranking Marines do, but with this in mind, I would say maybe future justice or even gradual justice, as in looking into the very long term, which can mean preserving the injustice of now in order to plant the seeds of change that will eventually grow in the future, which I imagine is very frustrating for those living in the present and would certainly cause quite a rift with a certain dragon who believes in the need for immediate change. But then we do a bit of flashback leapfrogging, heading into the future, but something that is still the past to us, with a very interesting situation happening here. Blackbeard essentially has a form of diplomatic immunity, so he can do whatever he wants to the Marines because they don't have permission to fight him. Blackbeard could do literally anything. He could pull down his pants, turkey slap Vice Admiral Yamakaji in the face, and he'd still just have to do nothing but stands there like Yamakaji always does. Oda doesn't put Yamakaji in a scene unless there's nothing to be done. That was what was about to happen on Egghead Island as well, by the way. Luffy also had this form of diplomatic immunity. It's just that Lucci didn't care and decided to go ahead and start a war. This flashback is juxtaposed directly against Garp's lesson because it's Kobe implementing that lesson. He is preserving the futures of 800 soldiers by giving up his own singular future, which is a pretty phenomenal deal if future is your currency of choice. Yamakaji lets him do this because Kobe is a sword member, which makes sense. One rogue marine in exchange for 800 obedient subordinates. But what makes less sense is that Blackbeard assumedly agreed. And I mean, he's always been a bit of a wild card, but even for him, it is crazy that he agreed to this. He even gave the battleship back. So this is a situation where Kobe must have rolled a natural 20 for charisma or something. There is no other explanation. But this whole chapter is Kobe's condensed journey to becoming the hero. And my favorite flashback of the three was the final one because I gave Kobe far too little credit. I said in 1087 that if the worst were to happen to Garp, then Kobe would grow and mature by taking on Garp's training regime. And I apologize severely for underestimating Kobe's motivation. Because as it turns out, he's already been using the battleship bag for almost as long as we've known him. This Diary of Kobe Meppo stuff, even here, he was punching battleships with a very Luffy mindset, training hard so that he could protect all of the everyone. I'd also like to note again that Kobe negotiated Blackbeard returning the battleship, and my headcanon for that is because Kobe knew that, look, if the worst were to happen to him, then someone else was going to need that battleship to punch. They're a very valuable training commodity. But I loved that Kobe recognized his weakness even back then. In fact, especially back then. He did start out having been one of the genetic lottery losers, one of the wimpier characters we've ever encountered to this very day. So he knew that undertaking the same training as everyone else was not enough. To make up for his starting point, which was like way back here, he needed to work, 200 times harder than everyone else. And this is where I believe that Kobe's Conqueror's Haki is seated. But we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. I really liked the panel of the battleship. In the last chapter, the ships used by Kuzan and Garp looked so used and overpowered. Overpowered by the people who were punching them, that is. But the way this panel is drawn really puts into perspective how overwhelming a battleship is. And you can barely make out little Kobe. He's just a mere speck of silhouette. Which then transitions perfectly back into the modern day where Kobe is facing a similarly overwhelming object. Except this one is actively capable of harming him. So here's the plan. Garp creates a distraction, Helmeppo protects Kobe and Gru protects the ship, and Kobe needs to somehow destroy the island hand. No pressure, Kobe. Just display a shocking amount of power that you've never come close to doing before. Not a problem, and I love this teamwork. Helmeppo probably gets the least of the glory, but he had a cool moment where he had to slice the cannonball to save Kobe and Gru, and it shows that he's evolved into a genuinely reliable dude guy. It reminds me a lot of Usopp's growth, especially his line in One Piece Stampede, which is that the sniper's job is to support the captain, and here it's Helmeppo's job to support Kobe. To reinforce that, it's also Helmeppo that saves Kobe at the end, much like how the Straw Hats have to take care of Luffy after he does his big finishing attacks. Speaking of big attacks, Garp unleashes another ridiculous attack, Galaxy Divide, which is stunning. And I'm getting sick of saying the word stunning in these reviews. I mean, there must be synonyms out there somewhere, but I can't think of any because Oda's art keeps stunning me. The best thing I can say about this moment is that somehow it doesn't undercut Kobe's moment, despite being arguably a much larger scale spectacle. It did briefly make me question whether or not Garp himself could have taken out the arm and avoided the whole being left behind thing. Probably not though, because there was a panel showing the island with multiple arms, so Pizarro had to be disarmed, so to speak, in order to give the Marines an opportunity to escape. Also, Kuzan needed to be distracted, otherwise he would have just frozen the sea. And then it happens. Kobe, for the first time I imagine, unleashes Honesty Impact. And honestly, look, the name sounds a bit wimpy. I feel like Kobe definitely needs to workshop that a bit more. Doesn't quite have the oomph of a Galaxy Impact, although I guess that honesty can sometimes feel that devastating. But again, it was a stunningly drawn attack. Much like everything I said about the battleship panel, you can barely even make out where Kobe is. That is the sheer scale of it. But just like that, the next hero of the Marines rises. We may have lost Garp, but his will lives on rather ferociously in the fists of Kobe. Also, a massive revelation. As part of the punch, there is also a burst of black lightning, which indicates that Kobe is using Conqueror's Haki. Slight note here, it's not just the black lightning that indicates Conqueror's Haki. I also believe that Kobe is using Conqueror's because he didn't make physical contact with the island arm. So if anything, Kobe is using advanced Conqueror's Haki. And while it could be tempting to explain it as advanced armament, those attacks are almost always portrayed without black lightning. Like Luffy versus Kaido, for example. Black lightning was only drawn when Luffy started to channel Conqueror's Haki. So long story less long, Kobe almost certainly does have it, but there are inconsistencies elsewhere in the series that we can go over in another video. Personally, I love it. I think that nothing less than Conqueror's Haki would be acceptable to match Kobe's willpower in this moment. And narrative narratively it also makes sense, because Kobe has long since had the goal to become a Marine Admiral. He wants to be a leader, not so much for a selfish desire to become the Pirate King like say Luffy, but in order to protect people. And of all of the non-Garp Conqueror's Haki users, the one I'd most equate Kobe to is probably Katakuri. His goal was to become a perfect fighter to protect his family. And most people who are aiming for the top of any given field, whatever their respective reason is, tends to be a Conqueror's Haki user. It does make me rethink the idea that you need to be born with Conqueror's Haki, which I suppose was only ever said by Daisy on Amazon Lily, and characters like Treble have gone on to say that those with Conqueror's Haki are chosen by the gods. But the most reliable source of information, Silver's Rayleigh, has never said anything that even comes close to that. Just that most people who make a name for themselves tend to possess this power. So I think it might be awakened through willpower alone. And in the end, as much as some people may be shocked, I think Kobe having Conqueror's Haki was a fairly predictable outcome. He's the next hero of the Marines, the guy who is inheriting the will of Garp. So narratively, there's no way he couldn't have it. I will say that Garp's faith in Kobe here is really touching though, because he's smiling throughout this entire endeavor. Garp knows that Kobe is going to pull it off. In fact, he's more certain of that fact than Kobe himself. And so we're left with a very bittersweet aftermath on Hachinosu. I have such conflicting feelings seeing Garp defeated on the floor, surrounded by the Blackbeard pirates. And the Blackbeard pirates themselves also have very conflicting feelings, by the way. You look at their faces and none of them are happy about this situation. They caught Garp the hero, but they know that Garp the hero beat them. And they also know that there's another mini Garp out there now with more future potential. Although my favorite expression is definitely Avala Pizarro. It's so comical how Hachinosu just looks so cartoonishly annoyed, like a Rrr. At first I couldn't figure out why this was so jarring, but it's because the Blackbeard pirates are almost always shown smiling, kind of like Doflamingo. So to see them making other facial expressions, whether it's anger, annoyance, or just uncertainty, that tells me that they know they've been beaten here today. Kuzan's expression is definitely the hardest to judge. I personally interpret it as Kuzan having to make a very tough decision by impaling his mentor, but his expression also matches the disappointment of the Blackbeard pirates. And in retrospect, without Kuzan, the Blackbeard pirates would have been decimated here. So as much as we as readers doubt Kuzan's loyalty to them, in world, I can't see any reason for the Blackbeard pirates to doubt him anymore. So regardless of whether Kuzan is with us or against us, mission accomplished. It looks like Garp is being frozen in a very Jaguar D Soul style, which might give me more cause for concern if it hadn't been revealed during this very arc that Soul is still alive. In fact, everything about this situation is very Soul. The freezing, the hopeful speech, and even the laughing. So I highly doubt that this is the end of Garp. But also, Garp doesn't know that, and so he's giving a very classic Will of D smile. Thinking about it, Kuzan's ice is the only realistic way that Garp can be restrained. I mean, what other substance could possibly control him? He's not a fruit user, so you can't even encase him in sea stone. I mean, you could, but it would be just as effective as regular stone. So what happens now? Do they try to cash him in with Crossguild? Because that's 3 billion berries, mate, and with what money are we paying that 3 billion berries with? And so does that lead to Crossguild making an alliance with Shanks or Luffy in order to avoid paying their debts? Because I have to say, that would be a very buggy path to alliancehood. But according to our narrator, Garp has now been declared missing. Very ominous. Much like how the narrator said that Vegapunk had gone missing on Egghead Island. And speaking of, the siege of Egghead Island has begun. The Marine Armada of 100 ships has officially arrived. And everything that's happened up until this point, Shanks versus Kid, Blackbeard versus Law, Garp versus Hachinosu, it's all been a series of starters compared to the insanity of a main course that's about to happen on Egghead Island, and I am so ready to get back into it. The siege of Egghead Island has begun. 30,000 Marines, 20 great warships, 9 Vice Admirals, 1 Big Boy Admiral, and 1 Elder Star, but shh, don't tell anyone, he's a secret. All of that versus a hungry group of delinquents and a swamp in a barrel. And you know what? My money's on the delinquents. I have to say though, right now, One Piece is it's seriously messing with my tiny mind brain. Because I loved everything that happened here, but I have questions, so many questions. However, this chapter was nothing short of an absolute gift for everyone, because the first character we see is the objectively best character in the series, Whoopslap, and our great mayor is definitely feeling the loss of Garp. And you can tell that he's trying to keep his classic stoic old man, no wait, stoic is the wrong word. He's trying to maintain his classic grumpy old man persona, but he knows that this is bad, like really bad. The thing about the Slap Man is that Garp's absence will be felt most by people like him, fossils who have accrued enough time units on this planet to have actually lived through the legend that is Garp, rather than those who have merely just heard stories of the past. It's hard to put into words because I really don't know if we have a real life equivalent. I mean, everyone has their own personal hero, heroes. But to whoop slap, Garp has always been there to ensure safety of both the world and Fuchsia Village specifically. And who's going to protect the village now? Makino? The baby? No, the most powerful person currently residing in Fuchsia Village is officially Whoop Slap. He is our best and last line of defense. Speaking of Makino though, I always love seeing her again because we get to see how much the baby has grown. And in this case, the child is massive. This kid's butt is wider than Makino's entire waist. So maybe Shanks isn't the father after all, because this baby has to have some giant genes. There's a quick shot of Dedan and the bandits, and I always feel for Dedan, mostly because she's always crying. I mean, that poor woman. Only a few days ago did she read the news about Sabo, and now this immediately about both Garp and Luffy. From Dedan's perspective, it must be like her whole family is vanishing one by one. Well, I mean, in Sabo's case, reappearing, but for bad reasons, so that we can relive his tragedy all over again. That is the hell that is Dedan's life. But elsewhere around the world, the earthquake montage was scarily cool. And this chapter is just such a solid shot of One Piece because we get to see everything. Everything from the beginning in Fuchsia Village, right up until where the chapter ends in modern day Egghead. And also we get to see everything in between. Bogtown reverse mounted, Water 7 impel down Marijois and even Wano. And others, so many others. It's one of those chapters that just cannot exist in any other series, because no other manga has the body of world building that One Piece comes equipped with 1,000 chapters into serialization. That's why it works so well, because we see all of these nostalgic locations in Crisis. And the thing is, we actually care about all of these locations because we've taken the time to get to know the people there. And it makes me wonder if Imu knew that this was going to happen when he used the weapon, or if he's just like, well, unexpected, but let's roll with it. Personally, I think he knew. I mean, he has to have known. And that opens up all sorts of sinister possibilities. Worst case scenario, things are going pretty bad for the world government. So Imu could just use the weapon again and again and again, just gradually drown the entire world, because he's safe all the way up there at Marijois. To speak of the devastation itself, I think it's practically confirmed that this is what caused the mysterious gaping chasm that is Enies Lobby. The Lelucia Kingdom hole looks exactly like that one, and I think the immediate conclusion is that is Enies Lobby where God Valley used to be. It makes sense because Enies Lobby very close to Marijois, so it's an easy vacation spot for world nobles, sort of like Australians hopping over to New Zealand. But also it's very close to Marineford, so it's easy to protect. In theory, that's what they thought. They were wrong. Here's a crazy thing though. We cut back to Whoop Slap and Fuchsia Village when we see the global water level rising, and the look on his face is unlike anyone else's. And I think that's because he knows exactly what's happening. Because again, he lived through God Valley. The other characters we see are all too young to remember an event like this. But Whoop Slap sees this and he's like, oh no, it's happening again. And all memes aside, this man, he knows so much more than he lets on. We also visited Momoiro Island, although there was no reaction from Dragon or Sabo, just Ivankov and the Okama. I did find it pretty funny that they were upset mainly because they couldn't run on the beach anymore. Firstly, because it's a direct callback to Sanji's time on the island. He did a lot of that. But also, I don't think that they should be too sad about the disappearance of this beach, because thinking about it, when does a beach die? The answer is when it is forgotten. And this beach will live on forever in Sanji's hell memories. Highly underrated part of the chapter now. We then cut to Egghead Island, or outside of Egghead Island, or both in and out actually. It's a conversation between Kizaru and Sentomaru. And that conversation is very casual. In fact, you know what? Even the word conversation is too formal. They are having a chat. And we see a fantastic one-panel flashback of young Kizaru with Vegapunk and Sentomaru, which looks like Kizaru from his original rookie days as depicted from the film's Ed color spread. So he's had this devil fruit for a long time. And just imagine joining the Marines already having one of the most overpowered devil fruits in the entire world. It would be pretty demoralizing for everyone who was recruited alongside him, because we all know who the future admiral is gonna be. What I find most interesting about this panel is that Kizaru isn't specifically dressed in any Marine attire. So could this be from before he joined the Marines? Maybe Vegapunk found Kizaru just like he did Sentomaru, and only after that did Kizaru join. Hence why this is oddly personal. Sentomaru referring to Kizaru as uncle and such. Bearing in mind that Sentomaru is only 34 years old, so this image can't be more than 30 years old. Kizaru would have been in his late 20s, I think, which feels like it might be a potentially late time to join the Marines, but yeah, who knows. What I really hope is that this flashback gets expanded on, but I highly doubt it will. It seems more like an SBS gift. Oda makes this one panel and then expects someone to ask a question about it later, at which point we get the backstory in great length. Also, this whole conversation takes place while Kizaru and Sentomaru are eating. In fact, this whole section is eating. We even see the Marines served food, and even Saint Saturn is downing a thick celestial sausage in his quarters, and later on the Straw Hats are seen eating as well. So in the world of wanky storytelling, this is what we call a motif. And this motif exists because this is the reality of a siege. They're not exactly packed with action, because the idea behind them is for the siegers to starve the siegees and make them surrender. That or the other way around. For the siegees to last long enough to cost the siegers so many resources and be unable to maintain the blockade. And we learned that there were 30,000 Marines currently present. And that sort of force is not cheap to feed. So what we're doing here is starting in a place where both sides have plenty of food, and I think it would be really cool if over the duration of the siege, we gradually saw food depleting on both sides. Or just one side, because this is classic war. The best fed army wins. So with that in mind, a good move here for anyone wanting to sabotage a certain Luffy would be to figure out how to shut down the food replicators. Saint Saturn then mentions Bonnie, and this is a bit confusing, because Saturn says to just leave her be, which is oddly merciful considering she's a wanted criminal, but also odd because he ordered the sinking of the ship just on the off chance that one of the researchers knew something, so why not Bonnie as well? She seems oddly in the clear at the moment. We have 9 vice admirals involved here, including old favorites like Doberman and new favorites like Doll, who a very interesting segment of this community refer to as, quote, mummy. Wait, no, it needs to be American. I guess that's mommy. Anyway, we did see a couple of these vice admirals in recent Egghead chapters, but aside from Doberman, I think that none of these characters existed before Egghead Island. They have some pretty wacky designs as well, which is always nice to see, especially with vice admirals. Vice admirals usually just look like standard dudes in suits. So thankfully, we've got a guy here who looks like a long-lost descendant of Oz and a little old lady with a crazy cool pumpkin-y hairstyle. And mate, then there's this boy over here who has an undetermined amount of chins. I personally count 6, but there could be more because we still haven't seen his full body design. 9 vice admirals is a lot though. There were only 5 leading the buster call on any slobby. And I really don't know if we're getting away from this situation without seeing that increased firepower. Also, Saint Saturn says, don't tell anyone I'm here, which, yeah, I'm sure that's gonna go to plan, Mr. Saturn. Good luck with that. And as soon as he said that, I imagined in any slobby style scenario. You know, when Luffy and Lucci were fighting on one of the ships and then Onigumo ordered his men to destroy the ship because of absolute justice and such. That could happen here. Fighting breaks out on one of the ships and an absolute justicely inclined Marine just decides to, let's get rid of it. We've got 100 more. But that's the ship that Saint Saturn is on. And then he dies and everyone's like, welp, how about we just blame this one on Luffy as well? Cutting to Egghead Island itself, I love the revelation that York has been caught this whole time while speaking to the elders. And this also came equipped with a fun Kizaru moment where he has to be told that he has the power to listen in on the conversation. And I've missed this. Kizaru's character quirk is being completely unaware of the world around him, with the exception of whatever he is laser-like focusing on at that moment. And the final spread looks amazing. A perfectly balanced Oda group shot. You can linger on it for ages and still find fun new details. In particular, I love that everyone looks so calm. Zoro, Nami, and Usopp in particular look amazing. They're so confident. And it's very rare to see both Nami and Usopp looking just like this level of in control. One or both of them are usually freaking out, especially if you were to say discover 30,000 Marines currently surrounding your location. I'd like to point out that Sanji is exactly where he wants to be, which is between York's legs, hence why he's having the time of his life. But look, despite the cheerful demeanor happening here, we have some explaining to do. I know I've joked that after seeing all of this stuff with Shanks and Blackbeard and Garp that we might just skip Egghead Island, but I never expected that to actually happen. It's legitimately like we've skipped the climax of the arc and went straight to the after party. All of the immediate problems are solved. York apprehended, the Seraphim I guess are under control, or at the very least everyone's quite calm about them. Bonnie and Stella are no longer missing, which that was a big one. Essentially, every complication that Oda set up has been solved off screen. And honestly, part of me hopes that Oda won't even bother explaining, because it's the Straw Hats. We've seen them do this how many times? Like 40? We know that they know how to solve problems and come out on top. This is just another day at the office. So hey, do we really need to show our working for this one? Especially after Kaido. After dealing with him, how exciting is it gonna be to see a lesser villain painstakingly foiled? Probably not very. You can only go up from Kaido and York is not up. I do wonder if it was Oda's plan to do this, or if he just did the maths on how long Egghead Island would be during one of his breaks and thought to himself, that's a little bit too long, and decided to skip it. I mean, the idea being that the best part of the mystery is the not knowing bit, so as soon as we find out, let's just skip the rest, get to the conclusion, and let's deal with the next thing. He probably did have this in mind because it's a pretty great way to structure the scene, as well as the turning point of the entire arc. I will say that the only thing I demand an explanation for is Bonnie and Kuma's memories. That was a pretty big dramatic crux, and it gives me fictional pirate whiplash to see Bonnie and Vegapunk just chilling and not addressing addressing the situation they were in. Also unsolved is the Monitor Monster and Caribou and the Blackbeard Pirates. So Oda, look, you've still got some work to do here. All I know is that whatever happened, Chopper has seen some shit. This was not an easy night for him. Also, Lucci is there, which is delightful, but also jarring. It's like the Homelander reaction. Lucci was invited to the party after trying to kill everyone. He's just like, yeah, okay, sure, I'll go along with this. And also, it's surreal to see a world where Lucci is just hanging out. He's just part of the crew, especially while he's listening to a call between his bosses. Like, I really want to know what Lucci is thinking in this moment. There's a few key characters not present, including Robin, Kaku, Stussy, the Seraphim, and the other Vegapunks, including Shaka, who got shot in the head. The most curious one to me being Kaku. What could he be doing all on his own? Because surely we don't trust him to be on his own, or in the presence of a Vegapunk, or especially in the presence of Robin. But we shouldn't be so quick to move on just yet, because this chapter was bigger than I think we realize. Imu's decision here has quite literally changed the world. This isn't an exaggerated YouTube title, that's actually what he's done. And there's going to be a lot of consequences as well as quite a few hidden gems that we're going to dive into in the next video. In the blink of an eye, Kizaru's invasion has begun, and the Marines are about to take some pretty devastating losses. Meanwhile, the crew's off to Elbaf, but there's something very strange about Yuri Bonnie. Oh, and also Rob Lucci won't stop looking at Stussy, which is making her mildly uncomfortable, but to be fair, that's not the biggest issue in the grand scheme of things. The biggest issue is that Luffy is probably about to fight a Marine Admiral. Egghead Island is such a weird arc, because I genuinely don't know if we're in the middle of it or in the end of it. It could go either way at the moment. What I do know is that you should never give Luffy a telepathic snail, but I loved this call because it reminded me of the Luffy conversation with Big Mom on Fishman Island. The difference is that this time Luffy has the immediate strength and leverage to back up his words. It's just one panel, but Morgan's listening in on this is amazing, because before any of this happened, he fabricated the story about Luffy kidnapping Vegapunk and taking Egghead Island. But now Luffy has actually gone and made that come true. Somewhat. Most of the Vegapunks are okay with it, but Luffy is pretty coldly using York as a hostage. So this really worked out quite well for Morgans, and I think that even he is surprised at just how perfectly things have gone. We also get to see Vivi briefly, which I will never not love. Even if she's off to the side, I enjoy having her involved. Like, she's gradually becoming more and more entangled with the main plot, and soon enough we should have our full Straw Hat reunion. The funniest part is that this conversation is being aired to the entire Marine fleet. And Luffy, look, he genuinely sounds quite evil. So this will only further spread the legend of this fearsome Emperor of the Sea. Now, a lot of questions left over from the last chapter were answered, particularly in regards to our missing characters. To start with, we see Robin, who is pretty damn injured, and we can sort of put together how this happened. The last we saw of Robin was, I believe, in 1078. That was when Atlas all of a sudden remembered that, hey, we should check the basement, which means that Robin's group, which was just Robin, Atlas, and Chopper, they would have been the ones to discover York and Stella. So what we potentially missed out on was a Robin versus York fight, and hence why she's so injured now. They also would have found the missing Cypherpol agents, and seeing them in this chapter was a very unexpected highlight for me. Seeing these random nameless people. It's an underrated panel, but it goes to show how well Oda portrays emotion, because I genuinely feel for these nameless dudes when I see them crying tears of joy over the simple act of eating food after being starved. Whereas you compare that to the food focus of the last chapter, which was Saint Saturn stuffing himself with celestial sausages, but doing so like it was a burden, like, oh, how tiresome, sausage again. He's just doing it to refuel. There's nothing that he appreciated about the experience. Unlike these agents who are now surely our allies, because that would be very typical One Piece. Luffy and the Straw Hats often succeed by winning over various groups of people who all provide a small but integral contribution. Kaku is also here and seemingly the most injured of all of the alive characters, and Kaku says that he was fighting against two Seraphim, and at least one of which is probably S-Hawk. So I guess either S-Bear or S-Shark got away from Lucci and Osanji. I mean, it probably wasn't S-Snake because she would have petrified him, but either way, Kaku became the filling of a very rough Seraphim sandwich. And look, never count anyone out with Dr. Chopper around and all of the advanced science and stuff that we have, but from what we see, it looks like Kaku's going to be pretty inactive for the rest of the arc. We also see Rob Lucci being a bit of a naughty pigeon man, reporting all of the info to the Marines, and this makes sense, that's his job. At the same time though, it came right after that panel of Saturn comparing humans to insects, and at some point, Lucci may need to make a decision. His life is no concern whatsoever for the invading armada, and Lucci isn't exactly someone compelled by a sense of duty or greater purpose. He does what he does for the joys of legally killing people. I don't see him being a willing sacrifice for the greater good of the world government. So who knows, maybe that means that Lucci's coming with us to Elbaf. To jump around a bit, Saturn's insect comment is what makes the end of the chapter so powerful. Kizaru launches his attack and Sentomaru orders the Pacifista to destroy all enemies, remembering that there's 30,000 marines here, or from a certain perspective, 30,000 insects that are about to be crushed. This one act by Kizaru has probably just cost thousands of lives in an instant. I mean, Kizaru himself even says that the casualties will be enormous. And I said this in the last chapter, but their presence here is to be a meat wall, to physically provide a blockade. Their actual lives carry no more value to Saturn than bricks and concrete. In fact, they may even carry less value. But big revelation now, because Pythagoras and Shaka are seemingly confirmed dead. And yes, only in a series like One Piece can we say that it's news that a person we saw get shot in the head is dead. But I did say seemingly though, because even though, yeah, it's outright stated, it's so hard for me to trust One Piece. I have trust issues with this series. If so though, I also have a big sense of dread remaining in me, because why would we stop here? There's plenty of other Vegapunks left to sacrifice. Edison, for example, might be a good choice because he's a robot, but right now my eye is actually on Lilith. She's been given command of the Vega Force, so she won't actually be on the Thousand Sunny during the escape attempt. So there's a potential heroic sacrifice chance right there, which would be really sad because Lilith seems so happy about leaving the island and getting to explore somewhere else. And as for the Seraphim themselves, they've been caught, and here S-Hawk is particularly adorable, completely undignified like we've never seen Mihawk. And all of them are pretty much unharmed, which is scary because it means that none of them were actually defeated. They were just caught. That's the best we can do against them. S-Snake is being particularly talkative at the moment, informing the Cypherpol agents that they don't have orders to kill them, which is true. York ordered the Seraphim to kill everyone except for herself, Stella, and the underground agents. So I guess this confirms that York still has command priority. We still haven't gotten around that. So until Saint Saturn intervenes, that's not going to change. Which is another bad thing for Lucci in particular, actually, because the Seraphim still have orders to brutally murder him. But I love the solution that Luffy mistook S-Snake for Hancock and asked her to undo the petrification. And as I think we've all been assuming, S-Snake does go on to fall in love with Luffy, which could be our ultimate trump card here. Because even if Saturn does take command, could Luffy supersede those orders with S-Snake specifically? After all, what is a planet to a sun? But again, S-Snake is very talkative all of a sudden. She's definitely developing an individual personality rather rapidly, which is great for her. And eventually, I imagine that all of the Seraphim will develop personalities and potentially break out of the command structure altogether, thus essentially creating younger, more powerful copies of the Seven Warlords, which is good in cases like Jinbei because S-Shark would probably be a nice, honorable ally, but terrifying in cases like S-Flamingo and S-Crocodile, because they're maniacal sociopaths who both have dreams of world domination. The most important thing to note here is definitely the bubbles though, because it is stated that they are very effective against Devil Fruit users. So could the answer to this problem be something as simple as trapping Kizaru in a bubble? Or the opposite, the world government gain control of a bubble weapon and use it on Luffy or someone. Whatever the case, it feels like this was dropped to seed a future use of it. To address York herself, she mainly seems to spend time on the floor, and she's also becoming very generically evil now. So I wonder if she's on her way to transforming into a Caesar clown-like character, whose role on the crew is best defined as the comical hostage. Although we already have our comedy villain still out there somewhere with Caribou. He's on Egghead Island, and in fact he's the only character that we don't get an update on. But the escape plan is in motion and our destination is Elbaf, which makes sense, it's the only logical place to go. Our other option is Winter Island, which is deserted and all out in the open. And also at this point in One Piece, we're running out of islands that the world government don't have control over. So Elbaf could be our next big arc. It could be the Whole Cake Island to Egghead Zoo, or Elbaf could be another stop to something even bigger. All I know is when I read this, I had the exact same reaction as Luffy and Usopp did, because I was actually kind of worried that maybe we wouldn't go to Elbaf, because we already got to see it with Kid and Shanks, and if we kept moving forward in the world with the Straw Hats, then we would have to leave it behind. So this is very good news, and it actually looks like Egghead could end quite soon if we follow the escape plan, which right now seems just a little little bit too convenient, I would say. Complications will and are currently occurring. But with that said, the arc could still end quite soon, but I think it would take some big character sacrifices to make that happen. Now we should address the Bonnie moment though, because Luffy says exactly what I was thinking last chapter regarding her light switch mood change. Something about Bonnie has changed, a big thing. And what worries me isn't so much that we as readers notice this change, but that someone as completely oblivious as Luffy did. That to me feels like a big, hey, pay attention to this moment. And as always, online theorists have jumped to the conclusion that this is an imposter Bonnie, specifically a Katarina Devon imposter Bonnie, because she is one of the few unaccounted for Titanic captains, and admittedly is very likely to be on the Blackbeard pirate vessel near Egghead Island. Currently, I'm not convinced though. It's a very suspicious shift, but I don't know if it's Devon worthy. And look, one day the Katarina Devon theorists are going to be right. Her ability will be used to imitate a character, it will be revealed, and it will shock all of us. And on that day, the Devon theorists are going to make a big deal out of it, claiming all sorts of dubs and I called zits, whilst conveniently forgetting about the hundreds of times that they were wrong. But even without the Devon shenaniganry, this needs an explanation. I'm all good with the climax of Egghead Island action happening off screen, but the Bonnie Kuma business needs to be addressed, which I don't know how that happens. A flashback of the flashback or something? Skipping action is one thing. Skipping crucial character development is another, which we actually don't do in this chapter with Admiral Kizaru. Our tall boy finally gets a character moment because for the first time in the series, Kizaru displays an ideal, which is that he can't just zip past Sentomaru, because he can't ignore a man determined to do his duty. So Kizaru first goes after him instead of going straight into the dome. What's most impressive about this is that Kizaru says this so bluntly to Saturn, with the confidence that Saint Saturn will either respect or understand his decision, which, to my surprise, he does. After his speech about insects, I kind of expected Saturn to just go, shut up, Kizaru, and you just do what I tell you to do. And what I'm telling you to do is get me more sausages. But maybe he recognizes that Kizaru is a bit too powerful to be controlled by that. Whatever the case, it's a great development, and I'm very keen to explore Kizaru more in the coming chapters. I really don't think there will be a better moment in this series to flesh him out, because he's so deeply connected to the primary characters of this arc. It's now or never, so let's do this. And we finally get back to the idea of Sentomaru having the world's greatest defense. His fight against Rob Lucci was, look, a bit underwhelming to say the least, but this clash against Kizaru looks amazing. Against a Marine Admiral kicking him at light speed, Sentomaru is holding his own. And then Luffy. Luffy notices Kizaru with this look of absolute dread in his eyes. All semblance of previous joy wiped away. So here's a small thing. Right before this, there's one panel where we see Luffy bouncing around on the clouds, which reminds me of recent anime episodes, with his awakening giving the ground these sorts of bouncy properties. So the sky clouds are probably where he got the idea to do that. The reason why I bring this up though is because that is the last time we see Luffy before the end of the chapter, and it serves as a good contrast. Here, he's being a complete goofball, and then when Kizaru arrives, it is immediate serious mode. Luffy didn't even get this overwhelmed when he saw Kaido for the first time. So knowing this, is Luffy going to run away? Because we've had this situation before on Dressrosa, and Luffy said, nah mate, I'm sick of running. Or quite specifically, he stated, I don't care if you're a Navy Admiral or an Emperor of the Sea. If I don't beat each and every one of you, I'll never be king of the pirates. Well, he's beaten an Emperor of the Sea, so now it's time to do the same to a Navy Admiral. And as ill-advised as it may be for the sake of the plan, Luffy has never really been the type to do, the smart thing. In his mind, a Marine Admiral is here. This Admiral stands between him and becoming the Pirate King. Therefore, said Admiral needs to be beaten. In fact, Luffy would have kept on fighting against Fujitora if Harudin didn't take him away, which also led to a funny scene where Zoro sees this as an opportunity to switch places. And they are both so much stronger now. I don't see either of them willingly running away from this. This might even be another case where we split up the crew like on Dressrosa. Send an advance team safely to Elbaf whilst finishing business on Egghead. But however long we have left here, it seems like Elbaf is incoming, and we have a lot to discuss about that in the next video. Luffy just made a big mistake. His mistake was not finishing his meat before leaping into combat with a Marine Admiral. Doesn't matter though, because Luffy's confident. He's got Haki, he's got gears, and he's got these sick floating future boot things. So Kizaru doesn't know what's about to hit him, but just between you and me, it's gonna be one of the aforementioned boots. One Piece is back. I feel like I say that every week because we're on a bit of a brutal schedule right now. It's been chapter break, chapter break, chapter break, and I think probably chapter break. And next week it'll be a break too. That's because Eiichiro Oda went on a lovely work holiday to Los Angeles to attend a screening of live-action One Piece, where he very sneakily snuck in to watch everyone's reactions. And normally I would say, Oda, mate, you do you. Live your best life and all of that, but don't leave me on this wild cliffhanger when you're doing it. Luffy vs. Kizaru is actually happening, and it's been about 15 years in the making, because that's about how long it's been since their first interaction on Sabaody. Luffy now claims to be 100 times stronger than he was back then, which is a power scaling metric that he blatantly stole from Shaki, who stated that Rayleigh was 100 times stronger than the supernova. So current Luffy, he sees Kizaru and he says, you know, I'm something of a Rayleigh myself. Even going so far as to mimic his mentor's method of engaging Kizaru with a big ol' kick. And who's to say that he's wrong? I look at that Luffy smile and I'm like, this boy got this. But do you know who doesn't got this? Who doesn't have it? Whatever it is, he doesn't have anything. It's Sentomaru, because he has nothing. So this is a weird one for me. This fight both went better and also worse than I expected. Better because, come on, it's Kizaru. It was never going to go well for Sentomaru. But also worse because I'm still waiting to see this greatest defense in the world that Sentomaru claims to have. And I don't know if we'll ever see it. So Sentomaru, he takes another L and ends up on the floor. But that aside, he did have some genuinely cool moments. Like when he grabbed his axe and did that nice heavy horizontal swing. A swing that, and you may not notice this immediately, Kizaru had to dodge. This was not his Logia doing all the work. And something we don't think about a whole lot these days is how Haki interacts with Logia powers, because post-time skip has heavily focused on paramecia and Zoan abilities. And the few Logia users we have studied haven't exactly been the freshest fruit at the market. Carabo and Caesar were both easily dismissed by the mere mention of Haki, so it's great to finally get back to an arc with some competent Logia users. Because I imagine that Sentomaru is imbuing his axe with Haki. Someone of his level and of his very specific armament Haki mastery is surely doing this, which is interesting because it means that in this panel, Kizaru is actually dodging. He's not letting Sentomaru cut through him. He actively has to separate his body to avoid a brutal chop death. So I guess the way Kizaru is fighting here is more akin to how Katakuri fights. He has to consciously Logia himself, sort of like manual breathing, which now both you and I are doing. But my question here is, does Kizaru have future sight? Not that he would have necessarily needed it for this strike, but I feel like at the higher levels it would be almost necessary for a Logia user. It would be pretty fun as well. The idea that Kizaru is so slow because he can afford to be casual. He always knows what's coming up and he can always maneuver to avoid it, so what's the rush? We also learn that Kizaru is the one who taught Sentomaru how to fight, which actually changes a lot. It definitely makes Kizaru a ton more terrifying. In the fan base, he's often thought of as the admiral who relies a little bit too much on his devil fruit, and a lot of that is due to Film Z, where Zephyr told him exactly that. Zephyr was all like, well, Kizaru, you gotta use more Haki. But this was back in the day when Haki was brand new and fanciful concept. But after that non-canon film came out, there was this impression that Kizaru was ride or die for magical fruit, which is definitely not the case. Speaking of Zephyr, one of the unnamed Vice Admirals, who my artists refer to as Worm Admiral and Chin Admiral respectively, seems to have a very Zephyr-esque arm, which is really cool, and his whole design is starting to remind me a bit of Queen, because they both have rotund physiques, with vertical black and white striped clothing, and all of the cyborg parts. We get to see Dole in action as well, and I'm really glad that Oda is giving time to the Vice Admirals, and I really hope that there's going to be more. I've actually been working on a Marine video, and I counted them. Throughout the series, we've been introduced to at least 26 Vice Admirals. And despite their sheer numerosity, they almost never do anything. The Vice Admirals sent to any slobby sat pretty tight, and we also didn't get a whole lot of them during the Paramount War either. So I really want to see these guys in action. Although with the Pacifista on their side right now, there might not be much call for it. But in this chapter, we are treated to a flashback of child Sentomaru, who is adorable, such a sweet little dumpling, and Kizaru agrees. He even reminisces about how cute Sentomaru was back in the day. But none of this flashback was something that I expected to see. Sentomaru's past was revealed in a recent SBS, so none of the information in this chapter is actually new, but I'm still really glad to see it, because I'm not a huge fan of the recent trend of storytelling through extended media, because Oda's strength isn't writing so much as it is marrying writing to perfect art. So it's the small things like seeing Sentomaru get really excited and drooling over onigiri, stuff that you really can't do with just words. Now, on the other hand, young Kizaru looks kinda homeless, or maybe like a stay-at-home stoner. Although it's now confirmed that at the time he was a Marine, and probably quite a high-ranking Marine as well. So Sentomaru is 34 years old, and according to the timeline, Kizaru joined the Marines 32 years ago. So this still would have been pretty early days for him. So I feel like he's probably around captain rank. That's the level where you start about to get to go off and lead your own missions, or maybe even a Commodore. Or maybe even higher, considering that he's had this devil fruit potentially since he joined. So I imagine he was promoted quite rapidly, because you don't put the guy with the light low gear powers on as a chore boy, at least not for too long. But with this, Egghead has a bit of a theme going on here with admirals and their mentor-mentee relationships. Guzan, of course, betrayed his marine mentor, and now Borsellino is in a situation where he has to stand against his own student. So I love all of the personal connections being examined, and my only wish is for more of it. But Kizaru does defeat Sentomaru and of course takes the Authority Cube. This chapter also has a quick recap of the cube hierarchy. In fact, I think almost every chapter where the cubes have been irrelevant does have a similar recap, because it's mildly complicated to keep up with. Probably not if you're reading chapters in bulk, but as a weekly experience, and especially with so many breaks, this information has a tendency to get dumped and forgotten by our mind brains. Hence why Oda always puts in the reminder. But in this hierarchy, attaining Sentomaru's cube would still put Kizaru below the Vegapunks, so they could take the Pacifista back, but that does seem unlikely. 50 Mark III Pacifista units are now under the control of the Marines. So I think that any hope of retaining Egghead Island is now officially lost. And knowing this, a certain Rob Lucci betrayed the group this chapter, although is betrayal really the right word? Let's be real here, he is quite the murdersome prick of a leopard, but he's also a very honest leopard. Lucci was incredibly honest about his intention from the get-go. It was Kaku who was the one who was trying to deceive Luffy and Zoro. So is anyone surprised that Lucci did this? And I don't just mean readers, I mean people in the world, the characters. Because we remember who this guy is, right? The murder-loving world government assassin. Although something quite fun is that this is even hinted on the cover of Weekly Shonen Jump this week. We have Luffy and a leopard running next to him, looking like he's going to pounce at any second. I will say that Lucci unexpectedly had the funniest line of the chapter. That part where he says that the combination of he and Kizaru mean that everyone is as good as dead. I got a good laugh out of that, because what I think he means to say is that now Kizaru is here, you're all as good as dead, and I, Rob Lucci, am also here. Dude thinks he's on the team. But regardless, Rob Lucci has engaged in fight battling with Zoro, which is very exciting, and I love Zoro's dialogue where he said, looks like he waited for backup to grow a spine. Because it's like, mate, this is why I own a life-size statue of you. Because I don't know how it's possible for a line to be so damn cold and yet achieve such a searing burn. We don't even need to do the fight. Lucci has already lost. But Zoro and Lucci is a very nice contrast to personalities. The assassin versus the swordsman. Because with Zoro, it's all about pride. He doesn't resort to underhanded tactics. It's just whoever is the best at the thing wins. Whereas Rob Lucci is completely different. He's an opportunist who only strikes at the most ideal moments. It's not about being the best, it's about finding the weakness of the person who is the best to then brutally kill murder them. I do really like the idea of the first mate taking on a former main antagonist though. It's a good way to show progress, and hey, maybe it'll start a trend of just passing Lucci down the line. Luffy beat him on any slobby, Zoro can beat him on Egghead, maybe in the next arc we'll pass him to Sanji and Sanji can do something. Although Sanji did already briefly face Rob Lucci in One Piece Stampede. What Lucci did accomplish here though was fingering Stussy, which is what he literally did. I don't necessarily want to say fingered, but I thought about it and none of the synonyms are any better. Because he doesn't shoot or stab her. I guess you could say he penetrated her, but again, same issue. And she's in pretty bad shape. Like Kaku, she's probably down for the rest of the arc, but unlike Kaku, she isn't stuck in bubble prison. Great Sanji moment there, by the way. This is one of those times where Sanji proves his infinite worth to the crew, because he has very quick thinking. On this occasion, he condemns Kaku to bubble prison, which is a very good idea, because even though Kaku is injured, all it takes is one precise action, and that is another dead Vegapunk. It's also not out of the question to think that, hey, maybe the secret agent assassin is just pretending to be injured and waiting for a chance to strike. So Sanji did some pretty swift calculations here. Although I do have one slight question, just one. I would say that it's particularly impressive that Sanji remained so calm considering that it was Stussy who got struck, because usually he would completely lose his mind if a woman was hurt. So I'm surprised he didn't insist on fighting Lucci himself for some sort of divine retribution. I do feel like we're still missing one key element of chaos here, because we've got Zoro handling Lucci, and as we'll talk about in a bit, we've got Luffy handling Kizaru. But I feel like there needs to be one more threat for the others to deal with, and we do have quite a few options for that. Firstly, I know I bring him up pretty much every week, but Caribou, he is on the island, he's in the lava phase, he's out there doing something. I don't know, maybe, I don't know that for a fact. Maybe he's doing nothing, but he is out there somewhere. Secondly, of course, we have the Blackbeard Pirates, and I think it would be particularly interesting to add a third-party faction. And I also think that a Titanic captain would present a real problem for the rest of the crew and maybe give them a taste of their impending future. Then thirdly, and most obviously, is the Seraphim. If someone releases them from their various bubbles, then York's command is still active. So in regards to that, right now the Cypherpole agents are in the basement with the Seraphim, so there's a maybe scenario where they manage to escape and S-Snake uses cuteness to get one of them to do something to get rid of the bubbles. And tell you what though, these bubbles are a game changer. This teeny tiny bubble gun has the power to incapacitate potentially any Devil Fruit user. Because if it can handle the Seraphim, then it's going to be a very short list of people who are not instantly beaten by bubbles. But where this chapter truly shines is with its many references to Sabadi, and that entire arc is now coming full circle. There's no less than 3 pretty blatant Sabadi mentions. The first is Usopp seeing Kizaru and flashing back to terror, just sheer terror. Kizaru himself then gets quite nostalgic over the last time he encountered the Straw Hats. Apparently that was a good day for him. I don't know why, because that was not a successful mission, not at all. He had them all cornered, and then each and every one of them managed to escape and become more powerful, and now he's an emperor. You messed up, Kizaru. This is probably the biggest blunder in the series. But the third Sabadi mention is of course Luffy. But one note about Luffy though. At the end of chapter 1090, he switched to his serious face when he sensed Kizaru. He had this look of utter dread. But then we cut to the first shot of Luffy in this chapter, and it shows him eating casually, as if he just sort of forgot about Kizaru. So what happened here, right, is that he felt Kizaru. Luffy went, uh-oh, this is a bad thing, but also I should really finish this meat first. So look, what this means is that Sentomaru's sacrifice will not be in vain, not at all, because he allowed Luffy to eat more food, which is canonically actually very useful. But then seeing Luffy kick Kizaru, it got me genuinely pumped. And it is absolutely surreal to see Kizaru actually needing to block an attack, instead of just turning into light, and especially an attack from Luffy. He's not even using advanced Haki either. I mean, yeah, there's the black lightning, but Luffy is clearly making contact with Kizaru. Just like that. Contact. So this kick is just a warm-up. There's no gears either. This is just raw base Luffy within a sprinkling of Haki. But what I love most is his smile, his confidence, because none of that was happening during Sabadi. Luffy was scared and ultimately in tears over his own powerlessness. But now Luffy knows that he can back this up. Also, small thing, Luffy remembered Kizaru's name. He called him Kizaru, not Light Guy or some sort of other Luffy-esque nickname. And I guess what this confirms is that Kizaru is the next Straw Hat. Luffy generally uses nicknames for everyone except for his crew. And that's why so many people were sold that Yamato wasn't going to join because Luffy had a nickname. And to be fair, they were right. But Luffy also remembers the names of people who have defeated him or proved themselves to him. For example, Kaido, Katakuri, Crocodile. So he views Kizaru as a very serious opponent. And paradoxically, that's probably why he's smiling like this. He has that Roger Whitebeard battle excitement going on. This isn't just a fight. This is genuine fun. Serious, but fun. So the big question, will Luffy defeat Kizaru? I don't know, but I do know one thing. He isn't going to lose. This is going to be a win, a tie, or a fight interrupted. The outcome for true Sabadi poetic justice would probably be ordering Esper to use his Devil Fruit to send Kizaru to the other side of the world, thus allowing Luffy to forget about him and just move on. Because it is so hard to see Luffy disengaging with Kizaru unless he is beaten or otherwise incapacitated, maybe by a bubble. Because Kizaru is relentless. He is not going to give in either. So he needs to be dealt with one way or another. But a reason for Kizaru not to outright lose is that a fight battling victory isn't the goal here. We're trying to make sure that Vegapunk escapes. That's our goal. And no pirate in this world has a record without retreat. Even Goldie Roger, the Pirate King, was notorious for running away even during his prime. Although one reason for Kizaru to be beaten is that at this point, everyone in the world would have to take Luffy seriously as an emperor. So we don't get any of this Rob Lucci, don't accept him business. Because just as a reminder, an admiral in One Piece has never been defeated, at least not on screen. Except for that one time when it happened to Kuzan, but that was also by an admiral. But the most exciting reason I could think of to actually beat Kizaru would be that it would force Saint Saturn to act. To think that we've won, for the Marines to think that, we've lost, and at which point Saturn has to take matters into his own very elderly hands. So he gets up there, takes command priority over the Seraphim, and whips out his overwhelming silhouette-based powers. At some stage, he should at the very least take command of the Seraphim, because that's Chekhov's command cube. We don't say that the elders hold the highest authority to not see him use it. But let me know in the comments, Luffy versus Kizaru. How do you think this plays out? Kizaru is in big trouble. If this dude thought that he could wander on into a high-tech super lab all on his own without a giant toon man threatening to consume him, well then he thought wrong. And while he did manage to destroy one robot, what he did go and do was awaken a second, much more powerful robot, so we're going to call it a net loss. And elsewhere, his former admiral counterpart is also having robot troubles, with Sakazuki trying and failing to kill murder one Bartholomew Kuma. However, his actions mark the first time since Marineford to feature all three original admirals fighting in the same arc. Egghead Island has no right to be this good. None. It is going down as a top 5 arc at the very least, because Oda just keeps throwing more and more amazing stuff at us. Like a guy who I absolutely did not expect to see in this chapter, Sakazuki. And what's more is that we get to see him outside of an office for a change. This is the first time he's done anything outside of his office post-time skip. And Sakazuki makes the most of every second of his excursion to the Holy Land. The attack he uses on Kuma is called Hellhound or Darkhound or Mago. They're all correct, it depends on which version you read or watch. Doesn't matter, because it's the same attack that Sakazuki used on Whitebeard to blow off half of his face. And I love it. Sometimes in stories like these, characters feel deliberately held back by plot constraints, as if the characters themselves are aware that I can't kill someone here because they're important there, so it feels like they're nerfing themselves in fights. They don't go all out. But Sakazuki feels completely different. This man probably doesn't even use the bathroom because he has no shits to give and a completely no-nonsense approach to life. He jumps into action, and the very first thing he does is go for the kill and ends up blowing off another half of someone's face. Although I guess with Kuma, the fact that he can still function without half a head is a bit easier to believe than Whitebeard, given that Kuma's a cyborg and all. But something like this is what I've been craving from Sakazuki for, I actually don't know. How long has it been? When did the post-time skip start? October of 2010. So this is something I've wanted to see for about 13 years now. Mate, I'm old. We'll get to Kuma in a bit, but something I want to highlight is that we see some consequences of the revolutionary raid, with the world nobles complaining about their food reserves. From Wano on, it seems like Oda is really hitting home the importance of food in One Piece. And you can almost use food as a bit of a compass to track a character's ideology, such as Hungry Luffy on Wano. He was a little bit disappointed, but incredibly grateful for a small bowl of plain rice. And then you contrast that against the world nobles, complaining about having to eat something less than the perfect cuisine it is that they demand. And this is building tension on both sides. The world nobles are not happy that Sakazuki failed to execute Kuma here, and it was also under his leadership that the Revolutionary Army managed to invade Marijois, and that's the reason why they currently can't eat their fancy things. Their sacred home is becoming a battleground just a little too often, and that's just not cricket. From their perspective, how much longer are they going to tolerate this failure of a fleet admiral? And on the other side, how much longer is Sakazuki going to tolerate being ordered around like an errand boy? He became the fleet admiral because he had a vision of justice that he wanted to enact. But in reality, the fleet admiral job is just being a middleman responsible for enacting whatever it is the world nobles want you to do. Sakazuki is the logistics guy. He doesn't get to make choices himself, let alone try to mold the world to his vision of justice. Now, with the big man himself, is it just me, or does Oda really give the Kuma drawing some solid emotion in this chapter? Because every time Sakazuki hits him, Kuma looks like he is genuinely in pain, especially the last hit where I think Sakazuki melts his foot off. It's interesting because Kuma is starting to remind me a lot of the Seraphim, which he is also. Kuma is a lot of things. He's a man, he's a cyborg, he's a complete series of cyborgs, he's a biological winged cyborg, and of course, a policeman. But the Seraphim were introduced to us as these unfeeling puppets, and they've gradually started showing emotions and agency, which is what Kuma Classic Edition is doing right now. And this all potentially ties into that short flashback we saw of Kuma and Stella. The one where Stella was saying that a certain scholar in West Blue once said that people lose exactly 21 grams of weight after they die, and implied that this was the weight of the human soul. Not at all a ridiculous proposition in One Piece, because we have quite literally seen souls. We've even seen a soul trying to leave a body in the case of Lao Ji, so I guess this fella right here weighs 21 grams. And Vegapunk was actually trying to use Kuma to observe the soul from a scientific perspective, meaning that yes, Kuma may have given up his mind and his agency, but he is still alive, so does he have yet to lose his soul? Question mark. And on some level, is it his soul that is overriding the programming that we're seeing right now? And I don't know if this is getting a bit too deep for One Piece, but are we heading towards a situation where Kumabot sacrifices himself, and then afterwards Stella observes that at the time of death, Kuma is 21 grams lighter, and thus it's confirmed that he's finally 100% gone. Speaking of gone, Kuma then does that. He blips away again. And I would be shocked if he was going anywhere except for Egghead Island at this point. I just can't think of another place it is that he would want to go. And maybe that was his intention the whole time. I know that this whole Kuma business does parallel the actions of the ancient robot, which we'll get to, but I wonder if Kuma's abilities are restricted by the red line, as in it's so tall that he can't just send people flying past it, which is why he himself had to slam into the red line and then climb it. Thinking about it, most of the Straw Hats were sent places in the Blues, Paradise, or in Luffy's case, the Calm Belt. No one went to the New World as far as we know. So Kuma may have achieved that by sending them flying sideways across the Calm Belt rather than over the red line. The one question I guess would be Zoro. He was sent to Kurigana Island, and we still have no idea where that is. You'd think it was in the New World, but maybe not. Warlords have been known to set up shop in Paradise as well. But it would make sense that Kuma is now finally coming to Egghead Island so that we can wrap up the Bonnie story. Speaking of, we see a bit more of that iconic pre-time skip Bonnie moment where Sakazuki took her into custody, which is pretty damn consistent considering it's been 13 years since it was drawn, with one thing, which is that Oda chooses not to draw Bonnie's defeated crew. They're all strategically obscured by smoke and dust and such. Like most Worst Generation crews, I think that this is just Oda pretending that they never existed, because it would make the story much more complicated to juggle. For example, if this sort of thing had happened with the Heart Pirates, then Law would have had to have his own whole off-screen arc to go and rescue them. But with Bonnie, we need to keep her focused on the Kuma business, so, you know, there is no crew. Then there was a very clever transition back to Egghead Island. We have a scene featuring Kuma, then Kuma, he disappears. Cut to Egghead Island, and the very first character we see is a Mark III pacifista. So it's almost like we're following Kuma as a thread through this chapter. And this is the event we've been waiting for. I was pleasantly surprised to see Luffy using Snake Man. After the fight with Lucci, I was kind of afraid that all fights going forward would be Gear 5th or nothing, because I still don't really see any reason to not use Gear 5th immediately. The other gears all have drawbacks. There's the classic Gear 2 and Gear 3rd of shaving off lifespan. All of the Gear 4ths involve huge haki investments. And 5th, I don't know, 5th just seems like the right choice for any situation, because what can the other gears do that 5th can't? I don't know. But I loved it because Snake Man is an underutilized power-up. This is actually only the third time we've seen Luffy use it. There was the first fight against Katakuri, then very briefly against Kaido, and now with Kizaru. So there seems to be a requirement that his opponent begins with the letter K. But actually, we've seen Snake Man used as many times as Gear 5th now, with Luffy's third use of that coming at the end of the chapter, and wow, that was cool. But all things considered, I think this is a smart move by Luffy. Not counting all of the wacky toon physics, I guess Snake Man is his fastest form. So if you're facing someone whose key feature is speed, then yeah, it's a solid decision. And also, to be fair to Luffy, it's working out pretty damn well. He is forcing Kizaru to block a lot, although he's definitely nowhere near taking this fight seriously yet. Kizaru is more mildly intrigued, confirming that, ooh, this certainly is the man who beat Kaido, I guess. And I think Kizaru severely underplays Kaido. I don't know if Kizaru ever fought Kaido or any of the emperors, but no, this isn't quite it. Then again, and I say this quite often, but Kizaru is the man who offered to go to Wano on his own to deal with Big Mom and Kaido. He thought that he could tank them. He thinks big of himself, Big Admiral Boy. Something I really loved was when Kizaru did what I suppose we'd call an offensive retreat, because in an instant he moved kilometers away so that he could accelerate back to kick Luffy. A pretty crazy cool attack, because it looks like Kizaru actually moves into it head first. His head was the first thing to become light. And this also touched on the more general annoyance of fighting Kizaru, which is that he's made of light. Light is bright, it is blinding. And there's a panel of Luffy being blinded by it, going, So what he probably needs to do is make some sunglasses, like he made goggles out of his hair when he was fighting Kaido that one time. Something else we should flag is that Luffy was being even less serious than we thought as well, because if you look at all of his hits, there is no black lightning. So he hasn't even begun to infuse or project Conqueror's Haki. And as far as we know, at the moment, he isn't even using advanced armament. Although it's actually a very good question as to how advanced armament works versus Logia uses. So the ultimate idea that the stage 5 of armament Haki is to bypass natural defenses to destroy something from the inside. But if a body is intangible, is there anything to destroy? Or does Haki make it tangible and then destroy it from the inside, which sounds brutal, but these are things that I do not know yet. One thing we do know is that Bonnie is back to normal again. We had a bit of a weird chapter with her previously, noting Bonnie's 180 mood switch to happy hyper team player, which was suspicious, very suspicious, but we're back to regular Bonnie now. So I think think this probably puts all of the conspiracy theories to rest. And I guess it really is whatever she saw in Kuma's bubble that has quite firmly put her in Vegapunk's camp. Although I really wish that, we got to see the cathartic moment that she did. I guess it's coming along with Kuma, maybe. But then Bonnie attacks Kizaru with a very deadly sounding technique, which Kizaru has to dodge. He goes, whoa. So I wonder if Bonnie has the ability to age or de-age people out of existence, to do a flat out one-hit kill. There's also a very cool moment that I guess almost happens with Frankie. It's a cool moment that I could have seen happening. Frankie fires on Kizaru with a radical beam, technology that Frankie got from Vegapunk's research on Kizaru. And I think it would have been really cool to see Kizaru react to this, or even counter it with his own beam. Maybe say something snide like, oh, I guess everyone can use laser beams these days. Or however it is that he laughs. I don't know, that was just my default snob laugh. But instead, Kizaru, to be fair, dude has his eye on the mission and he heads straight to Stella. And here's an underplayed moment. The other Vegapunks finally cracked York's code. So in theory, yeah, this plan is good to go. Or at least it would have been had Kizaru not destroyed the Vegaforce 1 mere seconds before they cracked it. Which Kizaru does deliberately to, be a bit of a prick. Kizaru knows how much the Vegaforce means to Stella. The robot of dreams and everything. So this is Kizaru trying to quite literally destroy Stella's dream. Not very nice. But the Vegaforce 1 was integral to their escape plan. So we're in quite the dire situation now. If only there was some other massive robot that we could use instead. Very convenient, and we'll get there, because there's a lot of questions about our Iron Giant friend. But first, Giant Luffy appears again at the end. I love Giant Luffy, and I'm so glad that Oda continues to make use of this idea. Grabbing Kizaru was pretty wild, and of course it's a very similar thing to what he did with Kaido, crashing through a hole in the roof and removing the enemy by force. And I suppose we may have just begun a brand new round of roof piece. Everyone who sees Luffy do this does the now customary eye pop. Nami, Usopp, and Stella. Also Atlas does, but her reaction is kind of hidden by the Don sound effect on the page. But it is cool to note though, because she's a cyborg who can change faces. So Luffy's toon powers are now affecting the facial expressions of machines as well. And it gives me hope for a potential wacky situation where Gear 5th Luffy could potentially force an expression out of Kuma if he appears as well. Although I don't know how much hope I should have for that, because it didn't work on someone who currently has much more emotion than Kuma. The one person who should really be eye-popping the most is not. It's Kizaru, and he here maintains total composure, which I would not have expected given that Kaido turned into a toon instantly. However, there may be an explanation for this because it seems like Kizaru kind of expected this. So I wonder just how much he knows about Gear 5th. I mean, the world government definitely at least know what the form looks like because it's on Luffy's bounty poster. So assumedly there was an agent who got to see the effects of Gear 5th and wacky toon powers and everything, who I think is Guernica. But as much as the world government may have tried to keep it quiet, word spread about Luffy's abilities. But it was something so unbelievable that even first-hand sources would be questionable. And now Kizaru's coming face to face with it and he's going, well, I guess this thing does exist after all, And while he isn't eye-popping, his expression is far from calm. He's got the classic Oda worried sweat drop, and it's probably the most emotionally tilted that we've ever seen Kizaru. So this is where the fun begins. And look, I haven't watched enough Tom and Jerry to be able to predict where this is going to go, which is very exciting. To me, One Piece is at its best when every new chapter is effectively just a question mark. But the real cliffhanger of the chapter is, of course, the awakening of our ancient robot boy. We see two panels, one of it resting as we found it, but with the sound effect of Luffy's Gear 5th heartbeat, which is implied to have triggered the robot's reactivation. And this comes with questions, so many questions. 1. Why didn't the robot reawaken the first time Luffy used Gear 5th against Rob Lucci? Because we definitely saw the musical beat playing throughout their fight. Is it specifically, I guess, because Luffy's now a giant? So his heart is physically bigger and therefore I guess beating louder, at least loudly enough for a dormant robot to register? Secondly, what does our Iron Giant plan to do from here? From what we know, the dude was programmed with a very specific mission in mind, so is it going to try and head back to Marijois to finish what it started? But then again, how would it even get there? Marijois is ever so far away. You'd almost need a second robot with some sort of magical fruit power that could teleport it to the red line. That is such a specific requirement though, so there's no way it could ever happen. But if it did, imagine the world nobles though. If the Iron Giant showed up, then this would be the third time that their Holy Land got attacked in a matter of weeks. Sakazuki would go down as the most unpopular fleet admiral in history. In fact, he might already be doing that. But question number the third, and this is a big one that I didn't even think of immediately. But exactly which Joy Boy was it that woke this Iron Giant back up 200 years ago, when it originally attacked Marijois and couldn't be stopped until it ran out of energy? Because up until now, we've been thinking that it needed the ancient fuel source, and that waking it up would have been a very intentional move because someone would have had to refuel it. But from what we're seeing here, it could have been someone awakening the Nika Nika no Mi 200 years ago. We know a fair bit about the last 800 to 900 years of One Piece history, but the timeline at around the 200-year mark has close to no information, particularly regarding characters who lived around then. But I now think it might be very likely that there was another person who had this devil fruit ability and awakened it. In fact, maybe every century or so, someone new managed to awaken the fruit and keep the sun god legend going. So much so that even to this very day, characters like Who's Who still hear about it in their cat prisons. Although it was implied by an elephant that Luffy was the first person to do this since Joy Boy. However, Zunesha's specific words were that this is the first time that he had heard the drums of liberation in 800 years. Meanwhile, the five elders just say that the world government has been trying to obtain the fruit for 800 years. They don't comment on its awakening. So it is possible that it awakened, but Zunesha wasn't in the area to hear the beat. Like how originally the Iron Giant wasn't able to hear Luffy's first Gear 5th. But the fun question is, can Luffy issue commands to the robot? Or will he be imaginative enough to try and pilot the robot using wacky Gear 5th tech? Because there's no telling what his imagination is going to do with this brand new, well, I guess not that, this really old toy. So you let me know in the comments, what is your outrageous prediction for what Luffy is going to do from here? Kizaru is here, and there. In fact, we have a whole army of, Kizarai for Luffy to deal with, and so now we can finally answer the hypothetical question of who would win, one Emperor or 100 Marine Admirals. Oh, and also one of the five elders is about to make a big move. Is that big move to transform into his Shadow Beast and take command of Egghead Island? Or is that big move to go and relieve himself as the elderly must do every half hour or so? That right there is the beauty of One Piece. At this stage in the series, each and every panel holds an entire multiverse of potential. We could be about to see the most epic thing in the series to date, or we could see an old man relieving himself. I don't know about you, but I say let's roll the dice. Or maybe spinning the roulette wheel would be a better way to start, because one of my favorite parts of this chapter was Luffy spinning Kizaru. It was a really trippy series of panels, or I guess just one panel in particular. I don't think I ever expected to see this sort of art of Kizaru, because he's not making any sort of facial reaction, but he is still clearly undergoing shenaniganry unbefitting of a man in his position. It also gives us another direct comparison to Kaido though, because Gear 5th Luffy seems to have the same opening moveset. It goes 1, become big, like really big, 2, grab opponents, and 3, spin the crap out of said opponents. The thing is, Kizaru might be proving his confidence here because he seems to be taking this a lot better than Kaido did. By this time, Kaido had already eye-popped. In fact, he'd eye-popped twice. He did a double popper. But Kizaru, he has yet to succumb to the duress of the Toon powers. And right now, it doesn't feel like Luffy's devil fruit is affecting him at all. What I see with Kizaru is an adult entertaining a child. Whereas with Kaido, it was like an older brother getting far too invested in the game of his younger brother. But two things come to mind about Kizaru's mind. One is that he may have incredible mental fortitude. He's seen so much happen in this world that not even a giant Toonman can prompt a reaction out of him. That or he's just completely empty in the old mind brain and just doesn't have the infrastructure in place to produce emotional expressions. And whether he intended to do this or not, Luffy throwing Kizaru into the water was pretty cool. I'm always happy when water becomes part of the fight battling equation again, given that it's, the primary weakness of devil fruit users. And it's so weird that we almost never see water come into play. But I guess that's because despite the fact that this is a pirate manga, 95% of that pirate manga takes place on large stretches of land. But this has also led to one of the most creative uses of a devil fruit I think we've ever seen in the series, and also one of the smartest when it comes to turning crisis into opportunity. Crisis, I guess, is a bit of a strong word considering Kizaru's reaction to the situation, which can be summed up as, He's flying away quite frankly, looking bored. And it's another one of those moments where no one can really give Kizaru credit for being a quick thinker, because he really does take his sweet time coming up with a solution to not drown to death. In fact, he even takes his sweet time coming to the realization that he's about to hit the water. And I thought something very clever might happen here, because there's a panel where Kizaru catches sight of the reflections of light on the water, and in that moment, I was like, he's gonna use those reflections to bounce straight back at Luffy. This is clever clever. I like this. But then he just, did the same sparkly thing that he always does. I really don't think I'm selling the cool and creative use of this devil fruit that I originally claimed. But what it turns into is pretty amazing, because it morphs into this ridiculous spectacle fight of Luffy taking on roughly a gazillion Kizaru. And something interesting that Luffy does say is that it's like fighting against the holograms, which brings up a hypothetical. If you had the photon gloves and Kizaru made these clones, could you hit them with the gloves? And if so, would Kizaru actually take damage from the hit? It's a tricky question because Luffy eventually does use Haki to defeat all of the light clones, but it goes through all of them. It doesn't solidify the Logia powers as Haki is supposed to, which I suppose just indicates that these clones are not part of the true body of Kizaru, because that's what Haki does. It lets you touch the true body of the fruit user. But also, that essentially makes the light clones immune to Haki. However, despite that, they are still able to hurt Luffy, because one of the swords scratches him. So these things are dangerous. Much more dangerous than Luffy made them look. So I wonder if dealing with the clones is what could lead us to finally getting Chekhov's photon gloves onto someone. And I love Luffy's reaction to the clones, because really, just imagine that you're a pirate in this universe. You see this, you would be shitting yourself. Because instead of facing one admiral, one is bad enough, you are now facing like the tens of admirals, hundreds maybe, you don't know. Because as far as you can see, everything the light touches is admiral, including the light. And Kizaru is not the first character in the One Piece universe to figure out how to clone themselves using magical fruit powers. However, I think, and I'm not sure about this, but I think he might be the first Logia fruit user to do so. We know that, say, for example, Robin can clone herself because the Hana Hana no Mi creates body parts. So you just recreate a whole human body. It's very much cloning in its purest and most physically accurate sense. And Doflamingo could do it, although his method is a bit more questionable. He makes a string clone, which he can then perfectly realistically color using more colored string. But honestly, Doflamingo's powers have always been just a little bit ridiculous, but here's my rationalization. He's an awakened user of strings, and thus he can manipulate the narrative threads to suit the needs of the story, even if they do, ironically, create loose ends. But the OG of cloning powers was Galdino's wax, and this was back in the day when Oda tried to explain all of the cool things it is he wanted to do. So in this case, Galdino had Miss Golden Week paint his copies. Otherwise, they were just flat white wax. In any case, clones aren't new, but this is probably my favorite application of them in One Piece so far. Although it was pretty funny when Luffy just defeated them all in one go, because this is an admiral, and how it looks on paper is that Luffy just bodied 20 admirals in one go, because they were all conveniently lined up to be brought down by a single strike. And I guess, can we just say that in fiction, clones are almost never used well? It reminds me a lot of Dragon Ball, when characters would, for some reason, use the multiform technique, and then they would somehow expect it to actually do something beneficial for them. Although I guess Naruto found a ton of great ways to use clones, more so as strategic tools, which is what Kizaru was doing here. It's forgivable because, one, it's a fictional pirate comic and it's meant to be goofy, but also it's forgivable because these aren't shadow clones. They're not capable of complex commands. What Kizaru essentially did was the equivalent of select all, and then right-clicked on Luffy to tell them to attack. At that point, Magical Fruit AI takes over, so they all move with very predictable pathing. But all in all, it was very impressive because it keeps both Luffy and Kizaru somewhat on the same plane, if not elevating Kizaru just slightly more. Because really, the whole event emphasizes that Luffy is now fighting against someone whose motivation isn't necessarily to fight back. Kizaru has made it very clear that there is a mission to be completed here, and whether he beats Luffy or not is irrelevant. In fact, engaging with Luffy is a waste of time. Unlike Kaido, whose goal was to win the fight battle, but to do so through raw dominance. This was his goal to a fault, and he did arguably cause his own defeat. But really, this is a bit of a wake-up call for Luffy. His brute toon force works better against some opponents than it does others, and there's still a lot of room to grow. I can't help but be reminded of Marineford when I'm reading this though. Luffy is now fighting on the level that those around him were fighting at during the Paramount War. He isn't just some rookie who somehow stumbled onto the stage, because all it took back then was one kick from Kizaru to pack Luffy up. And it makes me feel very proud of my rubber captain, because I remember this panel and how impossibly out of reach these three opponents felt to Luffy back then. And yeah, it took a long time to get here, but at the moment, two of these characters are already in Luffy's rearview mirror, with the third looking shockingly possible as well. And then elsewhere, we have Zoro versus Lucci, which is a completely opposite kind of fight to Kizaru and Luffy. Those two are all sorts of, wacky powers colliding, whereas here we see two very traditional martial arts clashing, just with a dash of leopard added to the mix for that One Piece flavor. It's nice to see awakened Lucci again, and the only word I have is respect. Respect to Lucci for respecting Zoro enough to slip straight into Leopard God mode because he's gonna need it. And Zoro's going in pretty heavy as well. You can see some black lightning coming off the swords and also the sort of hockey flames that coat them. So this is Zoro in Kingslayer mode. And it's potentially concerning because that does put Zoro on a clock. When he first used this ability against King, he said, "How should I stabilize my hockey then? If I have to keep exuding it at this level, it'll kill me." But no, that's perfect. And as far as we know, this perfection is still the case, so Zoro can't do this for long. But also, how long does he really need? To Zoro, this is just another exhibit at the combat zoo. And I do feel a bit bad for Zoro because ever since Pika, he has done nothing but fight animals. For the most part though, Zoro and Lucci are just smack-talking one another, which means that for either Zoro or Lucci, one of them is going to be subject to the classic, "Well, that didn't age well," depending on who wins. I will say it would be the ultimate insult for Lucci to lose at this point, because not only could he not beat Luffy, he's not even worthy of taking on Luffy anymore. Actually, you know what? It's already a bit of a defeat for Lucci, because earlier on in the arc he said that he wouldn't recognize Luffy as an emperor. But now, contradiction, here he is recognizing Zoro as the second in command of an emperor. So I dare say that Rob Lucci has already lost the mental battle here. And look, I don't use this term lightly, but I think that Rob Lucci has fallen off. He was once considered one of the great ultimate villains of the One Piece world, and now he's so desperate for relevance again that he's trying to restart old beef against the Straw Hats and leeching off the clout of Kizaru. It's just sad to see, really. Like Kaku, who wasn't even in the chapter, which in his case was sad not to see. I guess he's still stuck in a bubble somewhere, but since everyone left the control room, I have no idea what they did with him, if anything. Speaking of bubbles, the Vega tank is such a cool vehicle. It looks like a combination of 3 different technologies. The body is made from a bubble, which contains metal components required to do all of the vroom vroom commands, and then it appears to have wheels or maybe tires or maybe both that are made of clouds, which are really cool because they seem to warp and distort quite a bit. It's a really great fusion of fictional ideas, 2 ridiculous fantasies being used in a scientific way. And it's stuff like this that makes One Piece feel like a living, breathing world. And I'm also just really glad that even at this late stage, we're still getting to see new devices. The one unfortunate thing about Egghead is that the pacing is so tight that I feel like Oda didn't get enough time in the playground to explore a lot of these fun future ideas that he won't have an excuse to draw in future arcs. I think that wanting more is almost always a good criticism though, unless it's something like, say, wanting more of Kaido's backstory or wanting a backstory. Although I will say, the anime episode recently, I think they did a much better job with that than the manga did. But one last note before we move on, I also like that older man Vegapunk puts on goggles to drive his tank, sort of like in the ye olde days when you had to wear driving goggles because cars weren't enclosed. Let's be real though, drawing cool technology was a mere sub-goal of Oda's time with Egghead Island, because I was made aware of something very recently, and now as a result I am very hyper-aware of when it happens. And in this case, that happening is Nami's butt. So there's this very cool wide shot of giant Luffy holding Kizaru, with everyone looking on, and Oda has made sure to leave just enough room in the panel for Nami's butt. And you might think, why are you pointing this out, you perverted man on the internet? It's because there's a reason for this. It's because, and I mean this in all seriousness, it's because drawing butt specifically has been one of Oda's big Egghead goals. In the most recent SBS, Eiichiro Oda said the following: "For the arc of Egghead, I wanted to show a completely different design from modern design, and I used clothes that clearly revealed the buttocks. However, I realized that since I had never drawn panties before, I was known to be unable to draw buttocks. So I specifically studied the method of drawing erotic buttocks and gradually became good at drawing buttocks." That's the sort of insightful gold that you're missing if you don't read the volumes. But, and that's a very appropriate conjunction, it would seem that Egghead Island is a bit of an artistic study for Oda. Sort of like how Monet painted haystacks at different times of day to see the effect that light would have. It's like that, except Eiichiro Oda draws butts at different times of day and at a rather wide variety of different angles. So that's why you get panels like this. Note that every male character has their posterior off panel or covered by a speech bubble, but we have made space for Nami and Robin, because that's the study. This right here is what Egghead Island is all about. And you know, Eiichiro Oda might not have been wrong to question his abilities or previous lack thereof, because I found a thread from the Worst Gen forums in 2019 titled, "Why is Oda so arse at drawing arse?" So my conclusion is that Eiichiro Oda saw this and he said to himself, constructive criticism accepted, and hence why Nami, Robin, and Bonnie are all in panties. With Bonnie though, it looks like our Kuma idea was right, just substitute Kuma for Sentomaru. He's the one who saved Bonnie from getting hit when she crossed the Frontier Dome, and we were given a pretty epic shot of our guy Sentomaru here. And it reminds me of some of the greatest One Piece panels. Stuff like Whitebeard dying while standing, and even more so Zora's nothing happened moment. So what I'm going to do is we're going to call this something happened, because no one denies it. But Bonnie's in a bit of a bad situation now, because she's outside of the Frontier Dome and can't get back in. Hence why Old Man Apple, Atlas, Sanji, and also Frankie are now heading down to rescue her. And Dad, look, am I the only one who thinks that this is a terrible idea? I mean, sure, I understand Stella's feelings, but he is jeopardizing the entire mission that Stussy got fingered for. I guess our saving grace here is Sanji, and look, Frankie's coming along, he might be important as well. I can't help but feel like this is an opening for tragedy though. For Stella or Atlas, maybe both. Because I have no doubt that we'll save Bonnie, but I expect that to come at a cost. So I suppose what this does do is it gives some great potential for a Kuma entrance, by which I mean the real Kuma, because at the moment, none of the crew can really help Bonnie. So if she finds herself in a desperate situation, then it really is up to Dad to save the day. Although now that the Mark III pacifista are back on our side, the situation is more like Bonnie and her army of robot dads versus the Marines, which may actually trigger Bonnie if she sees the Marines attacking the pacifista. However, this is unlikely to last long due to Saint Saturn, because I think that we all see what's about to happen here. The way the command structure works, I mean, it's a bit vague with what happened, but basically Kizaru beat Sentomaru, and then I believe he used Sentomaru's authority chip to command the pacifista. Some people have said that it might have been Kizaru's own chip. I don't know about that. Pretty sure it was Sentomaru's. But then, or I guess now, Atlas as a Vegapunk has a higher authority tier and has reversed that command. But Saturn still exists to reverse that reversal. And I think it's going to be quite shocking for all involved because very few people know that Saint Saturn is even here. Even amongst the Marines, it's been kept secret. But Saturn has to act here. Otherwise, the Marines are going to take insane and very preventable losses. Which is another cliffhanger that may or may not be addressed in the next chapter. A very classic Oda maneuver. To set up a series of cliffhangers one after the other, like the Iron Giant. That was a huge moment in the last chapter and it isn't touched on at all here. To be fair, it's been asleep for hundreds and hundreds of years, so it must have one hell of a morning routine to complete before it can truly begin its day of destruction. But you let me know in the comments, what are you more excited to see, the old man or the robot? This is a devil fruit that actually earns its name, because One Piece has taken a sharp turn from wacky fun comedy to visceral horror experience with the appearance of what could be our first literal demon in the series. I mean, you've heard of Demon Child Nico Robin, but this is Demon Granddaddy St. J. Garcia Saturn, and he has no time or patience for your assorted antics, nor does he have the strategic nudity for your aesthetic pleasures. In fact, it's really quite the opposite. You're not allowed to look at- no, I shouldn't look at- You're not allowed to look at him at all, because if you do, then your head will explode. And look, there's nowhere else that we could possibly start because a lot happens in this chapter, but crap on my toast and call it Vegemite. This may be the first time in One Piece where the name Devil Fruit accurately describes this new power. In this chapter, Saint Saturn emerged from what appears to be a demonic spell circle and he assumed the form of a yokai, specifically an Ushi-Oni, which you can see depicted here, and I love yokai. In case you don't know, yokai is a general term for supernatural entities in Japanese mythology, many of which come equipped with really grotesque tales, this one included actually, and yet they're almost always drawn in such derpy ways. I mean, just look at this guy. He's just roaming around rural Japan going Saturn, however, is not derpy looking, surprisingly, and there's actually something seriously unsettling about his presence. A sense of terror that I don't recall ever having felt in One Piece before, because it's just, it's just not that kind of series. But mate, when that Marine looked at Saturn and his head exploded, that sent the coldest of chills down my body. That legitimately may have been one of the top 10 times that I was genuinely shocked by One Piece. Because here's the thing, I don't record reactions to chapters because I'm generally a very boring reader. I just sort of sit there in silence and go, that's nice. That or, that's not nice. But when this happened, I yelled, Jesus! And what makes it so much more effective, and yes, I'm gonna go into full Oda jerk-off mode here, but what made this moment so shocking was that something very similar happens earlier on in the chapter with Bonnie's powers, which I think answers a very simple sinister question that I've had about Bonnie's abilities, which is the idea of, oh, can you just age someone to death? That or age them otherwise out of existence, I guess in either direction. Because what appears to happen here is that Bonnie, for a brief moment, ages the Marines to the point where they're decaying skeletons and then snaps them back from death. There is some question to exactly how this fruit functions, which this happens with anything Bonnie does. Because Vice Admiral Clamshell on a stick is confused about what happened and implies that it may have been a hallucination invoked by Bonnie, maybe showing the Marines an image of their future selves. I don't know though, I feel like my first impression is more consistent with what we know about Bonnie's fruit, the one where she's literally edging death, and maybe that state happens so quickly that it's only perceptible to the people experiencing it. So to Vice Admiral Clamshell on a stick, he's just like, mates, come on now, it's just a little whippy sword. What, are you all afraid of a bit of and who knows, maybe completely separately they are. Perhaps some of them have had experiences with Kujaku and have a bit of a whip-based PTSD. Either way though, this is a horrifying power and I can see why it mentally broke those Marines. But circling all the way back to, well, the point of talking about this, it's a horrifying power but it's played for gags. When the Marine turns into a skeleton, he has that classic comical reaction and then he faints when he turns back like a Pokemon. Very much reminding us that at its core, One Piece is just a fun, wacky adventure, where chances are nothing horrible is actually going to happen ever. But then the same thing happens with Saint Saturn, but different. The Marines are told not to look at him, and the one who does has his head exploded brutally and viscerally. And look, I really cannot emphasize just how much this sort of thing does not happen in One Piece. Oda very rarely, if ever, chooses to depict this kind of horror. Sometimes One Piece does unsettling stuff, yes. The example people usually bring up is Trafalgar Law having to hide in a pile of corpses, which is also horrific, but in a different way. That's more human-based horror, the sort of sickening commentary on the potential evils of humanity. Whereas this is straight up otherworldly demon horror. And I think it's very fitting that the first time Oda has done something like this is with a creature that appears to be genuinely demonic. And if Saturn had just appeared in this form, honestly, I probably would have laughed, because it looks all twisted and stuff, but it's still very much in keeping with the sort of goofy One Piece. But as the chapter went on, I began to think that Saturn, in addition to looking like a spider and a bull, also looks a bit like a sheep, because his beard expands and it gives him the appearance of an unsheared sheep. Oh, and it also succinctly answers the question of what would happen if Black Maria fucked Santa Claus. But also leading up to this moment has been pretty casual and fun. Even Luffy versus Kizaru has been a pretty chill affair that neither side have taken particularly seriously. That's why it was so important to have that head exploding moment before the design was revealed. It was a, no, you sit up and take this seriously. Because yes, this is One Piece, but One Piece is not screwing around anymore. And looking at Saturn after that, I was just in awe, but the bad kind of awe. The kind of awe that makes you go, oh no. And it's one of the best character entrances in the series in my opinion. I think that Kaido jumping off a Sky Island is still number one, and it's going to be pretty impossible to top that, but this is a contender. One more thing I liked about the head explosion is that it's an ability that looks like it needs to be actively used by Saturn, because his eyes go all glowy in the general direction of that poor marine dude, which probably explains how someone like Warpole could have seen the transformation and gotten away without his head exploding, because the elders didn't notice him until it was too late. And speaking of, I have a lot more sympathy for Warpole's situation now. Before it seemed like he was afraid because he understood the political consequences of what he saw, but it's actually much more simple than that. Warpole saw 6 hell beasts conjured into existence. An authentic nightmare that from this moment on, he knew that he was going to be chased until a state of horrific death had been inflicted upon him. Meanwhile, Sabo, cool guy, definitely had a much more relaxed approach to things, all things considering. And what I don't think was quite captured in the official Viz translation was where he says, "To think that there was such a diabolical truth at the pinnacle of the world." You see, there's a bit of a dispute over this because other Japanese speakers have said that Sabo more accurately states something like, and I'm gonna read this, "There was no way I, Sabo, could have known that hell was located here, all the way at the top of the world." Something more like that. And after this chapter, I would have to agree with them because that fits perfectly. And even Saturn sounds demonic with his musings of, what's this? The surface? Oh, it's been a long time since I've been here. Which sounds straight out of Diablo, like something a primeval would say after finding their way back to Sanctuary. And this fruit does seem to exist almost as a direct antithesis to the Sun God. Whilst Luffy's powers are lighthearted and happy, Saturn Zoan immediately plunged us into serious, bleak, and utterly hopeless darkness. And it does further contort the idea that these demons are occupying the skies and masquerading as benevolent gods of the world. And I think it's highly likely that the rest of the elders, as well as Imu, have devil fruits based on other yokai. And we may even be able to extrapolate exactly exactly what kind of yokai they are with the silhouettes we've already been given. And interestingly, the circle that Saturn emerges from appears to be marked with the number 5 as well as a 5-point pentagram. So very in keeping with the Elder's trademark number. And I wonder if this implies that this circle is an ability they all have access to with their various other almost certainly yokai devil fruits. Or perhaps each Elder is assigned a number, with Saturn being 5 and perhaps the lowest. The others would be 1 to 4 and Imu could be 0. And just one other intriguing feature of Saturn's powers is that from the spell circle we see a black lightning effect, which could imply an either overwhelming conqueror's haki presence, or it could simply be a feature of whatever mythological magic is being invoked. It's hard to say at the moment, but it's still worth noting. So Saturn of course comes equipped with our now standard awakening shoulder clouds, a fairly invaluable fashion accessory in this era of One Piece. I mean, it's practically a faux pas to be a Zoan user and caught without one. And I'm starting to wonder if Oda has now redefined what a Zoan awakening is, because post Sun God Fruit, all new Zoan awakenings we've seen clad their users in these clouds. Even Kaku's awakening, and he's just a giraffe, not like a mythological giraffe, just a giraffe. But Zoans were actually the first awakenings we ever saw back in Impel Down with the Jailer Beasts. And arguably Monster Chopper with any slobby, but the term awakening wasn't used until Impel Down. So I wonder if the Jailer Beasts have incomplete awakenings because they don't have their fancy clouds. And if so, that actually gives me a lot of hope for a new Chopper form in the future. Before we leave the Saturn topic though, look, I just want to put a thing out there. I'm assuming that this is a devil fruit. However, it's not said anywhere in this chapter that this is a fruit power. And look, I'm being potentially very intolerant to Saturn's ability identity by assuming that he is a fruit user. So what if he's just a demon? A creature so old and so kept in the shadows that the world has completely forgotten that these things even exist if they ever knew to begin with. I don't think that's likely because the trend in One Piece is that almost every weird thing that happens is explainable by a magical fruit. But maybe, just maybe, the history of this world is hiding a few more secrets than we thought. To a bit of administration now, we've got a series of pacifista commands taking place in chapter 1094. And I guess all I have to say is that, yeah, that didn't last long. Atlas takes command and then Saturn almost immediately takes command back. And we also had another quick recap of the authority chip hierarchy. And look, this is a minuscule thing, but I feel like Oda has hammered in the authority hierarchy just a little too much. Almost every time a command is given to the pacifista or the seraphim, there's this quick recap of how the system works. And especially in this chapter, I think it would have been great not to have that recap, because it highlights that Atlas's actions are almost certainly futile, and there may even have been a good moment of shock to have Saturn take command and then do the reminder, rather than flag for the 100th time that yeah, he's definitely gonna do it. But in stark contrast to the Saturn events, Luffy vs Kizaru continues throughout the chapter, and it's as lighthearted as ever with a few key developments. One that we're touching on is the potential limitations of Gear 5th again. It looks like we've confirmed that Gear 5th can only really be used in short bursts, much like the gears before it, because after fighting Kizaru for some time, Luffy has run out of cartoon energy just like he did against Kaido. So I guess what he needs to do now is sort of like rejig his heartbeat again to the drums of liberation. But if Gear 5th was a boss fight, then Kizaru has now pushed Luffy into phase 2. I also loved Luffy's punch through Kizaru's head, and every time he uses a power like this, I feel a sense of phantom pain, because it just looks unpleasant to experience at the very least. That's probably an understatement. And even Kizaru admits that, this isn't a great situation to be in. And he and Luffy cancel each other out at the end of the chapter. Or I suppose more accurately, Luffy cancels them both out. Oh, but the really fun thing is that it looks like Kizaru might have actually made things worse for himself, because he shoots Luffy, which sends Luffy spinning, and that spinning may have ultimately added force to the eventual landed attack. And it's just amazing to see a panel of a character thinking while his brain is being quite literally fisted. This is art. But if I had to guess, I would say that neither Luffy nor Kizaru are going to be down for too long. However, it may be just long enough for something truly tragic to happen to the group currently standing in front of Spider Saturn. So let's talk about Jewelry Bonnie. She's a very important thread throughout this chapter, and at the end it seems to be implied that it was Saturn who gave the order for the gutting of Kuma's personality. Something that Bonnie must have seen in the flashback that we didn't see. Hence why she's all good with Vegapunk now, not his fault. And it makes sense because we see his title again in the chapter, but Saturn is the warrior god of science and defense. So Kuma, as a science, would very much be under Saturn's jurisdiction. And as a recap, right now we have Bonnie, Sanji, Frankie, Frankie, Atlas, and Stella standing, sitting, and lying in their assorted positions before Saint Saturn. And even with Sanji in the group, I don't think this is looking amazing for any individuals here, apart from, of course, Saturn. Stella obviously knows Saturn because we saw the cover story where he went to meet the 5 Elder Stars. But now we can officially say that the first Straw Hats to meet an Elder Star were Frankie and Sanji. That's probably not an accolade that either of them are particularly pleased with right now, but it is what it is. One moment I did really like before we got to this point was tracking Bonnie down, because it was one of the rare occasions where Oda made great use of Sanji's pervert gag. The idea of his lady radar, and having Stella going, you know what, that doesn't sound like science to me, but let's go with it. And the other time I remember this working really well was on Punk Hazard, when he was able to hear that Tashigi was in trouble and came to save her. And I actually don't think it's out of the question that this isn't more than a gag. Due to his innate desires and willpower, Sanji could have accidentally trained his observation haki to be particularly sensitive to women, and I would 100% buy that as an explanation. But the final moment of big drama in the chapter is of course Bonnie stabbing Saturn, which is very emotional and everything, but look, I'm gonna be that guy and call Bonnie a bit of a hypocrite. Because it's not lost on me that this here jewelry Bonnie is the very same person who stopped that there Zoro cut slicing a world noble on Sabati, and now here she is stabbing the very noblest of nobles. Then again, what has she got to fear? Well, what are they gonna do? Call an admiral down? And it's already happening. May as well kill the old man. And what I like is that Bonnie chooses to attack Saturn with the most archaic and painful thing that she can find. This isn't a very well thought out act. It's sheer anger and pain. Because if it was well thought out, then Bonnie might consider using her fruit abilities to age Saturn into an even more decrepit state, or even give him a near-death experience like the Marines earlier. Although story-wise, that probably wouldn't work. Oda would say something like, nah mates, his hakis are too strong for magical fruit powers. But it doesn't really matter because there's something I really like about her using the sword, and that's the raw lashing out. It's the whole, you took my dad away from me, so now I'm going to take the you away from you. Look, I haven't thought this out very well. Stab. And the look on Saturn's face after being stabbed is just, really? And I think we all know that no real damage has been done and that Saturn hasn't exactly been taken by surprise here. Actually, he might have been, but it's more the surprise of, Bonnie, mate, this is a surprise because I didn't expect you to do the stupidest thing possible. This right here is why I am in charge of the world. Also, if it turns out that Bonnie is actually a child, then this is like an old man watching his grandchild throw a tantrum. A sort of, look, I really didn't want to deal with this today, so just please calm down, child. But look, we've got 2 Vegapunks on the kill list standing right in front of Saturn right now. So you let me know in the comments, what are the odds of either Atlas or Stella surviving this encounter? This is what we've been waiting for. Forget summoning demons, forget beating an admiral, and you know what, we'll even put Elbaf on hold for now. Because this is the Bartholomew Kuma flashback, and this is no ordinary story. Because this is a backdoor story entrance into God Valley. This could genuinely be another Odin scale flashback, because there's so much to cover. Kuma is a character who is so interwoven with so much One Piece world history. Even before we knew he was on God Valley 38 years ago at the time of the incident, this is just another thing to add to the Kuma pile. Before we get into everything though, this channel has been nominated for La Gala Pirata 2023 for Best International One Piece Content Creator. The voting takes place in phases, and I'd highly encourage you all to click the link in the description and vote for your favorite One Piece channel in this category. It doesn't have to be me, I won't be offended much, but there's a ton of other great people in the category, including Tekking, BDA Lore, and even Arta, the Library of Ohara. And the winner will receive this Golden Choo Choo Award, which, not gonna lie, I really want that dog. So go vote in La Gala Pirata, but for now, we have so much to talk about. Saint Saturn is massive. I definitely didn't get the impression that he was anywhere near this huge from the last chapter. He's a proper Diablo boss and everything, although I have to say that he's gotten a bit pissy all of a sudden. It's not something I've really realized until now, but we almost never see the elders express emotion. So it's really weird to see Saturn doing anything in a non-neutral manner. The one time I do recall elder emotion was when they ordered the eradication of Ohara. It seems like they really regretted needing to do that. But Saturn has gone full goblin, and I don't know if this is just a weird translation thing, we'll have to wait for the official to confirm, but he has a very interesting line about why is it that when humans are told not to do something, they do it anyway. Because if Saturn has chosen to use the word humans over, say, people, then that's him actively separating himself from humanity. Which, as a world noble, I guess he already does, but it's not the same, you know? When someone like St. Charles looks down on humans, that's just arrogance. Biologically, he's no better than any human, and in fact, he's probably objectively worse due to all of the inbreeding. But when Saturn says something like this, it makes me believe that he is something else entirely. And it's interesting that he allows anyone at all to see this form, because if I was someone who genuinely believed in all of the justices and the good that the world government does for the world, then I'd probably be pretty put off by learning that my glorious leader is a literal demon. And there's lots of Marines looking at him in this chapter. I suppose they all have the appropriate rank. But as expected, Saturn took the hit from Bonnie on purpose. My personal theory is that perhaps Saturn has been an emotionless old demon for so long that he'll do anything just for the sensation of feeling something again. And I kinda get it. I mean, when's the last time that he would have gotten to leave the old folks home, stretch his spider legs a bit? Probably not in a very long time. So you may as well get penetrated while you have the opportunity. But there's not a whole lot of hope for salvation here at the moment. Luffy is down for now, Zoro is still fighting Lucci, and Sanji, I guess, tripped and fell or something, and now he's scraped his knee and in a bad mood. Being real though, it was pretty wow to see Sanji blown back by, I don't even know what to call this force. It could be advanced armament haki doing the projection effect, but the glowing eyes, those evil, sinister glowing eyes, would imply that it has something more to do with Saturn's innate demonic abilities. Maybe a literal and far less flamboyant death wink. Kizaru is awake but unable to move, and I think that our Lightman may have overestimated himself a bit here because, just saying, when Kaido got head-fisted, he kept on fighting. But it's pretty crazy to see an Admiral in full-on Katakuri defeat position, although Oda has selected a very salacious angle to showcase this defeat with the open leg crotch shot. He's doing a lot better than Luffy though, who has reverted back to his black hair, which leads to one of my favorite moments in the chapter. Saturn goes to kill Luffy with his, what do you even call it? The spider poker? He does that, and so it's up to Frankie to save the day. And how does he do that? By punching Luffy out of the way. I love it. And there's a bit more Frankie hype here because Saturn acknowledges him, and Frankie even has a bit of his own joy boy moment because he's in a horrendous, hellish, and potentially hopeless situation right now, but he starts laughing at the whole ordeal, likely because of how proud he is that his captain Luffy demands the full attention of the world's toppest of leaders. Perhaps Frankie is the true joy boy. It's almost impossible to break his spirit, and he can stretch parts of himself, I suppose. A bit of a brutal transition here though, because Saturn has decided that Bonnie will be the first to die, and her method of execution is firing squad, as Saturn orders the Marines in the immediate vicinity to aim for her head. It's very ceremonial, and it's obvious that Saturn is doing this to make a point. If he wanted Bonnie dead by now, he could have done so himself with his head poppage. But this is a staged production intended for an audience of one man, who is Stella. And Stella yells that no, Bonnie is just a child, don't do this bad thing to the child, again fueling the child Bonnie theory. And if this is true, then this moment it does become even more sickening, although maybe this is a mercy. Instead of killing Bonnie in some sort of grotesque demonic way, it's just gonna be a few quick shots to the head due to the childness. Although I do think that Saturn is enjoying this because he does do a bit of a gloat when Bonnie says that Saturn killed Kuma. After that, Saturn's all like, oh yeah, Kuma, I remember him. And then he proceeds to recount all of the terrible things that happened to Kuma, like a lovely memory of times gone by. Either way, this would be a real good moment for Kuma to show up. And on this rather dramaticsome note, we cut to a flashback that we've been waiting for approximately 15 years. Ever since Kuma first appeared on Sabadi and saved the Straw Hats, we've known that his story was incoming. And now that it's finally here, I don't know how prepared I am for it. Child Kuma is painfully adorable. In all forms, like the baby Kuma is almost surreal to see this baby with this fulsome chiseled chin. And there's also a really cool panel where you can see the sheer scale of Kuma, because as a child he's sitting next to a fully grown adult, and Kuma is already both taller as well as significantly wider than said adult. Big reveal now though, we have the name of Kuma's mysterious race, which is called the Buccaneer race, which is probably a very familiar word for English, French, or Spanish speakers. And I guess a buccaneer these days is often used as a synonym for pirate, and I guess it's because it kind of was, but not really. It's complicated. They're very interesting because buccaneers were pirates, but not pirates, and they were also privateers, but not privateers. Much like Kuma himself, who is a bit of everything, even a warlord, which of course takes inspiration from the privateer system. Also, if you look at the Wikipedia page for buccaneers, you are greeted by a portrait of a man who I'm going to go ahead and say was probably the visual inspiration for the original Shanks design. But as for buccaneers in One Piece, they appear to be a mix of humans and giants, and I suppose that Kuma Kuma would only be half Buccaneer because his mother wasn't, but even then, the dude became massive. And Kuma's whole situation is, well, look, heartbreaking isn't a strong enough word, so let's think of something else. Gut-wrenching, harrowing, ball-twisting. It's all of them. It's all of those things at the same time. You see him endure all of this torture, but when he's with his family, they smile and pretend that everything's okay. A facade that doesn't really crack until Kuma's mother dies, and we get one of the most difficult panels that I have ever had to look at in One Piece. Sometimes I call Eiichiro Oda a bit of a sadist, because he has absolutely mastered the depiction of pain. He can rip your heart out with a single facial expression. And we are ever so lucky that his main focus is on creating a fun, happy story with only the occasional bit of pain. But Kuma's father is consistently lying to keep his son's spirits up, even doing the little Nika dance, and then bam, shot in the head, which is the exact opposite of the hope it was that he was trying to instill. So the first time that Kuma hears the name Nika is also his greatest moment of despair. Well, greatest moment of despair to date. There is certainly more to come. This is only the start of the flashback. And the start of the flashback is usually when we get the lighter material. This is the lighter material. It's only going to get worse from here. It's interesting though, because in doing this, the world nobles have solidified that Kuma's last image of his father was performing the sun god dance and humming the drum beat. So they've actively reinforced Kuma's inherited will here, and as always, the world nobles continue to breed their own problems, which I think is perfectly encapsulated by the idea that the Nika name is only known by those in the worst possible positions within the world government, being slaves and prisoners, and also by the races that the world government seems to treat the harshest, the Lunarians and the Buccaneers. New question though, did Kuma know that Luffy ate the Nika Nika no Mi when he decided to help him? It's entirely possible that he did because Vegapunk knew about it, and maybe he even heard, a little slight drum of liberation with his enhanced cyborgian ears. Hence why he went to the extreme of dedicating his body to protecting the Thousand Sunny for 2 years. But it's also pretty clear that from here, Bonnie is going to be a long-time ally of the crew. I've even heard calls of Bonnie for Straw Hat, and look, I don't know if things will quite go that far, but it's possible because she now seems to have an inherited will that is directly linked to Nika. It would be fulfilling her father's legacy to see Luffy bring about the dawn of the world. But mate, we've got a lot to cover here. Unless Oda really, and I mean really, blasts through the story, we could be spending most of the rest of the year in this flashback. Realistically, there aren't that many chapters left in 2023. I think we're looking at 5 or 6 at most. And there's so much to cover with Kuma because he was evidently born into a regular family in the Sorbet Kingdom. So we need to know how he eventually goes back, becomes king, as well as earns his tyrant epithet, plus everything with the Revolutionary Army, Vegapunk, Bonnie, and even some potential world government stuff. He's one of those characters who has a finger in every pie, which is just as intriguing as it is unhygienic. The wildest part of all of this to me though is that we've also somehow stumbled our way into a God Valley flashback. Oda makes us think, now don't worry guys, this is going to be a Kuma-centric flashback. But what do you know, Kuma, he just happened to be there at the time of the God Valley incident. Good storytelling story, man. I really like the subversion of the island because most ideas surrounding God Valley have assumed that it was some sort of sacred ground of the world nobles due to the name, and I like that it's the exact opposite, and they chose God Valley because how dare it dare to even take their name. And I guess what we have going on here is something of a hunting tournament, hunting natives of God Valley and select slaves. And look, as someone who worked in theater and live events, what they're doing here sounds like a logistical nightmare. Commandeering a whole nation, that's the easy part, but now they have to figure out food, accommodation, amenities, and entertainment for the world nobles who have these absurd standards of living. This is a fire festival waiting to happen. We do also confirm that God Valley is/was in West Blue, another subversion because it's generally been assumed that God Valley was either in the Grand Line or the New World, because it would be a lot easier to make an island disappear in those sections of the world. Erasing a whole island in West Blue, that is next level. I know they're not world government affiliated, but the Blues, they're comparatively quiet towns. When something happens to your neighbor in a quiet blue, then word spreads quickly. And if your neighbor were to say host a fight between the future Pirate King, the hero of the Marines, and the greatest threat that the planet has ever known, it's going to be quite the task to cover that up. And also West Blue is where Ohara is/was/is, it still kind of exists. And West Blue is also noted as a location where Shanks was born, so maybe we'll actually see him be born in this flashback. Either way, I suppose what we can gather from this is that assumed father Figurland Garling had intercourse approximately 9 months ago from when this image happened. Speaking of, let's get into Garling. I was not expecting him to be so pretty. When I thought of a young Garling, I basically just pictured Shanks with the Garling hairstyle. Being real here though, Garling looks more like Robin than he does Shanks, especially because he has that specifically sculpted double parallel line Robin nose, which reminds me, Oda once drew Robin as a man, and if you switch the hairstyles, this is just 100% Garling. I guess Shanks must have gotten his looks from his mother. Although, as always, I should give the disclaimer that it's not confirmed that Garling is Shanks' father. He could be an uncle or a cousin, a brother maybe? Not a brother. Maybe a brother? Nah, not a brother. But they are both members of the Figurland family. And Garling has all of the world noble women fawning over him, so he's like an even more obnoxious Cavendish. I loved his introduction panel, but it did highlight one minor thing that does tend to annoy me about One Piece, which is that whenever Oda draws swords, they often end up looking really weird. He doesn't really use straight lines, so they often have this sort of jelly effect happening. It's like he does everything by eye and just settles for the first line that comes out and rolls with it. Very minor thing, and speaking of minors, young Emporio Ivankov was the biggest surprise of the chapter. Even though Ivankov and Kuma are closely connected, I wasn't expecting them to go as far back as childhood. I love the young Eva design. The, what should we call it? The Speedo chic. It reminds me a lot of a young Frankie, which I think was very much done on purpose, especially since both of them are given very open, loud, and quote, perverse personalities. Perverse not necessarily meaning the same thing it does in English. The Japanese word used is hentai, which I'm sure you all know the meaning of. However, hentai also means transform, so that's why it commonly comes up for both Frankie and Ivankov. What a phenomenal meeting though. Ivankov is also a bit of a joy boy in his own way, because this is twice now that a character has been at their lowest and has been saved by Ivankov. Luffy and Kuma both found this face in their respective hells. And it also recontextualizes Ivankov seeing Kuma at Marineford. He says, "You creep, just because they made you a warlord doesn't mean you can fire your laser at an old friend." Turns out, not just old friends, very old friends. Almost 4 decades of knowing each other. And to make matters significantly worse, this is also where Ivankov learns that Kuma is no more. Doflamingo cheerfully informs Ivankov that Kuma is already dead. And this is one of those exchanges that I would say you don't really feel because of all of the hidden history. But stuff like this is going to hit a lot harder once this flashback is over. In fact, it already does. We also have a new character being Ginny, and I'm in two minds about her. The one thing I've resigned myself to is that she is not surviving this flashback. Whenever a completely new character comes up in a flashback who we've never met in the modern day, it's usually pretty safe to assume they're dead. The big question for me is exactly when does Ginny die? Originally, I thought, oh, she's going to be a victim of the God Valley incident, tragedy, But immediately after that, the obvious hit me. Ginny is Bonnie's mother, right? Like, she has to be. They're visually very similar, but Ginny's voracious introduction and the big chunk of meat is definitely evoking Bonnie's hunger. And also less obviously in English, there's the name. Ginny and Bonnie are much more different in English than they are in Japanese, because both end in the katakana ni, as does the Dowager Queen Connie. I've also seen people jumping on the inexplicable bandwagon that Ginny is Luffy's mother, and I think that this is probably not the case because Ivankov didn't even know that Dragon had a son. He always suspected that Dragon had a family in East Blue because that's always the direction he'd face. And I think that would be much more difficult to hide if Luffy's mother was Ivankov's sister. And if Ginny is Ivankov's sister, does that make Ivankov Bonnie's uncle or even aunt, depending on how Ivankov is feeling at the time? As another visual note, Ginny also seems to have the same sort of hairstyle as Atlas, which isn't particularly common, so I think it's worth pointing out, just in case Ginny served as a bit of aesthetic inspiration for one of the satellites. And really, if you gave Ginny a buccaneer body, Atlas is how she'd end up looking. So if I had to guess, I would say that Ginny ends up escaping and procreating with Kuma, and that there's going to be a secondary, perhaps even tertiary layer of tragedy to this flashback after God Valley. But for now, this could be our first proper look at Rocksteady Zebek. It also opens up room for appearances from Whitebeard, Big Mom, Kaido, Stussy, Shiki, and so many others. We could even potentially see how God Valley was erased. And with that in mind, it's one of the absolute cruelest things that a fictional pirate author could have done to leave us with a break next week. Outrageous behavior by Eiichiro Oda there.